Welcome everybody to the God of High School Final Season Part 6 video, probably our largest and longest video for the series. As always, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I truly appreciate every single one of your support. Without any more delays, let's get right in. Part 6 of God of High School's final season starts right after Mugen decided to drop everything he had worked for since the beginning of the series, as we see him wake up right in front of the Supreme God, Tathagata. Mugen cuts to the chase and tells the deity that he wants to own him. And, well, there's instant chemistry here, because Tathagata is happy to hear that his new vessel's looking forward to becoming one with him. He doesn't even hide the fact that he likes Mugen's boldness. So the Supreme God transfers his essence to the former world president, and Mugen falls into a nice little trance. But in the real world, crap's about to hit the fan. That's because the Supreme God's awakening causes an absurdly huge explosion that literally destroys the moon. Everyone on Earth can only watch as the moon turns to dust and an entire army of Nephilim and disciples burst out of it. Of course, this is God of High School, so you can bet that Earth isn't safe from egregious displays of power, because it only takes a moment before New Korea gets totally leveled with another massive explosion. Oh, and bits of the moon become super hot meteorites that fall down on the planet too. So yeah, it's an entire mess. That's not even half of it, because Daewoo can easily tell that the sheer numbers of disciples and Nephilims headed for the planet are simply far too many to take out even for someone as powerful as him. Meanwhile, our main man Mori gets cheeky and tries to bash Mugen's brains in with Yui from behind. But our hero gets a rude awakening when he realizes that his sworn enemy has fully become a supreme being when Mugen blocks Yui with his finger. And as the stylized caption of God of High School says, we're now living in a new age, the advent of Maitreya. Mugen then subdues Mori with a wave of his hand, and the Monkey King can see just how much of a power boost his arch-nemesis got just when Mugen's attack not only stops our hero in his tracks, but pulverizes everything behind him. But Mugen overplays his hand. He tries to use his newfound powers to make Mori bend the knee before launching a long-range strike against him, which is a dumb move because this allows the Monkey King to find an opening and make a quick tactical retreat. So Mugen turns his attention toward the army of angels approaching. And you know this villain has his priorities twisted when he drops an unconscious P on the ground. At the same time, we learn that Odin has hitched a ride with the Nephilim and Disciple army, and this red-skinned psycho couldn't be any more excited for the chaos he's about to cause. The Nephilim and Disciples waste no time to wreak havoc, as they magically pop people's heads while Odin hypes himself up and declares that humanity's true master has finally returned to this earth after 6.57 billion years. The army and Odin then head towards Mugen and pay their respects to their new supreme god. Meanwhile, Mugen seemingly forgets all about P as he makes his way to his new underlings. Nearby, Dean stands frozen in place and is absolutely in awe of Mugen's aura. Mugen then approaches Dean and asks the boy telepathically why he stabbed him earlier. To his credit, Dean takes full responsibility for his actions and tells the truth, that he almost killed his boss earlier because he saw a vision of Mugen destroying the world. Mugen hears this and is reminded of the same convictions he threw out the window when he decided to become the Supreme God's vessel, namely how he wanted to protect the world. Dean thinks Mugen's going to pop his head like a cherry for what he did. But weirdly enough, Mugen gives Dean a gentle embrace and apologizes for giving Dean a great burden. He then tells the boy that everything is forgiven and he'll bear Dean's cross. Suddenly, Mugen spots Bongram holding a baby. It turns out that P already squeezed the bun in her oven just now, and Bongram swooped in to rescue it from this whole ridiculous mess going on in the middle of the city. Bongram prepares for the worst, thinking that Mugen's going to take out his own infant child when he goes on a whole spiel about the kid not being part of Generation X. Oh, and he basically proves he's a deadbeat dad and crap boyfriend when he tells Bongram that he won't be taking P and the baby with him because they're the lowest of the low. But hey, at least Mugen gives the baby his old pendant. While this is happening, Dean continues to be dumbfounded by Mugen's transformation until he comes to the conclusion that his boss isn't human anymore. He's now a transcendent being. But we can't be too hard on Mugen, because even though he pretty much ate his own words the moment he decided to get in bed with Tathagata, it seems that he still has his original mission in mind. This becomes obvious when he orders Odin and all the Nephilim and disciples in front of him to off themselves. The army obeys his command and takes their own miserable lives. Odin does too, but he's able to resist Mugen's influence before he could slice off his own head. Not too far away, Daewoo and Mori are busy fending off even more of these Nephilim and disciples. Mori summons the 7th owner and uses Gyeondaewon's Thunderbolt on the enemies. When that's done, Mori approaches Dean to ask if he's alright. Dean says yes, and the Monkey King couldn't be any more relieved, so he tells Dean to take a step back while he deals with his sworn nemesis. Dean continues analyzing Mugen's transformation and realizes that the man's aura has become similar to Mori when they first met. That's no exaggeration either, because the Monkey King has so much energy dripping off of him that the Nephilim and disciples automatically bend the knee when he passes them by while on his way to Mujin. And finally, these two warriors come face to face. God of High School's next chapter starts with Mujin showing us a graph that depicts how inconsequential the power differential between gods and humans are, regardless if we're talking about people who have borrowed powers or otherwise. In the meantime, the Nephilim and disciples continue committing some good old-fashioned genocide on any and all humans they can find. But then Mujin finally gets to work, as he uses his powers to destroy these marauding angels in one fell swoop. On top of that, Mujin finally shows his true intentions, as he declares how much he hates the gods, which we already knew right from the beginning. But he's given his vision statement an addendum. Mujin hates humans now too, so he doesn't waste time to continue massacring the city's innocent civilians after killing his own angel army. You have to give Mujin credit too, because the man has got the details for this whole initiative to cleanse the world on lock. See, Mujin's main plan is to pretty much drive humanity to near extinction so that a new race of improved humans, aka Generation X, would inherit what remains of the world when he's done. In his own words, only those who survive this disaster will have a chance to evolve. Oh, and while he's on this monologue, Mujin has made sure to keep his hands busy as he targets the World Government Office where Ilpio now resides, because the first step to this new world order is, of course, destroying the current status quo. In the meantime, Mori just stands in front of Mujin and waits for the former world president to finish what he's doing. They then get into a staring contest, but Odin intervenes before this whole sequence devolves further. Specifically, Odin has a humble request for Mujin to nullify the non-aggression pact that the gods made back at the end of Ragnarok. Mujin hears him out and makes sure Mori doesn't get froggy by freezing our hero in place. From there, Mujin summons the non-aggression pact's hard copy and rips it in two. Odin gets overly excited, but it soon turns to disappointment when Mujin tells him to off himself right after nullifying the contract. With a swing of the Supreme God's finger, Odin instantly gets beheaded. Don't worry, because he's not dead. He literally loses his head for a moment, and then reattaches it like nothing happened. Then Odin's two attendants, Hugin and Munin, suddenly appear to give him a quick rundown of the beef happening between Mori and Mujin. Youngji Park really tries to hype up this confrontation by having Odin commentate about how much more interesting this beef between the two has become. As this red-skinned god puts it, you have the Monkey King on one hand, who's pretty much a god who is more or less a human in appearance and in spirit, and on the other hand, there's Mujin, who so happens to be a human that has just become a god. Odin's play-by-play commentary doesn't really add anything to what we already know, but it is what it is. On a more relevant note, we learned that 666, Satan, is just laying in the cut this whole time when Odin asks if he's just going to stand around until this whole mess is over. Back in the middle of the battlefield, Mujin gets a massive headache when he senses the death and suffering of the people around him, the same people he just killed. But Mori has no aspirin for this demigod, so he asks Mujin what he wants instead. As a matter of fact, our hero even calls out Mujin for all his bullcrap about human centrism. On the other hand, Mujin reiterates his new initiative to cleanse the species so that humanity could evolve into something better. Of course, Mori has issues with this, since Mujin just committed genocide right now. But as the former world president puts it, reforms always require some kind of sacrifice, and those who survive this species-wide massacre will be given a chance to evolve. In not so many words, Mujin simply plans on creating a new world order where humanity will have changed all the way down to the genetic level. Mori gets furious with Mujin's bonkers plan and tells him he has no right to do this. But the man drops a hard truth on our hero. Rights aren't given, they're seized. And since Mujin has the power, he can seize it for himself. The two dudes finally stop flapping their gums at each other as Mujin makes the first move. He uses his power to try and freeze Mori in place again, but the Monkey King already has this move in check. In the blink of an eye, Mori's able to close the gap between him and his opponent before Mujin could freeze him. Mori busts out a renewal recoilless kick that literally rips Mujin apart. The technique is so quick that Mujin couldn't sense it coming, even with his newfound abilities. Still, Mujin is able to instantly regenerate from Mori's attack. But our hero's not done. Mori then nearly caves Mujin's face in with a recoilless Goryo flying knee that lands square in his face. And there's nothing that this supreme being can do to stop it. The only thing Mujin can do right now is realize that he's screwed, as Mori follows up with a devastating recoilless 3-stage Huichuk that carves up Mujin again. And just to make sure he means business, Mori uses Yoi to grind Mujin down with heavy piston pumps that repeatedly crush him into a wall. Only Mujin's lower half is left by the time Mori's done driving Yoi right into him. But Mujin is able to find an opening, which allows him to counter Mori by summoning thousands of swords to stab our hero. It does not work. Mori just wrecks each and every sword that Mujin throws at him. And the former world president realizes he's now royally screwed, just as Mori prepares to smack him around again. A quick flashback then reveals that even Tathagata thinks Mujin is crazier than him. But what's more relevant to God of High School's plot is when we find out that Mujin actually overpowered Tathagata during their conversation to force the Supreme God into being Mujin's own tool. Oh, and Tathagata did try to fight back against Mujin, but he ultimately loses when he notices that he's being protected by the souls of his fallen friends, which Tathagata refers to as the prophets. The long and short of it is that Mujin ends up controlling Tathagata instead of the other way around. In the present, Mori and Mujin freefall until they hit the ground. Mujin finds himself trapped in a hole, and our hero goes to town on him. Mori first goes for some mortar and pestle action to grind down a sworn enemy before having a bit of fun by fusing Yondewan's Thunderbolt with the 7th owner and directing them towards Mujin. However, this fight is far from over. Mujin finally gets the upper hand when he summons the so-called temple, which happens to be none other than the mythical temple of Tathagata. In the distance, Satan wonders what Mujin is trying to do here. For now, Mujin grabs Mori and flies him toward what might be a fragment of the moon. Mujin pins our hero down and starts to choke him out, all the while telling Mori that he's never going to stop stooping so low to get what he wants. The two then crash down back to Earth and right in the middle of the temple of Tathagata. From here, Mujin summons an entire arsenal of legendary weapons, while Mori gets Yoi big and hard to prepare for another clash. The Monkey King starts off their tussle, as he lunges at Mujin with Yoi in tow. But our hero gets his butt handed to him when Mujin summons his first weapon called Mandala, a small dagger that's powerful enough to block Yoi mid-swing. Not only that, but we find out that Mandala has another nifty power called Pass, which allows it to phase through Yoi and pierce Mori right through the chest. Of course, there's an explosion that comes with this. With the tide of battle in his favor, Mujin relishes the moment and starts running his mouth in front of Mori. He pretty much tells our guy that there's nothing he could do to him with Yoi, considering that this magical staff is actually just a column that the Monkey King stole from the Dragon Palace. A quartet of flamboyantly dressed individuals calling themselves Mujin's personal Shis and disciples then appear out of nowhere. They tell him that they've been waiting for his return for 5.68 billion years, a full 10 million years longer than Tathagata's actual disappearance from the face of the universe. This group is introduced as the 4 Pillars of Fate, and they're made up of dragon, monkey, deer, and rabbit. The 4 pillars get to work protecting their boss right after handing Mujin his robe and paying their respects, but Mujin tells the group to stay out of it because he wants Mori all to himself. Mujin summons Tathagata's second weapon called the Diamond Sutra, Bell of All Evils, and one single ring from it sends Mori flying. As a matter of fact, the weapon is so strong that even a couple of random civilians on the ground get their heads blown off from the Bell of All Evils vibration. Back at the Temple of Tathagata, Mori immediately recovers and attempts to whack Mujin with Yoi, but Mujin counters by transforming the Bell of All Evils into a jacked-up version of itself using a technique called Vajra Phase 2. Mujin rings the bell again, and Mori is hurled hundreds of feet away, all the while stating the obvious that his sworn nemesis has gotten stronger. With Mori seemingly out of the fight for now, Satan then lunges at Mujin for a surprise attack. Mujin blocks Satan, and this insane devil tells the demigod to have some fun with him. And Satan's not messing around. He clearly says he's going all out and summons his double-winged strike final phase ability to barrage Mujin. Mujin counters with his own strikes, but Satan just dances around them until he finds an opening and gives the Supreme Being a cracking gut shot that throws him off balance. But Mujin easily recovers and summons the Bell of All Evils again and gets ready to ring it. On the other hand, Satan is able to analyze what exactly the Bell of All Evils can do. As he puts it, the bell is a weapon that uses a non-linear surface attack. Satan is easily able to zip around the battlefield and dodge Mujin's attack the moment he rings the bell. And before we know it, Satan's already behind Mujin, raring for a counterattack. But Mujin accounted for this. He simply uses Mandala's pass ability on him and it pierces Satan right through the chest. Mujin thinks this is enough to put Satan down, but the devil isn't even fazed. In fact, Satan is able to pierce through Mujin's abdomen with his hand. At the same time, he spots Mori not too far away and gets excited seeing him again. Meanwhile, Odin appears beside Mori and dumps some exposition on our hero. The long and short of it is that Satan is pretty much a genius compared to all the other gods. At the same time, Satan gets even more excited when he is finally able to distinguish which one is Mori, also stating that Mujin here is way too weak. Mori and Odin then start doing some color commentating work with Odin, as he tells him that he thinks Satan's going to lose his fight against Mujin. As Mori and Odin put it, Satan might be the strongest opponent he's ever fought, but Mujin possesses the power of Maitreya. Now Odin doesn't completely agree with this critique. He knows that Satan might lose his duel, but the little devil boy always puts on a show. And it's here where Odin undoubtedly claims that Maitreya might be the supreme god among gods, but Satan is a genius compared to each and every one of them. On the battlefield, Mujin grabs Satan's wrist and summons several Tathagata clones out of his arm. Satan uses his brain once again and instantly copies Mujin's technique. The clash ends in a stalemate, as the two combatants' heads literally get blown off. But both Satan and Mujin regenerate from their wounds a mere moment later. This time, Satan equips his personal armor called La Diablo, while Mujin summons Tathagata's 8 symbols weapon, Writing Unlocked. Satan further escalates things when he summons 245 quintillion of his own clones. Of course, Mujin's not going to get upstaged, so he calls forth another weapon called Indra's Stone Statue in Badro, Kaleidoscope, to destroy Satan's ridiculously large number of copies. Mujin then summons 3 more of his tools, namely the 3rd Stone Statue of Indra, 4th Kaleidoscope, and 5th Holy Book, all the while blathering about faux Buddhist nonsense before barraging Satan with his own salvo. Mujin tells Satan that he already knows what he's going to do even before Satan himself knows it. From there, Mujin assaults Satan with the Bell of All Evil's 108 agonies, then cranking it up to 1800 agonies to nearly break the devil's arm. Not too far away, Odin continues to color commentate and reveals to Mori that the reason Satan doesn't use any weapons of his own is because he has a habit of stealing his enemies' tools and using it against them. At that moment, Mujin uses a technique called Empty Agonies, which causes another explosion typical of God of High School's battles. And as if on cue, Satan does swipe Mujin's mandala from him, and, even more interesting, he picks up Yoi off the ground and uses it as his own weapon. He then gets to work and slices up Mujin right then and there. Satan's salvo ultimately manages to cut off Mujin's right pinky finger. Mujin tries to counter by raising his palm, which is reminiscent of the time the Monkey King did this with Tathagata, and an apparition of a monster appears in front of Satan. But Satan doesn't give a damn about Mujin's techniques. This boy just wants to tussle. So he tells Mujin that he'll just cut off his other 9 fingers just as Mujin goes for a technique called Thousand Hands Yin Yang. Uniting Yin and Yang together creates an attack called Mount Ohang, and Satan gets overwhelmed. The Devil Boy realizes he can't win against this technique and starts to wonder if he should dodge or just tuck tail and run. The decision is made for him though, as cross-shaped pillars drop on Satan, forcing him to go on the defensive. All the better too, because this gives him a second wind, as Satan reminds himself that he made a vow after Ragnarok to never be defeated in battle again. And just like that, Satan gets even more hyped up and declares that everything is going to be his. Satan's renewed strength culminates in him getting out of a tight spot by blowing up Mujin's Mount Ohang technique with a blast from his laser eyes. The explosion causes a couple of the cross-shaped boulders to be hurled towards Mujin, forcing him to use his powers to crush them. But this leaves him open for Satan to jump right in front of his face and proceed to give him a good old-fashioned pounding. Satan goes to town on Mujin, smashing the man's face with his bare fist until Mujin finds an opening and counters by driving spikes into Satan's arms. He then breaks the Devil Boy's arm and summons Longinus to crush him with his spear. However, Mujin is taken by surprise when he notices that Satan has just copied his previous technique, as he summons his own spikes to turn Mujin's arm into a pincushion. Not only that, but Satan has also managed to copy Mujin's Mount Ohang technique and proceeds to crush his opponent with his own boulders. That's not where his barrage ends either, because not a moment passes when Mujin spots Satan holding Longinus' spear, as the boy lunges at him. Mujin counters by lopping off Satan's arm, but he fails to notice that his enemy is already holding mandala in his other hand. Satan uses its pass ability and pokes a hole through Mujin's chest. The two combatants then reset, with Satan summoning another army of clones and upping the ante by applying Yebon Chim on each and every one of them. On the other hand, Mujin uses a technique called Stigmata before summoning what he calls a single holy spear. They clash yet again, and Mujin gets the better of Satan when he manages to literally grab his heart. Mujin thinks he's won, so he starts talking trash, telling Satan about how he lost 1 3/5 of his 2 lives in Ragnarok. And now, Satan only has a little piece of life left. But this doesn't do anything to break Satan's spirit. In fact, he gets even more excited when he spots that he was able to chop off Mujin's left arm during their previous clash. Satan declares that he's going to aim for Mujin's head next time. On top of that, he lets the man know he doesn't even care about his own life. All Satan wants is a good fight. Satan then tells he's going to win this duel, all the while reminding himself of the loss he took during his fight all the way back in Ragnarok. Satan gets ready to hit Mujin with a copy of Mori's trademark renewal recoilless kick, but he gets sliced into several pieces before he can pull it off. We then find out that Mujin absorbed Satan's heart, as he has now acquired the Devil's double wings. And just to make sure things are on the nose, we get shown a page of Nox's Bible, stating, beating his crimson wings, he shall bring a new son of man, a new wind with him. Mujin then declares that Satan has already lost this battle. Mujin then regenerates his missing right arm, and then uses Satan's wings to topple over what remains of New Korea's cityscape. Meanwhile, Satan attempts to use his healing factor to regenerate from the recent hits he took, but immediately notices that it's not working. Even worse, he gets instantly sliced and diced when he tries to attack Mujin head-on. Mujin casually drives Satan away, while a bunch of random New Korean citizens freefall hundreds of feet above the ground after Mujin pretty much turned the city upside down earlier. Thankfully, Daewoo's there to pick up the slack. He uses his gravitational powers to rescue the citizens from falling to their death and encases everyone in his natural force shelter to protect them from the ridiculous duel happening just outside. Dewi starts to wonder what the hell is going on with Mori and Mujin up there at the Temple of Tathagata. Meanwhile, we learn that Ilpio is a completely fictional character when we find out that he didn't leave his post after Mujin destroyed the world government building. Instead, our guy continues to oversee rescue operations in spite of the massive infrastructural damage that the world government has taken. A squad of Mujin loyalists break into his office and try to start some smoke with Ilpio, but they instantly fold when they notice that Ilpio has no time to deal with scrubs like them. Ilpio then coordinates with Dewi, telling him that he and the world government will handle rescue and evacuation efforts while Dewi helps Mori at the Temple of Tathagata. Back on the battlefield, Mujin is just having his way with Satan, while Odin continues to commentate about the duel. He tells Mori that it looks like not even the Supreme God is perfect and that Satan can't even use his wings anymore, but Mori thinks Satan is just not using them on purpose. At the same time, Mujin tries to finish off Satan by summoning his final weapon, which he calls the last letter of the eighth. But one of the four pillars tells him that this particular tool is in the hands of another god right now. It turns out that the last letter of the eighth happens to be none other than the Blade of Tathagata, which is currently in Mira's possession. Mujin tries to magically take back the Blade of Tathagata from Mira, but she's able to resist. So he makes do and just blasts Satan with his own hand. He notices that Satan's regenerative abilities have significantly slowed down and wonders if he's near his limit. But you gotta hand it to the devil, he doesn't know when to quit. Satan replies by lunging at Mujin again. Not too far away, Odin tells Mori that he would have turned out like Satan if he didn't meet Wanzang in the past and focused all his time and energy into gaining power. Back on the battlefield, Mujin blows Satan away with another blast. But Satan is 100% determined to win, and this time he's pulled out all the stops. Satan doesn't use any techniques with word salad names, he just gets close enough to Mujin and takes a chomp out of the man's neck. Meanwhile, Mori decides to jump into the fray, but the four pillars block his path. Not only that, but Odin subdues our hero by launching his scooter, which actually happens to be his legendary ride, Sleipnir. Sleipnir traps Mori in place, as Odin tells him that he can't join the fight just yet. Meanwhile, Mujin still can't shake Satan off his neck. Nearby, Odin uses his final phase ability to summon all the other gods in the heavenly realm to help out Satan. Oh, and we find out from Odin that Satan's actually the god's de facto leader. Various gods like Shiva of the third heavenly realm, Humpty Dumpty of the fourth, Praltriller, the master of the sixth realm, Avidya of the seventh, Hugin, Munin, and the Valkyries, and even Dewi, who's the current candidate to become the master of the first heavenly realm, are summoned to the battlefield. Odin then tells Sleipnir to keep an eye on Mori while he joins the fight. On the other hand, Mujin gets surrounded by all these gods and expresses how happy he is that he can make each and every one of them disappear forever in one fell swoop. Several of the summoned gods then each go on a short spiel, which basically just boil down to them being a bunch of racist pricks who can't accept that a human like Mujin gained the power of the supreme god. Thankfully, God of High School doesn't spend too much time on this and instead proceeds to show us their coordinated effort to try and bring Mujin down. But it literally just takes a second before Mujin puts each and every one of these gods in their place, blowing a cross-shaped hole into their torsos like a shameful mark of defeat. Fair play to Mujin too, because he throws some shade at these scrubs right after that, telling the other gods that not even their combined might would even hold a candle against Satan's strength. But then, Odin takes this opportunity to go for a surprise attack while riding Sleipnir. He tries to drive his spear right into Mujin, but the man blocks it with Mandala's point. He then uses Mandala to destroy Odin's spear. The problem is, this was Odin's plan all along. He didn't come here to tussle with Mujin. He just used his attack to distract the man long enough for Sleipnir to retrieve Satan. Sleipnir then takes Satan and Mori to safety, while Odin talks smack at Mujin. He's got a point too, because Odin tells Mujin that he's a hypocrite for becoming a supreme god, especially after all his talk about hating the gods themselves. Mujin agrees with Odin's sentiment, and it's here we learn that he plans on punishing and offing himself when he's done reshaping the world. And sheesh, even Odin thinks that's crazy. But Mujin is done with all this talking, so he restarts the fight and makes his first move against Odin. It doesn't connect, because Dewi suddenly shows up and gives Mujin a good old-fashioned beating before double-teaming him with Odin's help. Mujin eventually finds an opening and sends Dewi flying. Odin gives Dewi a pair of wings to prevent him from flying hundreds of feet off into the air. And it's here that Odin reveals he plans on dying today. And for an evil scumbag like him, you can't help but root for Odin when he tells Dewi to look after Satan when he's gone. A quick flashback shows that Odin whispered something to Mori before leaving him with Sleipnir. But we don't get the payoff for that just yet. Instead, we get a serviceable sequence where we see Odin magically repairing his spear and aiming it at Mujin, while a bunch of Valkyries hold him in place. But then, nothing comes of it. Mujin easily drives the Valkyries away with his power and dismembers Odin before trapping him in a magical case. Odin thinks this is the end of the line for him, but Daewoo intervenes and gives Mujin a solid left straight to the face before he could finish off Odin. Daewoo tells Odin that he's got a score to settle with Mujin and proceeds to do some ground and pound on the guy. However, Mujin soon counters with one of his cross-shaped invisible projectile attacks, which forces Daewoo on his back foot. Mujin runs his mouth and tells Daewoo there's no way he could beat him. But Daewoo doesn't give a crap about winning. All he wants is to get one good hit on Mujin's smug face. Mujin, Daewoo, and Odin then find themselves in a three-way deadlock, which causes another explosion that destroys the temple of Tathagata and all the other surrounding floating islands above the skies of New Korea. We finally get the payoff to what Odin whispered to Mori earlier. It turns out that the reason he stopped the Monkey King from joining the fight was so that he could observe Mujin's fighting style while Odin and the other gods dealt with him. This will give our hero a hint on how to defeat the Supreme God's vessel. We then get caught up with Mori, as our hero finds himself waking up inside a strange library. Mori starts to panic, thinking the worst has happened to Daewoo and the rest of his friends, and tries to find a way out of this strange place. Soon enough, Mori realizes that he's inside Odin's library when Sleipnir appears in front of him. Our hero's not alone either, because Satan's in this library too. What happens next doesn't really move the plot forward, as Mori and Satan get into hijinks to look for some food. Sleipnir eventually shows them the pantry, and they chow down. However, Satan fails to recognize Mori because our hero's currently in his Mori-Dan form. Mori transforms into his original Mori-Jin form, but all he gets is a headbutt from Satan as a reply because the young god doesn't believe he's the real Monkey King. The two get into a scuffle that Mori wins. Later, Satan takes a nap and Mori overhears him crying about losing another fight. Mori takes pity on Satan and they pretty much become friends after this. Not long after, Satan and Mori spend their time poring over Odin's books and scrolls. The devil asks their hero if he's worried about Daewoo, to which Mori says that he knows his best friend is going to be just fine. More hijinks ensue when Satan tries to fish for compliments. A bit more time passes. Satan wakes up to see Mori doing martial arts training to bring back his obsessive desire for power so that he can become strong enough to defeat Mujin. Seeing Mori put in the work makes Satan realize that he's actually the real Monkey King. Even better, Satan steps into the room and volunteers to train Mori. Back in the human world, Mujin rounds up all the surviving citizens of New Korea and formally announces his plans to commit genocide on them. Credit where credit is due, because at least Mujin is transparent about all of this, even the method of execution, which he describes as not completely painless but instantaneous. Of course, poor random folks don't take kindly to the prospect of being massacred. One of them gets understandably furious and asks Mujin who gave him the right to choose who gets to live and who dies. This allows Mujin to drop some cold, hard truths on these scrubs. As he puts it, no one gave him the right to do this, but he has the power to make it happen. So he's going to take full advantage of that to fulfill his dream of cleansing the world of humans. Plus, it's not like Mujin's insane plan only applies to humans. He explicitly tells him that even gods and monsters are going to undergo this quote-unquote selection process. And when another dude asks what their chances of getting selected are, Mujin doesn't lie. He tells them that it's slim. There's only a 0.0001% probability that the people in front of him are going to survive this purge. And without wasting any more time, Mujin's pogrom begins, as the Four Pillars Rabbit oversees the proceedings. That is to say, she sends out a bunch of little clones she calls Bomto, who then begin brutally taking out every human they can get their hands on. And while this whole bloody affair is going on, Mujin tells Rabbit to send in whoever passes the selection process to draw him a bath, as the former world president retreats to his quarters. God of High School shifts its focus back to the human world, where we find out that New Korea has become an absolute crap hole after an indeterminate amount of time has passed since Mujin's ascension to godhood. And if the entire city looking like a war-torn mess wasn't bad enough, we also learn that Mujin's lackeys continue to carry out their genocidal campaign against humanity. On the bright side, we do know that Ahan has survived, as she travels the ruined streets of New Korea to help out random citizens as best as she can. In another part of the city, Rabbit keeps on being good at her job, as she sends her Bomto minions to murder anyone who doesn't pass the selection process. And would you look at that, she eventually finds a single person who passes and transfers a bit of her power to him. Back in Odin's library, Mori and Satan continue to train with each other, but they're interrupted when their enemy senses Satan's energy after he summons his signature armor, which Youngji Park now calls El Diablo. It only takes a few moments before Mujin sends in one of his soldiers to deal with Mori and Satan. It turns out that Mujin has given this assignment to the Four Pillars Monkey. Monkey wastes no time in doing his job, as this mysterious warrior destroys Odin's entire library, causing Satan and Mori to fall into the bright white chasm beyond its walls. Sleipnir manages to rescue Satan, but they get separated from Mori, and after an unspecified amount of time, Mori wakes up to find himself back in the human world. He soon learns that he was rescued by a random boy and his grandpa, who live in one of the camps within New Korea's ruins. Grandpa then informs Mori that even potable water is hard to come by, since the corpses of the gods that Mujin killed ended up contaminating the entire city's water supply. But it's also here where we learn that Ilpio hasn't given up hope yet, as he makes a public announcement over the radio urging the public to stay strong while they mount a counter-offensive against Mujin and his murderous cronies. Ilpio's message is enough to give Grandpa the will to keep fighting. Unknown to him, even Ilpio himself thinks that the whole world is done for. And if that's not bad enough, scores upon scores of the survivors living in the camp get instantly massacred when the Four Pillars dragon appears and calls most of the settlement's population. A group of Mujin's unnamed underlings, which is made up of people who passed previous selection processes, then arrive and tell the remaining survivors that they'll start the selection process now. One of them hurls a knife at Mori. Our hero catches it, but the knife transforms into magic rope that binds our hero in place. In the meantime, the guy who looks like he's the leader of Mujin's unnamed death squad repeats the order to begin the selection process. Meanwhile, Mori remembers that Satan told him not to use his powers for fear that Mujin can instantly sense their powers if her Monkey King activates it. Mori checks his surroundings and spots Grandpa's grandkid dead on the ground amongst the other innocent civilians in the area. Mujin's death squad proceeds to continue their massacre, but it's here we learn that Grandpa is really good at throwing hands, as he steps up to one of them and knocks him out with a perfect gut shot. Not only that, but we find out that Grandpa's actually a borrowed power user who possesses Charybdis, as he channels his energy and zaps several of these unnamed lackeys. A few of these goose steppers survive Grandpa's initial salvo and reveal their true form. They're a bunch of grotesque monsters who proceed to take a bite out of the old man. But Grandpa doesn't even get a scratch on him and instead sends these fools flying with a cracking overhand left. He's not completely out of the woods yet, though, because an entire army of these unnamed murderers suddenly lunges at him. Grandpa proves that he's the real deal when he chooses to stand between Mori and the army, telling our hero that he doesn't want to see anyone die today. The Death Squad's leader gives the order to take out Mori and Grandpa. At the same time, our hero comes up with the genius plan to fend off these random underlings without letting on that he's the Monkey King. Mori does this by sneezing. These aren't ordinary sneezes though. They're supercharged blasts of air that's more than enough to send their attackers flying. The Death Squad leader notices what Mori's doing and calls our hero a son of a bee, but Mori just keeps on sneezing away at his enemies. By the time he looks at this army, the Death Squad leader notices that most of them have already been knocked out. So he tells the remaining Death Squad members to prepare for battle, and these unnamed scrubs transform into monsters. Mori realizes that it's time to stop playing around, so he breaks free of his restraints and tells Grandpa to stand back while he does his thing. Mori allows himself to get swarmed by the grotesque monsters, all the while throwing shade at Mujin, as he pretty much calls the Supreme Being's vessel an idiot with the power of a god. Shortly after, Mori notices that his attackers are well within range, so our hero prepares to bust out one of his renewal recoilless techniques to eliminate them with a single hit. But Mori ultimately fails to launch an attack because Dragon suddenly appears and drives his sword into Mori's shoulder. Mori just eats it up and goes on a mercifully short exposition to let us know that Dragon actually happens to be Wan Zhang's old horse and last disciple named Ryong. On the other hand, Dragon goes on his own short exposition to reveal his motives, and we learn that this freak has it in for Mori, since he literally ate Wan Zhang in the past. Dragon goes on to run his mouth about how he was the same guy who gave Uma her trademark cheek scar, but Mori's not in a listening mood. So our hero casually puts this old horse in his place with a simple recoilless basic technique and even talks smack at the guy, telling Dragon that he might be weaker right now, but he sure as hell isn't weaker than Dragon. And just add insult to injury, Mori calls Dragon a priest, which is basically synonymous with being a weak lemming in the God of High School universe. Still, Dragon isn't going down without a fight. He manages to land a few good hits on Mori, but this just makes our hero up the ante and continue barraging him with a bunch of regular martial arts strikes. Dragon eventually finds an opening and unleashes a double hammer fist on Mori, but the Monkey King doesn't even notice it. He just moves to the side and has a sneezing fit from all the dust in this crappy city. All of a sudden, Deer appears, and we find out that he's pretty much the resident nerd of the Four Pillars. This becomes especially apparent when he cautions Dragon to not use his powers out of some unspecified promise he apparently made in the past. In reply, Dragon literally takes a bite out of Deer's upper half. And he is one hungry boy too, because Dragon proceeds to eat a few of the unnamed monsters in Mujin's death squad after chowing down on Deer's entire upper body. This gives Dragon a power boost, and he transforms into an even uglier, more grotesque version of himself. All the while, he goes on an internal monologue about how skills can only take you so far when you're facing an opponent who's way more powerful than you, namely someone like Mori. Dragon starts running his mouth, but Mori easily humbles him again. The two get into a short clash, and Dragon gets the upper hand when an artifact called the Bardo Kaleidoscope appears between them, which allows Mujin himself to remotely attack Mori. Mori knows he's in trouble, so he instinctively calls on Yoi. Unknown to him, Mujin has his signature weapon chained up somewhere. so it can't fly towards our hero. Mujin then sends Mandala to take out Mori, but the Monkey King remembers that he has his dragon armor suits to protect him from the attack. It works. However, Deer suddenly regenerates the entire half of his body and starts going on this nerdy speech about how Mori's armored dragon suits work. As he puts it, the armored dragon suits are an autonomous telepathic defense system infused with souls. Deer goes on to say that it's like an even stronger version of the clothes he wears. He also says that the armored dragon suits can provide its user with impenetrable defense that not even the mandala could penetrate. Oh, and Youngji Park has apparently decided that the mandala is now the last of the 8 characters in Mujin's arsenal, not the Blade of Tathagata. Deer's exposition dump finally reaches its end when he freezes Mori's dragon armor suits, which then causes it to shatter into tiny pieces. This leaves our hero open for Mandala's near unstoppable piercing power. However, unknown to Mori and his foes, Dean and Sujin are already on their way to rescue our hero. Sujin and Dean arrive just as the mandala is about to pierce Mori's chest. Sujin uses her the Hope Sovereignty technique to freeze the legendary knife and Mori's enemies in place as they arrive riding Sujin's dragons. Sujin prevents Dragon and Deer from interfering with their mission by using her curse ability to freeze them in place longer. Meanwhile, Dean uses his powers to analyze their foes and concludes that they're literal beasts. Sujin wastes no time to whisk away Mori, and our heroes fly off into the distance, leaving Deer and Dragon on the ground. Deer tries to launch a long-range attack on our heroes, but Dragon stops him, telling his partner that the direction of his attack is his master's home. Deer then chastises Dragon for not defeating their enemies, knowing that he could easily do it if he made more of an effort. We then find out that Deer is your typical cute psycho cliche when he adorably threatens to tear Dragon to pieces if he ever attacks him again. Dragon tells him to just shut the hell up and break his curse. Deer obeys, and Dragon tells him to watch his back. Meanwhile, Mujin launches a laser beam from the Temple of Tathagata that's pretty much the equivalent of a nuclear bomb, which destroys a huge chunk of the city and anyone in it. Mori spots this and comments about how Mujin now has the world under his control. We then get a nice surprise when it's revealed that our heroes also managed to save Grandpa. The bad news is that Grandpa is the only one who survived Mujin's recent attack. Mori realizes how extremely bad this whole deal with Mujin is, so he tells his friends that he needs to gain more power. Mori also surmises that Dragon showing up in the human world means that a gateway to that so-called place is currently open. On the other hand, Sujin basically confirms that Mujin and his cronies have doubled down on their purge efforts these last few days. We then get a glimpse of the Dragon Palace and Mujin's 7 legendary weapons, implying that this is the same place that Mori is referring to upon meeting Dragon. The story then shifts its focus to Ilpio. Right now, we learn that he's in a secret meeting with his friends from the Vatican, who hand him the used Holy Grail. One of the Vatican's agents asks what Ilpio's planning to do with this artifact, considering that it's all out of juice after having been used 3 times in the past. And well, even Ilpio himself admits that he has to think about that. Back to Mori and the gang, Sujin explains that Mujin has gained aerial superiority over the rest of the world and that the remaining survivors of his pogroms now live in underground settlements. Her exposition is thankfully cut short when Mujin senses their presence and begins bombarding our heroes with attacks from the Bell of all evils. Sujin is able to protect the entire group with her Pandora, the Hope ability, but they soon learn that Mujin's actually targeting her dragons. The dragons, being sensitive to sound, start thrashing around in midair after hearing Mujin's bell. And just like that, our heroes begin to crash. Dean desperately tells the rest of the group to hang on, since they're already close to their hideout in the sea, but Bombto suddenly appears behind him for a bit of good old-fashioned murder. However, our heroes have taken this into account. It turns out that Ilpio has been keeping an eye on the gang this whole time for ambushes like this, so Ilpio uses his 9-tailed fox Hyaki Yagyo ability to summon a spirit fox head that eats rabbit whole. Dean and the group then crash land into the sea and soon reach their hideout. Even better, none of Sujin's dragons lose their lives in the process. They then enter the hideout, and Sujin goes on an exposition dump about the entire place's specs. She reveals that Jonah had this built as a bomb shelter that could withstand a nuclear apocalypse after believing that a second Ragnarok was going to come. This bunker is located under a mountain that's 40 kilometers high and is made of a special alloy that even X-rays could not penetrate. We're not going to give you the full rundown of this bunker specs, since that doesn't move the plot forward. So all you should know here is that Ilpio first used this bunker to preserve what remains of humanity and operate as the leader of an entirely new version of the world government. It's basically a sanctuary that's made up of about 10 million people, with 9.5 million of them ready for battle according to Sujin. Sujin then leads Mori to a certain room within the bunker after giving him the place's house rules. Here in this bunker, using borrowed power is forbidden as Mujin got a 6th sense for power. It's here our hero finds out that his friends are currently training an entire army of resistance fighters in a new form of martial art that combines renewal taekwondo, ITF taekwondo, and Ilpio's Samsu fighting style. Dean gets all excited that Mori's now here to perhaps add more lessons to their curriculum. And from there, Dean pretty much serves as our hero's hype man, as he introduces Mori to them. Ilpio then walks into the room and reunites with his Mori. Shortly after, Ilpio makes an announcement that aims to lift the spirits of the survivors in this colony. As he puts it, they now have a chance to remove Mujin's aerial superiority and eventually put an end to his threat, thanks to the Holy Grail and Mori. The long and short of it is that Ilpio plans on using the Holy Grail to either seal Mujin within it, return Mori's power, or both. Ilpio's speech is met with thunderous applause. After all, it gives what remains of most of humanity hope for survival. But here's the thing, it's all a lie. Ilpio shares the truth with Mori afterwards, specifically about how the bunker wouldn't last another month due to a lack of supplies and how he has no idea how to activate the Holy Grail again. Ilpio loses his composure and tells Mori that this is probably the end of their species. But our hero reassures his big brother that they'll make it through this, and Mori plans on taking back the skies from Mujin by getting more power from the Dragon Palace. Specifically, Mori plans on either repairing Yoi or stealing some of Mujin's weapons to help him fight off their enemies. Ilpio hears him out and asks him how long he needs to do this, to which Mori says 1 week. On top of that, Mori knows that this single week is enough to help him get the weapons he needs in the fight against Mujin. He even lets on that Mujin won't be doing anything to them in a month, since he thinks that he hasn't fully merged with Tathagata yet. As Mori says, Mujin and Tathagata are probably fighting over his body right now, which has forced Mujin to use the loop of binding to complete his fusion with the Supreme God. And that process is going to take at least a month. Mori then tells Ilpio that he'll do everything he can to help his friends and allies, and asks his big brother to continue looking into how they could activate the Holy Grail again. Just before their meeting ends, Ilpio asks Mori what they do if Mujin fuses with Tathagata sooner. We don't get Mori's reply just yet, because the story flashes forward to Mori riding off on one of Sujin's dragons to proceed with his mission. But a quick flashback reveals that one of Rabbit's Banto managed to latch itself onto Grandpa and overheard Mori saying that they'd be royally screwed if Mujin fused with Tathagata before the month passed. Back in the Temple of Tathagata, Mujin continues forcing the Supreme God to become one with him. We then catch up with Daewee, as he was awoken from a nightmare of Mujin slicing off his right arm. In the present, Daewee wakes up inside a cave with his upper body wrapped in bandages. A cute brown-skinned lady approaches him with food. In a frustratingly cliched turn of events, we also learn that Daewee now has amnesia. The lady in front of him then says that they're inside a cave somewhere on a southern island, a remote area that even the gods haven't ravaged yet. But what Daewee takes away from what the girl just said is the word hubby, and when our hero asks if they're married, the girl says yes. Hell, it's even revealed that they even have a fur baby together. Later, the girl takes Daewee apple picking at the nearby orchard. We find out that she's a shaman in her tribe, and she first found Daewee falling from the sky after his battle with Mujin. Now, if you're wondering how these two got married, then you're in luck, because we next find out that the girl married Daewee while he was still unconscious, mainly because of a prophecy that she got back when she was still a kid. The prophecy goes that she'd one day marry a quote-unquote man of God from the sky. And, well, guess who fell from the sky not too long ago, guys? It's Daewee. Daewee and his wife's pleasant day is suddenly ruined when one of Mujin's sky fortresses appears above the girl's island home. It doesn't take long before his enforcers arrive on the island en masse, prompting the girl to hide Daewee within her tribe's cave. Daewee asks her to join him, but the girl refuses, since it's her job as a shaman to protect her tribe. Plus, it's here where we learn that the girl is actually part of the Amazon tribe. It's a matriarchal society where every able-bodied woman is a warrior and the men are rightfully put where they belong, the kitchen. Not only that, but Daewee's wife proves that she's an absolute beast when she uses her own borrowed power called Giant to crush waves upon waves of Mujin's death squads. The girl and her fellow women warriors manage to hold their own against the interlopers, but she ultimately comes across one that manages to defend himself from her borrowed power. Well, for a second at least, because our girl easily kicks this guy's butt right after. The problem is, our girl accidentally reveals the location of her tribe when she drives the random scrub into its walls. This allows another Death Squad member to capture Daewee's wife. The grotesque demon tells her that the real god is up in the sky. The Amazonian lady responds that the real gods wouldn't defy natural order and pick on the weak. To add more insult, she calls Mujin's Death Squad as demon worshippers. This beast then yells at her saying why her god is just watching her and her tribe perish. But Daewee shows up, telling the demon to leave his wife alone. This then prompts the bozo to hold him hostage. The demon tells the Amazonian lady to spit at her god or else Daewee will die. Daewee gets a bit of his memory back when he remembers Mujin and punches the monster. It doesn't seem to do anything at first, but everyone around is shocked when Daewee's punch suddenly makes the unnamed Death Squad enforcer explode like a water balloon. Daewee then gets to work, and all it takes is a single punch to drive away the army of idiots who are attacking the Amazons and their home. Even better, Daewee punches them so hard that he ends up blowing a hole into their sky fortress, and it crashes. While this is happening, Mori and Sujin make their way to the Dragon Palace to continue their mission. And after a bit of small talk about Ahan and Destiny, our heroes reach a mountain range, which Sujin says is where the Dragon Palace lies. Mori thinks Sujin has made a mistake, since he knows that the Dragon Palace is located under the sea. This prompts Sujin to go on an exposition about how the Four Pillars dragon, aka Ryung, once betrayed his bloodline, which then caused the mountains and the sea to be turned upside down. So yeah, Mori's not entirely wrong. The Dragon Palace used to be under the sea, but it's been a mountain range ever since the world got turned upside down from Ryung's betrayal. More importantly, Sujin thinks that the key to the Dragon Palace can be found in the Dragon King's bloodline, which Ryung is a part of. She also surmises that Ryung's betrayal happened around the same time when Xiao Chen was massacring dragons around the world. The duo soon reach the spot where Sujin says the Dragon Palace stands, but it just looks like empty space. Mori takes a second to figure out what's going on, but he soon figures out that the Dragon Palace is hidden right underneath the mountain. So our hero lifts the entire plate covering the palace and uncover the ancient domain. On top of that, Mori even explains to Sujin that Yoi used to be one of the 18 pillars that held up the Dragon Palace itself. In any case, our hero formally introduces Sujin to the place, and they get ready to enter it. Mori and Sujin continue their trek toward the Dragon Palace's gates. The whole place looks like a graveyard, and it's something that Sujin notices. She even asks Mori if one set of these bones belonged to a dead dragon, but our hero explains that it actually used to belong to the mythical Hydra. That is until Hercules killed it and left its remains in front of the Dragon Palace. The duo soon reach the palace gates. Mori pushes it, and its sheer weight forces the Monkey King to momentarily transform into his Jin Mori form just to open it. Curiously, Mori hears a voice while struggling to push the door telling him to go away. But this doesn't deter our hero, and he eventually succeeds in pushing the heavy gate. Always the observant one, Sujin can tell that our hero is getting stronger just by the mere fact that Mori was able to open the Dragon Palace's heavy front doors. Our heroes continue their journey toward the heart of the palace. Along the way, Mori gives Sujin an exposition about the material that both Yoi and the entire Dragon Palace are made of, dragon bones. The long and short of it is that dragons have a culture of smithing their tools out of their own bones. It also happens to be one of the strongest materials in the universe, with the only thing more durable being the Heavenly Realm's trademark element, barbadium. A quick flashback shows Mori back when he was still the Monkey King. We find out here that he used to be buds with the Dragon King, but our hero eventually ticked off this monarch when he stole one of the Dragon Palace's pillars. It's basically the origin story of how he got his hands on Yoi. In the present, Sujin wonders if the Dragon King would even help them, considering that Mori screwed the dude over millennia ago. But Mori reassures her that the Dragon King isn't totally hostile towards him. They're more like frenemies. That's because we find out that the Dragon King actually asked Mori a favor a few centuries after he stole Yoi. That favor was to take care of Ryung, who is the Dragon King's son and basically the kingdom's prince. But as we already know, Ryung betrayed his own kind. We get a bit more details about what Ryung exactly did here, namely that he allied himself with Tathagata, which effectively amounted to treason against the Dragon Kingdom. The duo continue their quest, and Sujin can feel that the Dragon Palace has some very weird physical properties, like how gravity in the air itself feels heavier in this place compared to the world at large. Mori explains that this is because the Dragon Palace was designed to emulate deep-sea conditions as much as possible. Our hero tells his partner to brace herself because it's just going to get worse from here. Soon enough, Mori and Sujin reach the Dragon King. But as Sujin notes, the ancient creature isn't showing any vital signs. Mori tries to call out to the Dragon King, but he gets no reply. The old dragon only begins to speak, however, when Mori bluffs about stealing his bones. Sujin notes that the Dragon King is still alive, but his physical form is basically dead, which explains why the giant dragon before them isn't moving at all. In any case, Mori asks him if he could fix Yoi. The Dragon King finally realizes that Mori's the one in front of him and throws a bit of shade about how our hero ate his girlfriend in the past. On the other hand, the old creature can also sense that Sujin has the smell of a few different dragons on her, considering that she inherited O's title as the Dragon Lord. The Dragon King continues talking smack at Mori, this time criticizing him for wearing one of Hephaestus's creations, and our hero loses his patience. So Mori sternly asks the Dragon King if he could accommodate his request again. But, as the Dragon King puts it, it's impossible to put a Yoi back together once it's been destroyed. On top of that, it turns out that Mori's Yoi isn't like the rest of the other pillars holding up the Dragon Palace. It's a special one that's harder to fix than the rest of them. Mori won't take no for an answer, so he attempts to cut a deal with the old dragon, telling him that he'll let him eat him if the Dragon King fixes Yoi. Mori goes for the hard sell and tells him that he can become immortal if he eats the Monkey King's body, considering that Mori ate Wanzang's flesh in the past. All Mori asks in return is for him to fix Yoi and wait until he beats Maitreya. The Dragon King listens to Mori's entire pitch. Suddenly, the creature's mouth opens and the Dragon King reveals his true form. A cool grandpa wearing board shorts and a Hawaiian shirt. He tells Mori that his offer is super tempting, but there's really nothing he can do to fix our hero's staff. But he can do the Monkey King better. Instead of fixing Yoi, the Dragon King offers to upgrade it and make the thing stronger than ever before. Mori asks how he'll do it, and the Dragon King goes on an exposition dump about Yoiju, which the old man explains as the apex of dragon knowledge and magic. The Dragon King goes on to tell Mori that their race usually imbues their tools with Yoiju to make it stronger. But Mori's magic staff didn't get this buff due to one specific reason. You see, Yoi was made from the hip bones of a certain dragon that the Dragon King says was one of the most terrifying and powerful members of their race. And in order to imbue Yoi with Yoiju, that same dragon has to acknowledge Mori's ownership of the thing. The problem is, this particular dragon never acknowledged anyone. The Dragon King gets to the point and tells our hero to just crawl in his mouth if he wants to get the Yoiju he needs. He further explains that this won't be an easy task, because 19 of the strongest dragons reside inside his body. But the rewards more than make up for the difficulty. According to the old man, Mori is looking at acquiring 14 dragon columns, 4 red columns, and a black column if he can get the 19 dragons inside him to surrender. Mori wastes no time and accepts the challenge. He promises Sujin he'll be back in no time. God of High School's next chapter opens with a quick rundown of what Dragon King's deal is. He's actually one of the 3 Demon Kings along with Uma and Mori. The difference is, he and his kingdom remained neutral during the demons' war against the gods, mainly to keep his domain safe. But the Dragon Kingdom's neutrality ultimately proved ineffective when Ryong screwed the entire kingdom over. Back to the main plot, Mori finds himself inside the Dragon King's bowels where he spots an entire row of Yoijus. Our hero can tell that the old man decided to hide these powerful artifacts inside his body to keep them safe from the god's eyes. The Dragon King then goes on another monologue, which gives us more details about Mori's latest side quest. First, there's the fact that the Yoijus are actually crystallized forms of thousands of years of dragon knowledge. Anyone who tries to get near them without permission will end up getting absorbed. In fact, we find out that Okwang was hankering to get his hands on one of these things, which partly explains why he agreed to team up with Ryong in the past. Aside from that, the Dragon King also goes on to explain the lay of the proverbial land here, by which we mean his internal organs. As he puts it, the Dragon King's body in its current state is especially toxic. On top of that, Mori can't stay here for too long, because his stomach acids will eventually melt our hero. The Dragon King gets all furious thinking that Mori's doing this mission in his human form, and we learn that this specific quest might just be another duel between the Dragon King and our hero. In response, Mori tells him that he really can't use his powers for fear that Mujin might track them all down. In any case, our hero and the Dragon King square up and get ready for some fisticuffs. Somewhere else, on an unspecified island somewhere in the human realm, a couple of kids follow a couple of supply drones carrying food rations. They eventually stumble upon Mira, and the boys get understandably terrified of the White Witch. They decide to collect food first, so Mira helps him and breaks the 2 drones above them. The food supply falls down and scatters plenty of loaves of bread. Mira follows them and tries to assuage their fears by helping them gather the bread, but the kids run away again until they reach their home. Now their home happens to be some sort of orphanage overseen by a scummy white guy who treats the children like slaves. The kids show him today's loot, and the white guy gets furious after learning that they're missing a couple of French breads in the bag. He pretty much threatens the boys with a beating, but Mira shows up to defend the kids. The white guy mistakes Mira for another drifter looking for a home and shoos her away. Instead, Mira literally sniffs out the orphanage's pantry, and everyone finds out that this jerk has been hoarding food for himself. The white guy gets froggy and tries to attack Mira with his borrowed power, but our heroine easily swats him away. Mira is then reminded of her now-dead adopted kid when she looks at the orphans in front of her. So she helps them out and hands them some food, while the white guy continues to try and start some smoke with the White Witch. As you'd expect, Mira easily fends off the scumbag. The problem is, the borrowed power that he activated instantly lures one of Mujin's death squads to the orphanage. It doesn't even take a moment before a bunch of grotesque creatures try to gang up on Mira, while another random death squad member attempts to steal the blade of Tathagata from her. This idiot ends up getting killed the moment he touches Mira's blade. Meanwhile, one of the orphans pulls out his grandma's glasses from one of their drawers to help out Mira. Along the way, Mira loses her bandages, catches the glasses case, and puts on a pair of spectacles that coincidentally look similar to the original pair of glasses Mira used to wear all the way back in God of High School's first season. The glasses presumably give Mira 20/20 vision, which allows her to carve up Mujin's monsters with ease. Later, the kids start to call Mira the White Angel, a savior with white hair that came out of nowhere to help them out. We also learn that Mira has started to stay in the orphanage, and its residents have begun to sort of worship her like a prophetess due to her powers. While this is happening, Daewoo is in another part of the world, getting brief glimpses of his past, especially Mira. Daewoo can't remember who exactly Mira is, but all he knows right now is that he has to find this woman. Back inside the Dragon King's body, Mori and the old man are having tons of fun in their duel. The Dragon King even starts talking smack and tells our guy that he doesn't need to transform into his true form to whoop Mori's butt. Our hero welcomes this and tells the Dragon King to just keep that same gray-haired clown energy. We then learn that Mira has since taken charge of the orphanage and its community, taking in any and all refugees as they come. It's good work, but their settlement experiences an age-old problem because of this: food shortages. Still, Mira is able to make do with what they have. Not only that, but she's really good at this leadership gig, as Mira manages everything from rations to the physical fitness of her people. But then, Mira herself isn't doing so hot, because we soon find out that she still can't forgive herself for unwittingly playing a part in ruining the world. Sometime later, Mira settles a dispute between a couple of kids who had a fight over some bread. She successfully fixes the problem by handing her ration to one of the kids before telling him to make up with his friend while he still can. This otherwise pleasant day is ruined when Mujin's death squad appears at their settlement to go on another one of their purges. And this time, they brought the Four Pillars Deer to supervise and deal with Mira. Deer immediately starts running his mouth the moment he arrives, exposing Mira's involvement in the Supreme God's revival and basically every other horrible thing that followed it. Deer even gets cheeky and invites her to join their side. The kids, of course, are mortified to learn about this, but Mira cops to her sins and vows to protect her community. The death squad prepares to start culling the kids, but Mira instantly makes a move and slices them up the moment they make a move. Mira lets out one warning: touch a hair on these kids and see what happens. On the other hand, Deer continues talking trash and tells Mira she couldn't possibly save all these kids, to which Mira replies by pretty much saying, "Watch me." Mira gets to work, slicing and dicing Mujin's goose-stepping idiots. Deer gets in on the action and goes for a super nerdy move, attempting to whack Mira with his book. Mira easily blocks it, but Deer tells her that she knows how her body works, namely about how her right arm is actually part of the Jade Emperor's body. Somewhere else, Dewi continues defending his new island home against any sky fortresses that attempt to harm its inhabitants. All the while, he keeps getting more bits and pieces of his memory in the process, particularly about the nightmare he had earlier. The point is, that nightmare where he lost his right arm during his last duel was real. Curiously, we also get a hint that Mira might have played a part in rescuing Dewi during this fight, as we see her in front of Dewi right before he passed out. In the present, Deer chops off Mira's fake right arm and tries to steal the blade of Tathagata, but scrubs like him don't have the authorization to wield the powerful weapon. More of Mujin's monstrous death squad members try to take out the kids, but Mira is able to jump in and protect them like she promised. She even apologizes to a couple of them for what she has done in the past. And now Mira has had enough of these scumbags trying to destroy her new community. So she casually activates her Wolfgang Swordsmanship Unleashed ability and turns each and every one of the Death Squad members into minced meat. Somewhere else, Dewi senses Mira's aura, but nothing comes of it for now because our story returns its focus on Mira. Deer once again runs his mouth, and Mira has had enough of this nerd at this point. So the long and short of it is that our heroine knows she's done some bad things, but in almost exactly her own words, she just wants to set something straight, which is why she's doing all this crap helping these kids and protecting this community. Deer eventually finds an opening and stabs Mira in the back with the blade of Tathagata, but this nerd gets a rude awakening when he realizes that he fell for Mira's trap, as our heroine summons her own sword back and proceeds to drive Deer through several feet of stone wall like the scrub that he is. But Deer ultimately manages to teleport before anything satisfyingly bad happens to him, and with him gone, Mira's free to check up on her children. The kids then give her some bread and tell her that they forgive her for whatever it is she thinks she's done. They all become friends again. And the chapter ends with Mira hoping that Dewi's alright. On a side note, Mira might have just friend-zoned the love of her life, given how she refers to Dewi here as her buddy. God of High School's next installment finally gives us the full details of what happened after Dewi's defeat at the hands of Mujin. It turns out that Mira indeed showed up the moment Mujin lopped off Dewi's right arm. Mira would have a quick duel with Mujin, and it's here we learn how she ended up losing her right eye when we first saw her meet the kids. On the bright side, Mira does manage to land a cut on the guy with the blade of Tathagata, and with a bit of help from Heitei, Mira was ultimately able to whisk away Dewi from the battlefield. We then find out that she headed straight for the same island where the Amazons lived, and that's how Dewi's Amazonian wife saw what looked to her like an angel. Mira then used her powers to transfer her own right arm to Dewi. This particular chapter of the story mostly happens between two distinct timelines. There's Mira's timeline, which happens shortly before Dewi's. Now we find out that Dewi has taken the Amazons away from their island to go and search for Mira. He and his crew eventually reach an unspecified ruined city and learn from strangers that Mira has passed through the area. A flashback then reveals that Mira gave her community the order to vacate their home for fear that more of Mujin's death squads would come after them. All the while, Mira sees images of R and Mandok, whose main purpose is to pretty much tempt our heroine into becoming a power-hungry savage. But Mira seems to be doing better now, as she's able to ignore these inner voices. There's also this quote-unquote funny subplot here involving one of the kids wanting to marry Mira. It doesn't contribute anything to the main plot, so we'll just go ahead and say it ends with Mira hoodwinking the kid into enrolling into her Wolfgang swordsmanship dojo. Back in the present, Daewoo and the Amazons continue their quest, and we find out that Mira has headed for the World Government Building in hopes of joining the rest of our heroes' resistance movement and finding safe refuge for her people. The story then shifts back to Mira at an earlier point in time when they found a seemingly safe spot to establish their community due to the area being one of the world government's supply drop points. But Mira knows Mujin's death squads will just find them there, so they continue moving. In the present, Daewoo and the Amazons finally reach the ruins of New Korea, and a random citizen points them to the World Government Building. We then shift back to Mira, who we find out made something short of a miracle upon their arrival at New Korea. She managed to use her abilities to dig a well for her people and all of New Korea's citizens to have some potable water. In the present, Daewoo learns about this development from another random old guy on the streets of the war-torn city, and his whole party rushes to the well to get some drinking water. But here's where things take a dark turn for our hero. Daewoo asks the same old dude where Mira went, and he says that she's already dead. We then get a glimpse of Mujin's sky fortresses bombarding what remains of New Korea with lasers. However, we don't yet know if this happened in the present or back when Mira arrived in the city. We then get more details from Mira's flashback, as we see her digging for water in the middle of the city using a hoe. Mira goes on a whole monologue about technique being more important than power, but a vision of R interrupts her work, causing our heroine to just forget about this menial labor and just start swinging her sword around as part of her training. The main takeaway here is Mira isn't used to swinging a sword with her left arm yet. Unknown to her, Ryong and Monkey are actually stalking our heroine. As a matter of fact, Ryong considers Mira to be a prime candidate for Mujin's genocidal selection process. But Monkey tells him to just sit back and let Deer do his job, as we learn that Deer has actually been assigned to purge and recruit candidates in the West, the same place where Mira hails in this post-time skip God of High School continuity. Monkey and Ryong then gossip about Deer and say that this nerd is actually the most sadistic among the four pillars. Later, Mira arrives in Mujin's old underground lair and arrives at his hidden armory where all the national treasures and legendary weapons he's stolen are being kept. We then finally get confirmation that Mujin's concerted nuking of New Korea happened not too long ago in the past. That is to say, before Daewoo arrived in the city. Mira watches the sky fortresses turn what remains of New Korea into an uninhabitable hellhole with their laser blasts. In the present, a citizen points Daewoo to the area where Mira presumably was last seen alive. Returning to the flashback, we finally get some action when Deer arrives in front of Mira and starts flapping his lips to throw off her game. Everything he says up to this point doesn't move the plot forward, but at least we learn some much-needed backstory for this nerd. It turns out that Deer's actually a forest god, and an exceedingly insane one at that. His main mission is to quote-unquote return the world to its rightful owner. And by rightful owner, he just means trees and all other flora in the world. Sparks finally fly when Deer makes the first move and starts terraforming a huge chunk of New Korea with trees and roots. Oh, and since he's a so-called forest god, of course Deer hates humans. So he uses his roots to, well, root out the survivors hiding underneath the city. We also see Bongrim has survived the bonkers events that started with Mujin's ascension, so that's nice. But this staff master doesn't have a part to play in the story just yet, so we return to Deer, who's so racist that he starts throwing up when he smells humans in the underground refuge. Deer gets super turned on by the idea of exterminating the survivors, and he proceeds to execute random people a few at a time by turning them into huge, pretty lotus flowers. Deer then goes even more nuts and starts reveling in the chaos, yelling that he'll pretty much turn all of the world into a beautiful garden for Mujin. Mira has yet to make a move, but she's spurred on when Deer starts murdering her kids. And you gotta hand it to Deer, his methods might be brutal, but the man knows how to come up with results. And you can't deny that he's actually making New Korea look more beautiful. Still, Mira's not having any of this, so our heroine finally gets down to business and lunges at Deer. He blocks her blade with his book. Deer talks trash as usual, and Mira's community helps her in the battle with their own borrowed powers. Aside from being a forest god, Deer probably fashions himself as a professional pest, because this dude really can't shut his mouth during their next clash. Regardless, Deer does show us that he knows how to bring results when he gets the better of Mira and causes another giant lotus flower to grow out of her back. Mira then has another vision of R, and this time she's had enough of his criticisms, so she headbutts him repeatedly. But remember, Mira's the only one who can see R, so from Deer's perspective, Mira just looks like she's gone off the deep end. And you won't exactly be wrong to think that, because at this point, Mira absolutely snaps. She snaps at R, she snaps at Deer, she even snaps at her community for calling her a saint. On the bright side, Mira's tantrum finally allows her to embrace her destiny, as she tells her people to call her for what she really is, a big old thug boss. And true to her new title, Mira finally reawakens her potential, as she summons her signature borrowed power. Not only that, but our heroine is finally able to get back the 108 agonies, the arsenal of national treasures that Hao Yang passed on to her. In a flashback one day we found the cane of the sage back inside Mubong's lair. The other weapons inside the cylinders filled with yellow liquid are all weapons of Hao Yang Seo's national treasure collection. Back to Mira's battle, our heroine transforms into her head of the 26th National Homeless Association, current member of the 6th, and which of the West Weapon Master Mira used 108 agonies, Hao Yang Seo's national treasure collection form. That word sound of a name basically implies that Mira has regained her full powers after all these years. And now she rushes toward Deer for another clash, but the forest god seemingly gets the better of her. Well, not really, because God of High School's next chapter gives us the immediate payoff, as we find out that Mira's still well in the game. Mira counters with her blade. They tussle a bit before ultimately resetting, and Deer uses his Deer Eye's X-ray vision ability to learn that Mira's body has fragments of Okwang's body, which explains why she's become so durable. Meanwhile, Mira restarts the clash, all the while reminding herself to focus on technique instead of pure strength alone. It sort of works, because Mira is able to eventually stab Deer. The problem is, she lacks the raw strength to actually pierce his body, so much so that Mira thinks a one-handed sword won't be enough to kill this mouthy forest god. We're just going to ignore running down Deer's trash talk from here on out because it's frankly lamer than Mandoc on a wheelchair. But what's relevant here is that a couple of Mira's kids jump into the action to protect their boss when she and Deer reset for another clash. Mira shoves away the kids before Deer could hit them with one of his fabulous flower powers, but these boys and the other members of her community are solid to the end. In turn, Deer transforms several of Mira's community members into pretty lotus flowers before getting into another clash with her heroine. Mira's surviving community members refuse to back down and insist on helping Mira with their own borrowed powers even if it costs them their lives, because real bosses like her inspire people. Meanwhile, Mira has had enough of Deer's weak sauce smack talk and declares that she's helping her people because she wants to, proving that our girl has finally gotten over her trauma of the past. Yongji Park breaks the story's momentum by going for another flashback, which shows Beck loading Mira's information in Moonjin's system. In the present, a metal chamber hidden deep within Moonjin's old stronghold starts to activate. Meanwhile, Mira's left arm starts writhing and twisting until bone comes out. On the other side of the battlefield, Deer breaks one of his antlers to summon his weapon called Deer Antlers. This also makes him transform into an even more fabulous version of himself, because now he has a red cape, a loop of binding, and a bead necklace. And just to prove how saucy this forest god has become, the first thing he does after his transformation is hit Mira with a wonderfully named technique called Flower Power. Mira gets caught in a whirlwind of flower petals, while Deer compresses his Deer Antler's power to try and smite our heroine. But Mira is on a whole other level now. She just points her sword at Deer's general direction and pretty much tells him to try her and see what happens. But the real kicker of this chapter happens when we find out that the metallic chamber from earlier actually houses Moonjin's old Wi-Fi arm. Meanwhile, Mira and Deer clash yet again. The story's momentum gets hampered once more when we move to the present and see Daewoo remembering a bit more of Moonjin while looking at New Korea's ruined cityscape. And if that's not enough, we get another different flashback showing Daewoo having a heart-to-heart with his old best friend, Sung Tai, who has apparently reincarnated as a cat and has been watching Daewoo throughout all these years. Back to the exciting part of the story, we see the aftermath of Mira and Deer's latest clash. She sees another vision of R, who tells her that she's got something more than technique and strength. Our girl possesses luck. And then we finally get the big payoff when we find out that Mira now has Moonjin's right arm attached to her stump. Mira prepares to permanently shut this forest god's mouth. Even better, Bongram and her community's kids have just used their Generation X resonance ability to hook up Mira with a power boost to the blade of Tathagata. Mira's robot arm gets even more jacked as the Wi-Fi system activates. She goes for a devastating overhead slice aimed right at Deer's head. In fact, Mira chops down so hard that even a bunch of Moonjin's sky fortresses get cleaved in the process. Unfortunately, we're going to have to hear more of Deer's prattling because we immediately learn that he's able to block Mira's blade with his Deer Antlers. The two combatants are forced to reset again, and they both feel blood gushing out of their body after their previous clash. Deer then uses a technique called 7 Lotuses, while Mira thinks of a way to keep protecting her community in spite of her reaching her body's limit. But Mira is able to dig deep and summon the 108 Agonies again. Another clash erupts, and this time Deer notices that Mira seemingly knows where his attacks are coming from even before he pulls them. Deer gets a quick flashback of the time he first got his powers from Tathagata in exchange for becoming one of his disciples. It's also implied that Deer had to abandon the rest of his Deer People community after this. Thankfully, the story doesn't dwell too much on another flashback and we immediately return to the present. Back to the action. Deer and Mira continue duking it out. Deer ups the ante when he activates a powerful ability called 12,000 Lotuses, which renders him topless and even more fabulous than before. He then launches laser beams from a few of the flower monsters he summoned with the 12,000 Lotuses, each with their own elemental affinity. In response, Mira connects to the Wi-Fi and summons a bunch of borrowed powers who each could counter the elemental affinity of Deer's 12,000 Lotuses technique. All the while, the rest of her community joins in to assault the flower monsters with their own borrowed powers, while Mira finally finds an opening and satisfyingly cleaves Deer right from his shoulder down to his hip. Deer won't accept losing to a human like Mira because he's a racist. So he transforms yet again into a not-so-fabulous deer creature, aka his true form. He then uses a technique called Howl of an Old Deer, which is exactly as it sounds. Deer literally howls like a wolf to summon even more beautiful flowers behind him. In turn, Mira gets more jacked when she activates all the bandwidth from New Korea's Wi-Fi, which culminates in a worldwide barrier known as Wi-Fi Aurora version Beck. This presumably protects everyone in the immediate vicinity from what she's about to do. Next, Mira channels the Blade of Tathagata as she prepares for one final clash with Deer. Our heroine then sees visions of old enemies like Swordmaster Ryu and Shim Bongsa, who just made a cameo to tell her that she needs to have some mental flexibility in lieu of physical strength. Mira and Deer continue to square up, while narration states that the Blade of Tathagata is currently infused with the lives of 48,000 people, but it only contains a few hundred borrowed powers. More fanfare comes when Mira next sees a vision of Hao Yang, who basically tells Mira to show her enemy what human skill can truly do. We finally get some payoff as Mira slashes Deer with the blade, targeting the forest god's fingers. Deer notices that he's still in this fight when he spots that Mira has dropped the Blade of Tathagata, but that's only because our heroine wants a bit of variety when killing this mouthy member of the Four Pillars. Mira summons another one of her national treasures and sticks its pointy end right into Deer's gut. Deer tries to counter with his deer antler technique, but ultimately takes a fatal blow, which forces him to transform back to his semi-human form. And you gotta give this dude some credit, he really never shuts up. The dude is dying, but he keeps on running his mouth and tells Mira that she might have won their battle, but she still failed to save everyone. Not one to take a loss, Deer goes for one final gambit. We then see Ryong just so he could shout at Deer not to use his technique. And no, Deer doesn't hear it because Ryong is far away from the battlefield. We then bear witness to the full effect of Deer's ultimate move, a technique he calls Black Lotus. Mira immediately realizes this is bad news, so she tells her people to get as far away as possible. The Black Lotus technique sprouts one towering Black Lotus flower in the middle of the battlefield, one that reaches as high as the clouds above the skies of New Korea's ruins. Our story then shifts its focus to the present, where Daewee continues talking with the New Korean citizen from earlier. The old man tells him again that Mira's dead, and it's implied that she along with hundreds of others of her people were turned into Black Lotus flowers after getting hit with Deer's final gambit. The old man says that only a few people were able to move out of range of Deer's ability. The rest didn't make it. Daewee won't accept that Mira's dead, so the old guy tells him to do what he wants. This old dude's a really good guy too, because even though Daewee shut him out by pretty much saying he doesn't believe the man's story, he points our hero to a nearby community where Daewee might search for Mira. Daewee then turns to his cute brown-skinned wife and the rest of the Amazons to say goodbye, as he prepares to continue for Mira. To his wife's credit, she doesn't stop Daewee from abandoning her and their baby like an absolute deadbeat. Instead, she wishes him well and even hands him a memento that she says will make Daewee's dream come true. Along the way, Daewee sees a vision of Okwang, who criticizes his decision to leave the Amazons just to go look for Mira. Anyway, most of this chapter in God of High School Saga just sees Daewee going from one place to another to ask people around if they've seen Mira. This goes on for a while until Daewee arrives at the same location where Mira first established her community. He's greeted by a trio of kids trained at Mira's Wolgang swordsmanship school who would lead him to their boss. Daewee assumes they're referring to Mira but is disappointed when he learns that his boss is just some annoying kid with an eye patch and a pink mohawk. Daewee learns that this boy isn't the real boss, and he points our hero to the nearby village square. Daewee gets his hopes up and arrives at the village square only to find a floral tribute dedicated to Mira, which gives him confirmation that the love of his life is dead. Daewee gets depressed and starts sulking, while Okwang's ghost piles on. Daewee eventually gets back on his feet, and he spots a few kids running towards a world government drone playing a rerun of the old God of High School tournament that he, Mira, and Mori participated in all those years ago. Daewee decides to reminisce about the past while watching the show. And in a truly cheesy sequence, it's revealed that Mira survived her battle with Deer, as she appears in the background and eventually watches the God of High School tournament rerun beside Daewee. The two finally reunite. Even better, it turns out that it's Mira's birthday today. Oh, and one of her community members just gave birth to a baby, which they also named Mira. It's good vibes all around. And that whole floral tribute at the village square? Yup, that's a fake out. It's revealed that the kids made it as a birthday present for Mira. Mira's community then has a feast. Meanwhile, Dewi asks Mira to marry her, and she accepts his proposal. The two lovebirds finally get together again, as they romantically hold hands with each other. It's super sweet as long as you don't think about the fact that Dewi's already married and has a baby with that cute brown-skinned shaman from the Amazons. After some time, we finally move back to the battle between Mori and the Dragon King. In his dragon form, the old man senses Mori's smile and thinks our hero has gone crazy. More relevant to the plot, we learn that Mori has acquired 5 dragon columns or yois at this point. Mori responds that he feels that something great just happened, which implies he has sensed the reunion of his best friends, Mira and Dewi. Regardless, these two warriors really can't hide the fact that they're having a great time trying to cave each other's face in, as Mori invites the Dragon King for another clash. Now, if you think God of High School is finally getting back on track and continuing where we last left off with Mori and the Dragon King, then you're out of luck. That's because the next chapter of this story is just a montage of flashbacks that mostly just retread everything that's happened until now. But there are a few interesting developments here. In the present, we learn that Beck is finally reunited with Uma, and they're well aware that Mira defeated Deer using Wi-Fi. As for Deer, we learn that this flamboyant forest god is still alive when Rabbit arrives at the spot where he supposedly died and he digs himself from underground. He couldn't believe that he just lost to a mere human. Then there's the fact that Rabbit's Bombto isn't just the name she calls her little clone minions. It's also a speech impediment where she says this word at the end of nearly every sentence. Deer has a flashback showing that he borrowed his antlers from Mujin before tussling with Mira. In a different flashback, we see Mori arriving in New Korea and drinking some water from the same well that Mira and her people dug. The flashback after this thankfully moves the overall plot of God of High School forward, as we find out that Rabbit, Deer, and a huge army of Mujin's goons ambushed the world government headquarters after one of Rabbit's Bombto clones latched itself onto Grandpa and spied on them. Ilpio would then task Executives 7 and G to escape their mountain bunker with the Holy Grail. Shortly after that, Ilpio had a duel with Rabbit and Deer, but Deer soon left the vicinity after noticing that Mira was not there. Meanwhile, Ilpio got into it with Rabbit, and a few of his trusted executives jumped in to help out their boss. In fact, Executive 1 almost gets killed during the scuffle, but not before proving he's one of the most loyal soldiers under Ilpio's command when he tells him how it was an honor to serve him before Rabbit tried popping him like a balloon. Thankfully, Ilpio recovered just in time to intervene, rescue Executive 1, and get right back to dueling with Rabbit. It's also in the same flashback where Beck first reunited with Uma. The story finally returns to the present, but no Mori vs. Dragon King just yet. Instead, we learn that Mujin has desecrated Unyo's corpse to help him summon Gaia before telling his death squads that they're going to destroy the world and depart for a so-called promised land aboard their new ark. God of High School's 498th chapter unsurprisingly starts with yet another flashback, but at least we finally return to Mori and the Dragon King's challenge. We see Mori during his first trial, which is to defeat the 7th Dragon King. Well, Mori proves that he's down to tussle even without using his full might when he easily beats the crap out of the 7th Dragon King. We fast forward a little bit where we see Mori having just passed the 19th Dragon's test in just a week. And with that done, the Monkey King has acquired all the Yuijus needed to complete this fetch quest. The old man gives him a new red staff as a reward, but Mori thinks it won't be enough to take out Mujin. So our hero asks where he can find Yoi's Yuiju, to which the Dragon King replies that it's here somewhere. However, there's a condition to acquiring the darn thing. But their conversation is interrupted when an earthquake rocks the entire world and even collapses the Dragon Palace. The Dragon King informs Mori that Mujin caused this quake as part of his bonkers ritual to destroy the current world order. Even worse, the Dragon King informs Mori that Mujin's starting to gain full control of his godly abilities. Conveniently enough, this same earthquake just fulfilled the first requirement for Mori to gain Yoi's Yuiju. To be specific, it involves uncovering the remains of the ancient dragon, the first, most evil, and lowest of the dragons. The earthquake that rocked the world just now managed to destroy the seal preventing this dragon from rising from the dead. The Dragon King tells Mori to run while he can as this dragon can't be controlled. As the Dragon King puts it, the other dragons call her Catastrophe, and she once drove all of dragonkind to extinction. And even though her physical body's gone, her mind remains, and it's still as dangerous as before. So running away really won't do anything to save him. The Dragon King then senses Catastrophe and tells Mori to get out of his belly this instant. But they're too late. The ancient dragon arrives and appears behind Mori. The Monkey King quickly uses his brand new red Yoi and places it on the right side of her face. And now God of High School introduces Catastrophe as Ogre, the beginning and end of all dragons. The current Dragon King greets her as he kneels down in front of her to pay his respects. Ogre appears as a young humanoid dragon in front of Mori. She points a finger on his chest, but our hero wastes no time and hits her hand away. He gets on top of her and grabs her by the throat to try and choke her out. However, this doesn't affect Ogre at all, as she just easily slips away from our hero's full guard and stands up while Mori is still holding her throat. Ogre then steals his new Yoi. She then comments about how familiar Mori smells even though they've never met before. Mori then gets excited and prepares to wail on Ogre, thinking that she's a pushover like the other 19 dragons he faced during the Dragon King's test. Well, our hero's tune immediately changes when he senses that Ogre really is way more powerful than the scrubs he just defeated. The Dragon King then goes on an exposition dump to tell us about Ogre's origin story. As the tale goes, long before the arrival of gods on Earth, Ogre was the ancestor of all dragons and the first master of the world before the humans. The strongest and most wicked dragon in history, that is until the gods arrived in the human realm to mess things up as they always do. In the middle of the battlefield, Ogre tells Mori that they're the same and calls him a bastard child of Gaia. Ogre then starts swinging the staff she stole from Mori, and our hero can sense that she's the real deal. That is to say, she's way more powerful than all the other dragons he's faced so far. Ogre goes on the offensive using the red staff, and Mori's forced to go on the back foot and stay as close to her as possible to avoid taking huge hits. But this ultimately fails because Ogre is just that good. Mori even notices that she's so good with the pole that Ogre is able to attack with one end of it and defend with the other. Our hero refers to this as a spatial attack, which simply means that Ogre doesn't have any weak points in her fighting style. To make things even more difficult, Ogre knows how to put variety in her moveset, as she throws in a few sudden point jabs in between her powerful pole swings. As a matter of fact, Ogre is so good with the staff that Mori can't help but be impressed. Her skills almost seem unfair. Still, our hero doesn't get thrown off, and he even starts talking trash. He tells Ogre he'll eat her whole, but all he gets is another powerful thwack of Ogre's enlarged pole, which Mori barely blocks with his arms. From there, Ogre tries to crush Mori by making her staff grow in size, but our hero is able to counter by giving the weapon his own command for it to get bigger, which allows the two combatants to reset. Mori then commends Ogre on how she's different from the other dragons, given that she knows her way around Yoi. But our boy follows it up with more trash talk, as Mori pretty much says he's better with it and that he'll crush her into dust. Ogre weirdly refers to Mori as Ryong, and the two combatants get into another close-range duel. They're pretty evenly matched until Ogre capitalizes on an opening and manages to slap Mori around with her staff. Mori takes a huge beating, but he soon recovers when he summons another pillar from the ground. And just so we're clear guys, each and every pole, staff, and pillar here actually answers to the name Yoi. There's no real explanation for this in the story, but we think it's because like Mori's original Yoi, everything in this place is made of dragon bone. Going back to our story, Mori starts summoning even more dragon bone pillars from underground. He then proceeds to rush Ogre before launching all the Yois he summoned right at her. Mori follows up with his trademark Ryogun technique, but Ogre's quick to get back on her feet, and the two warriors duke it out again. Meanwhile, the Dragon King notices that Mori's using a bunch of dragon bone poles and figures that the Monkey King is stealing his stuff again. The old man starts crying and ranting, and for some reason he also calls Mori Ryong. Back on the battlefield, Ogre uses her staff to channel an ability called 13th Ice Pick, which turns the staff into a needle that not only pierces the pillar that Mori is using as a shield, but runs straight into his chest. She then pulls off a technique called Second Gon, turning the staff into a pair of Eskrima-style sticks that she uses to beat Mori senseless. Mori almost gets knocked out, while Ogre explains that each dragon bone has its own advantages and that our hero has a lot to learn in the art of using these weapons. Instead of finishing off Mori though, Ogre says she has to check something, so she summons her so-called chest, which she explains as her personal sanctuary that's cut off from the rest of the world, and brings Mori in there with her. Ogre asks our hero if he's eaten the blood of Gaia or her descendants. Mori says yes, and he transforms into his Monkey King form. Not too far away, the Dragon King notices that Mori hasn't lost a step even after all these millennia. The guy's still an absolute beast in the arena. Mori tries to explain himself, but Ogre cuts him off and says that she only brought him to her chest in order to unleash her full power against him. And in another classic cold-blooded moment in God of High School, Ogre vows that she's going to drain every drop of the Monkey King's blood and pour it on the earth even if it destroys her soul. This is payment for Mori devouring the blood of its creator, referring to none other than Wanzang. Mori and Ogre get into another clash, this time more intense than before. They find themselves on even footing at first, but Ogre tries to break the deadlock by using her 13th Ice Pick technique again. But if there's one thing you can count on, it's that Mori is an absurdly quick learner when it comes to violence. He's able to defend himself against Ogre's 13th Ice Pick this time, as he summons his own Yoi and uses a defensive technique called 27th Rhino. Mori then notes that Ogre's chest really works in shielding his presence from Mujin, considering the man still hasn't located him in spite of using his powers at full force. Mori prepares for another clash, while Ogre calls him Ryong again for some unexplained reason. Meanwhile, the Dragon King notices Mori's power growing with every passing minute of his duel against Ogre. At the same time, Ogre realizes that Mori might be the new guardian that Gaia chose. Now, if you thought Ogre and the Dragon King repeatedly calling Mori Ryong wasn't confusing enough, wait until we tell you about this upcoming flashback that Youngji Park pulled out of his fundament. Because in this flashback, Ogre introduces herself as Ryong. So apparently there are now 3 Ryongs in this insane manhwa, namely Mori, Ogre, and the 4 Pillars Dragon, aka the original Ryong. Sheesh. In any case, this equally crazy flashback starts with Ogre explaining that she was made by Gaia to be the height of all creation. She's basically been around since near the beginning of the world and was pretty much just minding her own business until Tathagata and his scumbag pals from the Heavenly Realm arrived on Earth and murdered Gaia. Of course, Ogre wanted to get revenge against Tathagata and his cronies for what they did to her mom. So she and the other dragons went to war with these jerks. The war incurs heavy losses on dragonkind, but they're able to hold their own against the gods. That is until all other dragons screwed over Ogre in a deal they made with Okwang, which involved ending the conflict in exchange for surrendering Ogre to these scummy deities. It was also around this period that Xiao Chen started to go nuts and went on a campaign of extermination against dragonkind. More to the point, Ogre ends up getting captured, and the gods buried her alive deep within the earth. The past dragons even made a Yoi Gyomgo staff out of her bones after she got sealed. In the present, Ogre confirms that Mori is indeed Gaia's latest guardian while in the middle of their latest clash. Even more curious is when we learn that Ogre is actually more or less Mori's mom, since she hatched him from her body millennia ago while she was trapped underground for nutrients. But right now, the only thing running through Ogre's mind is getting revenge for what Mori did to Wanzang. You know, because betrayal was the worst thing she's experienced in the past. Things get even more unhinged when Ogre ups the stakes and uses a bevy of techniques that transforms all the staff and poles around her into 91st Flame, 98th Ice, 13th Ice Pick, 63rd Saber-Toothed Tiger, 27th Rhino, 146th Serpent, 177th Centaur, 55th Goliath, 134th Bladed Dragon, 110th Tortoise, and 2nd Lizard. If you hadn't noticed already, each and every one of these dragon bone staffs has their own characteristics within them, each based on the actual dragon whose bones make up any given staff. Ogre then punctuates her upcoming salvo by transforming into her original form, the first ancient dragon. The insanity doesn't end there, because now we learn from Mori that this whole arena they're fighting in is actually Mujin's barrier. Regardless of whether this makes sense or not, the point is that Mori gets excited seeing Ogre break this barrier. The Monkey King realizes that he can definitely take out Mujin once he acquires Ogre's power. Mori and Ogre then prepare to clash one more time, but the story's momentum is broken once more when we shift to the Temple of Tathagata where Monkey sees Yoi suddenly rumble. Meanwhile, Mujin pays a visit to his personal nursery, where a whole batch of chosen kids who are presumably members of Generation X are currently grazing, and wow, these kids love him. Later, one of his Death Squad goons reports that they've successfully cleansed the world of 4.47 billion people and 1 million were able to pass Mujin's bonkers selection process. Mujin's not too happy with the results, saying that his lackeys are working too slow. So to increase productivity, Mujin calls the entire Death Squad and leaves a single member alive before telling them that they have 3 days to finish the selection process. Sometime later, Mujin goes back to his private chamber and finally meets Gaia. He asks the Earth Goddess to give him the power to create a new world for him and his underlings. Gaia firmly refuses, especially considering that Mujin just dug up her descendant Unyo's corpse and desecrated it just to give her a call. But Mujin's the kind of scumbag who doesn't take no for an answer, so he forces Gaia to give him what he wants. Gaia realizes that Mujin wants to be a god, as he prepares to perform another one of his techniques on Gaia. We don't get the payoff to that here just yet, because the story moves back to Ogre's chest, where Mori is currently walloping his opponent's summon monster with his own dragon bone pillar. It doesn't necessarily work, because the creatures just continue to loom over our hero. In fact, Mori's getting pressured now, but what he does next proves that the Monkey King might be super dumb in most other aspects of life, but he's a bona fide genius when it comes to martial arts. It all starts with Mori grabbing his staff tightly with both hands and planting it into the ground. Our hero then commands Yoi to get bigger, and though it looks like nothing is happening at first glance, we soon find out that he's actually making his staff get larger from the opposite end, the one buried underground. Mori just keeps sticking his staff deeper and deeper into the ground with every command that it doesn't take long before it looks like Yoi has grown roots. Meanwhile, the Dragon King has a stomachache, because remember, they're all inside his body right now, and his grumbly tummy is directly caused by what Mori's doing with Yoi. Ogre notices that Mori might be trying to break his barrier, and our hero hurries when he notices that the Ancient Dragon King's onto him. And here's where the Monkey King's battle genius truly shines. He gives us a satisfying payoff when he willingly transforms back to his Mori-Dan form, which then causes his grip to significantly loosen. This results in Yoi acting like a tight bowstring that has been released. The next thing we know, Yoi has just shot up from deep underground to act like a supersonic slingshot that slices Ogre's summon monsters in one fell swoop. Of course, our hero puts his trademark on this new move and gives this technique a name, Mori-Jin Original Jishuk. As strong as Jishuk was, Mori's a tad disappointed that he didn't wind it up enough to hit Ogre. Ogre asks our hero if he just busted out one of his original moves. To his credit, Mori pretty much says they didn't plan to come up with this technique, but he'll take credit for it. Not too far away, the Dragon King is super impressed with our hero's performance, especially the fact that Mori is able to come up with fresh new moves without planning for them. But what really makes the old man hand Mori his laurels is how he's able to turn his weakness as a human into an advantage. As the Dragon King puts it, that was no accident at all. Ogre shares the same sentiments, but she does have one glaring criticism about Mori's hot new ability, that it's too unrefined. It lacks finesse. In turn, Ogre tells our guy to try that move on her again. But this time, Mori better make sure he's ready to lay his life on the line when he attempts to pull it off. Mori gets cocky and says he wasn't even trying his hardest just now, and the two combatants go for another clash. Mori works the pole so masterfully that he's able to land a few good shots at Ogre. All the while, our hero tells himself to just push himself a bit harder, and he'll inevitably get where he wants to be. Their latest tussle culminates in Mori using a 30-second kite, which segments Yoi and turns it into something that's akin to a Japanese Sensetsukan, a segmented battle staff. Mori then finds the opening he's been waiting for and plants Yoi in the ground again to prepare for another Jishuk strike. But his efforts fall short when Ogre jumps right in front of our hero and cancels Mori's technique. She even drops a lesson on him. That Jishuk might be a strong technique, but it takes too much time to load up. Ogre barrages Mori and leaves our hero stunned. But it's at this point where it's hinted that Ogre might be finally warming up to our hero, because instead of talking smack, she simply tells Mori to keep going so that they could reset their duel. Mori gets back on his feet and promises that his next attack will work, and the two warriors get into it yet again. Meanwhile, the Dragon King is surprised to see other Dragon Kings of the past standing beside him. They're absolutely mystified with Mori's abilities. As one of these dragons puts it, Mori is like a dragon bone, an endless source of power. Hearing that reminds the Dragon King of the time Ryong, or to be more exact, the original Ryong, beat him in battle before leaving. We get more information about Ryong's betrayal and find out that he did what he did because he thought that all of Dragonkind had gotten complacent for far too long. In his words, he'd rather go out with a bang than just fizzle out, because that's what a true dragon does. Oh, and we get the small revelation that Ryong was the one who broke one of his old man's horns back during that fateful confrontation. In the present, the Dragon Kings of the past ultimately declare their allegiance to the Monkey King. At that moment, Mori starts to feel like Yoi has become a part of his own body. Even better, the other dragon's fealty to the Monkey King provides our hero with even more magical poles at his disposal. So Mori wastes no time to launch them at Ogre, who's equally surprised by this bonkers development. More than that, Ogre realizes that Mori has just copied her previous move. Our hero gets the upper hand from there, as he smacks around Ogre in the face with his staff before hitting her with recoilless crash. He misses, but Ogre immediately notices that our hero's now gearing up for another powerful attack, this time grabbing his pole with two hands and spinning it around. It all culminates with another Jishuk strike, but Ogre doesn't care, because she's been waiting for this the whole time. Even better, we learned that not all of the other dragons are a bunch of traitors to their own kind, as one of them, 201st Jr., declares his allegiance to Ogre and becomes her own weapon to counter Mori's Jishuk with another technique called Dragon Flash. The two abilities meet in the middle, and both Mori and Ogre get rocked. Back in the human world, we find out that Ryong has been staring at the giant Yoi pillar in the middle of the ocean. He comments about how embarrassing it is that one of the strongest weapons in the universe was broken in two. But his musings are interrupted when Monkey gives him a call to come into the office. Monkey shows Ryong the other half of Mori's original Yoi, and this disgraced dragon prince does not like the way it's currently moving about. Ryong tells Monkey the deal. This particular Yoi is being summoned right now, but instead of immediately finding a way to solve this problem, Monkey starts commenting about how terrifying it is that dragons literally fashion weapons out of their bones. And now they've even started putting their souls inside them. Ryong agrees and says that his kin has gone mad. As a matter of fact, it's why he believes Dragonkind was doomed to fail. Monkey then goes on to explain Mori's Yoi's specs, telling Ryong that this particular pole doesn't have a dragon's soul in it, because the dragons were afraid of the dead. But it's because of this same belief that dragons manage to create weapons that other species can't even begin to dream of. Unsurprisingly, Mori's Yoi breaks out of its chains and flies off into the distance while these two morons are yapping about the history of dragon bone weapons. Ryong panics and decides to call for Mujin's help, but Monkey stops him, telling Ryong that their boss is busy meeting Gaia's soul right now. As he puts it, there's no telling what kind of effect even the slightest disturbance on this meeting might have on Mujin. Monkey's not too worried about Yoi either, because he believes that this world is going to end anyway, if Mujin's negotiations with Gaia go well. So Ryong just watches Mori's original pole fly away, and we find out that he spared his dad's life in the past because of Mori, and now Ryong wants to have fun with the Monkey King. Back at the Dragon Palace, Ogre asks Mori what technique he pulled off just now. Our hero tells her that he combined Jishuk with his renewal Taekwondo, and we learned that it hit Ogre square in the chest. But this does nothing to harm her. In fact, she goes so far as to tell Mori that it's not good enough just yet. Even more, it's revealed that Ogre just cut Mori open during their previous clash. Mori's original Yoi then drops right behind Ogre. And there's a silver lining to all this, because Ogre ultimately declares fealty towards Mori due to her curiosity to see what Mori could do with G-Shook when he's able to perform the complete version of the technique. Ogre then asks him if he can handle this power, and Mori gets all rude with this ancient dragon girl. She calls him Ryong again for some reason, and it's here we get the big payoff for this entire side quest, as all the other spirits of the old Dragon Kings formally ally themselves with Mori and become his Yoibong. Meanwhile, Ogre expresses how upset she is that our hero was able to go toe-to-toe with her even with just half of a dragon bone. But more good news comes when she fuses herself with Mori's original Yoi, becoming its personal Yoiju. The Dragon King then approaches our hero and warns him that he can't use all of his new weapons at once. As he says, it's impossible to use so many dragon bones infused with Yoijus all at once, especially if your entire arsenal also includes a staff that literally has the soul of the most powerful dragon in it. Simply put, it would be too much for Mori to handle. But the Monkey King remains undeterred and says he has to do this. The Dragon King is actually surprised with how observant Mori is, as he tells the old man that Mujin is most likely preoccupied with something else right now, given that he didn't sense his original Yoi's arrival just now. All this convinces the old man to declare his allegiance to Mori as well. Even more, we learn that 201st Jr., the same dragon from earlier who was the only one to side with Ogre during the duel, happens to be the Dragon King himself. And his full name is 201st Blue Dragon Jr. The old man's body disappears and magically turns into another staff. Mori then does an inventory of his new collection of poles. And right now, our hero has 19 bone dragon pillars and a Yoi that's been infused with Ogre's essence. On the other hand, Mori makes the questionable decision of transforming to his human form to wield the Ogre-infused Yoi in front of him. As he puts it, this is the only way that all this suffering will mean something. He unsurprisingly fails, because Yoi tries to reject him the moment he touches its shaft. Still, Mori's not going to give up. While this is happening, Mujin continues hashing things out with Gaia, but this goddess really doesn't want to work with this grade-A scumbag of a supreme being. She asks Mujin why he's so thirsty for her, given that he already has Tathagata's power, to which Mujin says he needs Gaia's heart to create his new promised land. Unknown to these two, an annoying Generation X toddler is eavesdropping on them. Mujin tries to take Gaia's heart by force, but fails. Gaia tells him that if Tathagata himself couldn't do it, what makes Mujin think he could take her heart? Gaia even starts talking some smack at the scumbag, telling him that he's too confident in himself. Mujin nearly gets his brain turned to mush from the effort, but the same Generation X kid that was snooping in on him suddenly butts in and grabs Mujin by the pant leg. And hey, this kid is useful too, because she ends up transferring some of her kitty powers to Mujin to help him steal Gaia's heart. A bunch of other Generation X toddlers also arrive in the room to do the same. Now, Mujin's power doesn't really work. It's more like Gaia noticed the Generation X kids, which made her realize that the prophecy is coming true. From the Dragon's Palace, Mori senses the Earth's life force fading away, and with that, Gaia just decides to willingly give her heart to Mujin. Acquiring this, Mujin finally has everything ready for his creation of the new Promised Land. Meanwhile, Mori continues to get his butt kicked in his attempt to take control of the Ogre-infused Yoi. God of High School's 503rd chapter opens with Q moping about how he's still unable to catch up to his perceived rival, Mujin, before we're hit with another flashback to break from the main plot. This time, we get caught up with what happened during Q's encounter with Bong Shim back when Mujin first transformed into Maitreya. Q tries to jog Bong Shim's memory by showing him a picture of his wife and daughter, Shim Chung. The problem is, Q and Bong Shim aren't the only ones in the middle of this cave. McDonald's there too, who you might remember is the guy who's been trying to catch up to Q ever since they first met. Q's attempts at shaking up Bong Shim's memory initially fails, and things get even worse when Mujin activates Mandok's energy stones, which cause crystals to sprout out of each of McDonald and Bong Shim's eyes. Q realizes he has no time to waste, so he goes for his gambit, a technique called the Swindler's Song, which traps all three of them inside a checkered black and white cube. But there's one more problem here. This is Q's first time using the Swindler's Song on a couple of targets at once. Still, our hero seems to be doing well, as he successfully traps Bong Shim and McDonald within the cube before he uses his trademark pantomime ability. Q then goes on an exposition dump to tell us all about the specs of the Swindler's Song. The long and short of it is that they're currently in a space where the physical rules of the outside world don't apply at all. He warns them not to attack him, while McDonald gets extra salty thinking that Q's underestimating him as always, so he grows butterfly wings to prepare for an attack. But Q clarifies one thing, as he cleaves McDonald in two with his Joker scythe before the man could even make his next move, that he didn't mean to mock McDonald. Q actually respects the man's fighting spirit and eagerness to gain as much power as possible. Now, Q knows that McDonald's borrowed power allows him to regenerate from his wounds, and he goes on to explain how his pantomime ability works. The long and short of it is that it's able to reflect an enemy's attack 100 times over. Q's pantomime ability does its thing and starts barraging McDonald even though the man hasn't attacked Q the whole time they're inside this cube. But it is what it is, so it happens. Meanwhile, Q turns to Bongshim and tries to make him remember his daughter again. Bongshim tries to slice Q, but our man parries him with his scythe and keeps on jogging his memory, telling him about how McDonald killed him 17 years ago and all that. Q soon makes a breakthrough, as Bongshim gradually remembers his past life. But their therapy session is interrupted yet again when McDonald re-emerges to attack Q, but not before dumping some more exposition about his trademark pantomime abilities limitations. As he puts it, this technique can reflect any damage done to its user 100 times over. But what if the initial attack kills him instantly? Q tries to get out of harm's way, but McDonald catches him with his blade and decapitates the green-haired hunk. But this doesn't kill Q. In fact, it just makes him dump more exposition, first going on this whole analogy about how he's like a chess pawn that can switch to any other position he wants upon reaching the other side of the board. Listen guys, the whole point of this is that Q came up with the Swindler's Song in hopes of defeating Mugen one day, and we get to see it here. As it goes, McDonald did kill Q just now when he chopped off his head, but Q's other ability, pantomime, allows him to literally resurrect himself from the dead. The weird thing is, the pantomime ability's reflective effect conveniently doesn't activate this time. Instead, Q now tells McDonald that he's going to die if this entire space disappears. McDonald gets furious again, and to his credit, this man is dedicated, if nothing else. As he puts it, McDonald doesn't care about dying as long as he gets to kill Q in the process. Hearing that makes Q realize that he and McDonald aren't so different. Q's severed head is then revealed to be one of his summoned pantomimes, and he continues his exposition dump by telling McDonald that this new technique he came up with involves the Joker taking his place when McDonald severed his head. On the bright side, this explains why the Swindler's Song effect didn't kick in the moment McDonald decapitated Q. More to the point, Q continues explaining that using pantomime to revive yourself is a literal gamble because you need to get the Joker card to use it. So he came up with the Swindler's Song, which is basically a buff that increases Q's chances of starting with the Joker card in his hand. But there's another risk here, because this new technique gives you a 1/13th chance that it turns against the caster. Q then tries to act all smooth and tells McDonald how pawns and jokers are basically the same in a super thinly veiled attempt at using the two of them as analogs for these things. McDonald, to his credit, just gets more hyped, because he finds it more satisfying to beat Q's head in after surviving his technique. And since the plot calls for it now, Q's pantomime ability kicks in and starts to wreck McDonald. The cave outside the cube starts to collapse, which prompts Q to hurry and go back to his original mission of bringing Bongshim back to his old self. To make matters worse, Q's body is starting to fail him from overexertion. It doesn't matter though, because things work out in the end, as Bongshim spots Sujin using her Hope ability, which then triggers his memories of rescuing her back when she was still a kid in North Korea. Bongshim finally returns to his old self and asks Q if he'll survive this. Q says of course, and since this is God of High School, an explosion erupts just as they finish their conversation. Now all this happened around the time Mugen summoned the Temple of Tathagata and his sky fortresses with his newfound powers. And when Q emerged from the rubble, all he could do was question how far Mugen was willing to go in search for power. This flashback centered around Q continues right at the onset of God of High School's next chapter, as we immediately learn that he more or less failed in his mission to completely bring Bongshim back to the land of the living. Because right now, the effects of Mugen's freaky rituals have sunk its claws in both Bongshim and McDonald. The long and short of it is that these two dudes are about to die, for real this time. Still, Bongshim doesn't mind. He knows that he and McDonald are just spirits from the past anyway. They've long checked out of this world, so they're meant to vanish like this. Bongshim tells Q and Sujin to let him go, and the two pay their final respects to the fallen hero. Bongshim dies happily, perfectly content that at least he got to see his daughter with his own eyes before biting the dust, albeit in a photo. He and McDonald's bodies start to turn to ash, and Bongshim asks Q one last favor, for our guy to take care of his wife and daughter. Q accepts, and you know Bongshim's family are in good hands because if you guys remember, Q's stacked these days. On the other hand, Sujin vows to avenge Bongshim, and we're all well aware that this North Korean doesn't make empty promises. Somewhere else, Mugen checks in on his child soldiers to find out that these worker bees are alright after they synchronize their powers to help him take Gaia's heart. As always, Mugen turns away from babysitting duties to focus more on the mission at hand, because right now, he and his cronies are all set for his planned exodus. Mugen declares that the beginning of the new world is at hand, while poor, dying refugees outside spot a giant globe the size of a planet headed for Earth. A random guy even wonders if it's heaven coming for them. In another part of the world, Daewoo and Mira finally tie the knot in a totally non-legally binding way, because for one, their wedding is officiated by a literal child. For another, let's not forget that Daewoo is already married to that hot brown-skinned Amazon that Youngji Park didn't even bother to give a name, albeit being a one-sided marriage. It's an apparently sweet ceremony full of fanfare and fan service, and although it doesn't really move the plot of God of High School forward much, it's fun to see Daewoo use his powers to create diamonds for their wedding rings. Hell, our dude even literally makes it rain diamonds during the wedding ceremony, which Mira's annoying adopted children scamper over. The old folks attending the wedding know better though, because in the current state of the world, diamonds are just shiny rocks worth nothing. Thankfully, all this fanfare is interrupted when Bongram gives us a mercifully short explanation of what Daewoo and Mira's union implies. This isn't just some corny romantic ceremony. This is literally a couple of global superpowers coming together and being united as one. Bongram reminisces about her grandpa and agrees with his decision to make Mira bear his rod. More sappiness transpires when Mira reminisces about the 17 years it took for her and Daewoo to finally tie the knot. And as Daewoo puts it, he was more than willing to wait 50 or 70 years just to be with her. In any case, the kid officiating the wedding pronounces them man and wife, while one of the ceremony spectators spot a giant shadow looming over them. The same thing happens with a random citizen in the ruins of New Korea. We then finally get back on track, as the story shifts its focus on the world government. Yopio has a meeting with Beck, and the president of the world expresses his hang-ups about his dangerous gambit involving the Holy Grail. But Beck reassures him that this is a good plan, especially the part where they might be able to get some revenge for all the suffering Mujin caused them. Yopio thanks Beck for helping him come up with his scheme, plus saving his butt from Rabbit earlier, to which Beck says that he would thank him later when they've won this bonkers conflict. We find out that Beck, under order from Ilpio, has gathered as many Wi-Fi receivers he could find as part of their grand plan. Ilpio then asks Beck where Uma is, and he says that he just needs one last piece of the puzzle. In the meantime, we find Uma standing in front of the Cane of the Sage. Shortly after that, Ilpio mobilizes all his executives and gives one final speech before heading out into the battlefield. It's a typical wartime message meant to rouse the troops, as Ilpio tells everyone that not all of them are going to survive this war. But in a truly solid move, he explicitly says that if anyone's going to die first during this battle, it's going to be him before his troops. While this is happening, Mujin continues to be nuts as he presents his cronies with an image of the new Earth he's planning on building. Somewhere else, another random citizen spots the giant globe headed for Earth and realizes that it's actually another Earth, the same new world that Mujin has created for him and his chosen ones. And guess what? It's absorbing the Earth. This prompts our heroes to head out as Ilpio and his executives prepare for an epic tussle. Daewoo and Mira don't even head to the reception. They just step out of the ceremony and get ready to rumble, vowing that they'll never get separated this time. In another place still, Mori continues to clinch and tense up as he carries on his efforts to quote-unquote tame his ogre-infused Yoi. Mujin's new Earth continues doing its thing, resulting in the original Earth's fauna and flora immediately becoming extinct in one fell swoop. Daewoo sees all this and realizes that Mujin's new Earth is sucking off the literal life out of the original one. Meanwhile, Mujin goes on this insufferable pseudo-philosophical speech about how the universe is an egg and you need to break it for new life to be born. The long and short of it is that his new promised land is where Mujin believes the perfect version of humanity will live. Mujin then goes on another one of his rants about humanity being rotten to its core and how it needs to be cleansed to purify the world. It's nothing we haven't heard of before, but what's interesting is when Mujin momentarily wusses out of this worldwide extinction event when he recalls memories of people that were once close to him, like Manduk's sister and P. Mujin almost throws up in his mouth from this sudden bout of conscience, but he immediately returns to his old scummy self when Ryong tries to help him and he tells the dragon that he'll cut up that ugly head of his if he touches Mujin again. Mujin then grabs Mansuk's corpse and just hurls it over the edge of the temple of Tathagata after saying goodbye to his ex. And from there, Mujin tells his cronies it's about time they make their next move, because the so-called end is coming. Meanwhile, New Earth blasts Old Earth with a giant laser that pierces it right through its core. Daewoo and Mira notice that the original world doesn't have much time left, so they have to get down to business. Plus, Mujin's castle is now floating higher and higher above the sky. Mira knows that their arch-nemesis is planning on escaping to New Earth, so they get ready to pursue him. Bongram puts on Hall Yang's old fisherman's cap on Mira's head, while she acts as the voice of reason and asks her if she's really planning on fighting Mujin in her wedding dress. Mira says of course not, as she tears off her dress to reveal her usual battlesuit, her trademark sleeveless white vest and black tie combo. More words are exchanged as Mira talks about how this attire was the same thing she was wearing when her life fell apart, but she really wants to wear it as a reminder of all that. Bongram realizes how stupid it is to get into a fight with a literal god in a sleeveless shirt, so she hands over her grandpa's old hobo coat and puts it on Mira. In exchange, Mira hands Bongram Hoyang's trademark fisherman's cap and promotes her as the Homeless Association's newest leader. On top of that, Mira bequeathed Bongram with Hoyang's old staff. Daewoo and Mira then tell their people that they'll see them once this whole mess has been dealt with, and the apparently newlywed couple make their way towards the temple of Tathagata. Meanwhile, Bongram gives Dean a call. Mira and Dewi are soon harangued by an entire army made up of Mujin's death squad members, who then turn into monsters. There's a lot of grandstanding going on with these fools while they transform, but Dewi and Mira hilariously take them out with a single shot. After all, with Dewi's sage wisdom and body, and Mira's blade of Tathagata and Wi-Fi connection, these creatures are just a piece of cake. The Death Squad monster army is instantly obliterated. But then our heroes are almost hit by a literal giant named Gigantes. More grandstanding ensues, as we learn that Gigantes is titanic in size. But Mira once again easily carves up this newcomer. Meanwhile, one of Mira's orphans and his grandma watch Mira and Dewi take out their enemies. And being a dumb kid, of course he thinks this is what happens during a honeymoon. Up in the Earth's atmosphere, Dewi uses his sage's power to prevent a bunch of meteors from hitting Earth before transforming these giant rocks into his own weapon, a gigantic diamond spear. Mujin spots this and can't believe that Dewi now has the ability to manipulate and change matter at will. Meanwhile, Dewi continues to channel his power to make his diamond spear larger until it becomes the size of a literal continent using his matter conversion diamond technique. Dewi then hurls it at Mujin's castle, but the villain manages to protect him and his underlings with a barrier. Deer also makes an appearance here, and we see that this fabulous nerd is still butthurt after Mira blew a hole in his chest during their duel, telling our heroine to stop dawdling, presumably so he can get a rematch and another well-deserved beating from Mira. Mujin then counters Dewi's salvo with his own super convoluted technique where he literally plays a game of Tetris with the ruined buildings of New Korea before attempting to drop another building right in the middle of it. But it turns out that Mujin wasn't going to nuke the old world, as he uses this gigantic pointy building and the buildings he rearranged to use an ability called Rebirth of Gigantes, which is exactly as the name suggests. It resurrects Gigantes. Dewi sees the giant about to drop on them, so he springs into action and blocks its path with his bare hands. But Mujin puts on the pressure and Dewi almost gets crushed. Thankfully, Mira jumps in and slices off a huge chunk of Gigantes before Dewi gets pinned down. However, this leaves our two heroes open for Mujin to hit them with his gravitational power, which hits the duo square on. Mujin starts running his mouth and tells our heroes that even their combined might isn't enough to stop him, so they can just get out of his sight. The villains are just about to head back inside the temple of Tathagata, as Ryong wonders why Mori still hasn't come to the party, while Laser Beam suddenly destroys more of Mujin's Tetris buildings to create 10 more Gigantes. Dewi and Mira realize that Mujin's using these colossi to buy himself some time, and our heroes know that they don't have enough time to rescue their people and stop Mujin at this point. But Mira pretty much replies by telling Dewi that this is all part of their job. Nothing's ever easy, so the duo get ready for another tussle, but they suddenly hear a voice telling them to save their strength, followed by a massive laser blast that instantly destroys a number of the summoned Gigantes on the battlefield. It turns out that Ilpio has arrived. Even better, he and his world government agents have taken control of the Jade Emperor's old ship called the Floating Fortress for operation to destroy Wild Monster's Ark, Noah. Of course, Dewi is super relieved to get some reinforcements, but he wonders how the heck Ilpio got this plot-altering ship operational again after it got wrecked during the events of Ragnarok. We learn that Beck used his big brain to fix it, and that's that. Ilpio then gives the order to annihilate the remaining Gigantes, while Mujin and Tathagata each become dumbfounded after realizing that Tathagata's own weapon is now threatening to destroy his fortress. Back inside the Ark, a voice tells Ilpio that everything is primed and ready, so the president of the world gives out the order to activate its main cannon at once. Mujin counters by surrounding the Ark with Gigantes, and we get a mercifully brief exposition dump about how the ship's main cannon works. Simply put, it uses an engine powered by the hearts of tens of thousands of dead monsters, which Okwang had hoarded inside its engine room to be used for this specific purpose in the past. The Ark's main cannon gets primed for a super powerful attack that even Dewi's sage's wisdom can sense. Meanwhile, a few random Death Squad members inside the temple read out that the massive energy the Ark is producing is more than their sky fortresses can handle. Ilpio finally gives out the order to fire the laser, and scores upon scores of Mujin sky fortresses are destroyed in the process. And with those pesky floating islands dealt with, Dewi declares that it's now time for their counterattack. But we don't get any payoff from that just yet, as God of High School shifts to another flashback, this time showing us the Monkey King's old battle against Okwang during the monsters' war against the gods. Okwang talks some smack at our hero, baiting him with the tens of thousands of monsters who died for the Monkey King's mistake. Now, Mujin's forces might have been decimated from the Ark's recent blast, but they're far from being routed. At this point, Mujin has gone desperate and started sending out his monstrous death squads to act as kamikaze bombers in an attempt to crash the Ark. In response, Mujin tells his crew to focus all of the ship's energy on its shield and orders Sujin and her dragon unit to deal with the suicide bombers. Sujin rides out of the Ark along with an entire fleet of dragons, and they blast these monsters out of the sky. A random Ark crew member tells everyone that their recent moves had consumed the Ark's juice. Meanwhile, Mira's robotic right arm starts to react when the Wi-Fi units that Beck collected begin to activate. Beck reveals that he tweaked the Ark using Wi-Fi to allow it to share energy, which then gives it a near unlimited source of fuel on top of the monster hearts that powers the ship by default. In a matter of moments, the Ark quickly recharges its energy, which is now at 75%. Ilpio then tells Dewi and Mira to join them up in the Ark, and the two arrive on the ship with a single bound. Dewi and Mira then charge up their respective techniques to prepare for their counterattack. Hell, even Mira's stupid orphans, who are regular powerless humans, join in on the action by having smoke come out of their eyes while they clinch, although it's not explained how this actually helps the rest of our heroes. Inside the Ark, Executive G uses her Tailor ability to give their allies swanky spacesuits. And just like that, the world government is ready to go on the offensive, as the Ark's energy charge reaches 120% and they all get ready to fly off into the atmosphere. Ilpio gives the order to fly towards Mugen's fortress. And if you already like Ilpio, we bet you're going to love him after this, as our hero uncharacteristically talks trash at Mugen, telling him that since he turned his back on humanity, humanity's turning their back on him too. This isn't an empty threat either, because Ilpio has just ordered the Ark's crew to open the ship's gun ports to reveal humanity's little present for Mugen. Nuclear warhead Purgatory Purgatorium. It's basically an arsenal made up of 25,000 nuclear warheads, with each one of them possessing the destructive power of Tsar Bomba. As Ilpio puts it, these weapons of mass destruction might not be enough to hurt Mugen, but they sure can turn his promised land into a living hell. So Ilpio launches all the nukes toward Mugen's new world, which forces him to go on the defensive. And you really gotta love just how hyped up Ilpio has gotten from this war, as he continues talking more smack at Mugen, telling the man that he now has to play defense for the first time in his life, something that heroes like Dewi, Mira, and Mori have been doing this whole time. Mugen easily fends off the nukes with his Maitreya multi-barrier ability, but Ilpio being the master strategist that he is, it's revealed that the nukes were just a distraction, because right now Ilpio has just flown the Ark right towards the Temple of Tathagata. Ryong responds by proving that he's as powerful as he is loyal to Mugen when he appears right in the middle of the Ark's command center and proceeds to slice off several of the world government's agents' domes in one devastating strike. Ryong then hunts down Ilpio and gets his hands on our hero's neck a second later. In turn, all of Ilpio's surviving operatives prepare to call for some backup. But the president of the world proves he's a work of fiction at its purest when he willingly puts his life on the line and tells his people to stand down and just continue ramming the Ark right up the Temple of Tathagata's Quim. Ryong thinks Ilpio's bluffing. That is until he gives the order to slam their ship right into Mugen's base. Ryong then makes the questionable decision of doing an exposition dump while he has Ilpio on the ropes. It's nothing we haven't heard of before, as Ryong blathers about how he and the rest of the Four Pillars are loyal servants of Tathagata. The only piece of new information here is when Ryong reveals that he, Rabbit, Dragon, and Monkey left the First Heavenly Realm to become Tathagata's sworn muscle. Ryong continues to hype up their old master, saying that even the gods in the First Heavenly Realm combined couldn't beat Tathagata on his own. The long and short of it is that Ryong wholeheartedly believes that the Four Pillars are Tathagata's ultimate combat squad. Another flashback shows us Mugen telling the Four Pillars to kill themselves when their mission is over, which they obey. Meanwhile, Rabbit, Deer, and Monkey are shown just outside the temple. Rabbit expresses how much she loves working for Mugen. Deer, as usual, runs his mouth about how he thinks humans are filthy. Monkey is the only one who remotely contributes to the overarching narrative when he says that Ryong doesn't even need their help, since he's the strongest among the Four Pillars. Meanwhile, Mugen's goons desperately rally to try and protect their supreme leader from the Ark's incoming kamikaze attack. It doesn't help one bit, because our hero's ship soon drives itself right into the Temple of Tathagata, and Ilpio's army of executives, Dewi and Mira, alight the ship to lay siege on Mugen's fortress. As expected, a pitched battle between Mugen's monster army and our hero soon erupts. While this mess is happening above the skies, we find out that Bongram is watching over Mugen's bastard baby, which she and Ilpio's cousin had taken in and placed the baby inside an incubator after Mugen went full deadbeat dad and left it in P to go off and create his new world. Soomga tells Bongram that they need to take the baby to a hospital, but fat chance there's still one that's operational, given the world's currently witnessing an extinction event. An earthquake suddenly rocks their hideout, prompting Bongram to take the baby and protect it and Soomga. She's then thrown off when an apparition of an unidentified person appears in front of her, but Bongram snaps out of it just as debris starts falling from their hideout ceiling. Bongram's too slow to react, so she can only cover the baby, but Ahan suddenly arrives and uses her borrowed power to rescue the trio. Back inside the Ark, Ryong blabs about how he can see why the Jade Emperor once feared Ilpio, while our hero drops a truth bomb on him and all the other gods, that they really never shut the hell up and just fight. Ryong replies by going for a flying knee that hits Ilpio straight in the gut. Ilpio recoils, but he immediately recovers and drives Ryong away for a reset. Ilpio activates his 8th tail, while Ryong buffs himself with an ability called Wanzang-style Divine Right. They clash again, which ends up in another reset. This time, Ilpio ups the stakes and unlocks his 9th tail, while Ryong uses a technique called Thunder Dragon Diamond Twist. The two combatants are able to hit each other. Ilpio even manages to break one of Ryong's horns, and even though these two dudes won't admit it, they're starting to feel a sense of camaraderie that only comes from trying to beat each other's face in. Ryong compliments Ilpio's power, telling him he now understands why Okwang was afraid of him thousands of years ago. On the other hand, Ilpio gives Ryong an ego boost and says that he would have died if his recent attack went in him a little deeper. The two reset their duel, and Ilpio checks in on his men to ask about the Holy Grail. An unnamed world government agent says that they don't have much, but the Holy Grail has 2.4% energy. Ilpio thinks this will have to do, as he tells the guy on the other end of the line that he did his duty. Our hero then declares that he's putting his life on the line for this plan, as Ilpio prepares for another clash with Ryong. Ryong welcomes the challenge, and we get a mercifully quick flashback showing Ryong back when he was still a horse working for the Monkey King in Wanzang. The most glaring thing that this scene adds is that Ryong sincerely treated the Monkey King like a brother thousands of years ago, and he loyally protected Wanzang upon his request. In the present, Ilpio busts out his Samsu Samyeon Myeoldagak technique against Ryong's Thunder Dragon ability. Their inevitable clash causes an absurdly large explosion that blows a hole in the arc. Meanwhile, the world government executives and Mujin's army of monsters rally to power themselves through the enemy's defensive lines. But this skirmish is interrupted when Ilpio and Ryong burst out of the arc after the explosion they caused. And while the legendary nine-tailed fox isn't doing so hot right now, because Ryong has just impaled our hero with his blade, Daewee and the other executives witness this and fear the worst. But Ilpio proves that he's a man of his word when he said that if anyone's going to die in this war, he'll be the first in line. He grabs Ryong's sword while it's still stuck in his gut, pretty much telling his opponent that he's going to take him down with him. Daewee knows that Ilpio's going to go for a suicide attack, as our hero summons a fox head to devour Ryong. But Ryong beats him to the punch, as he pulls his blade out of Ilpio's body, which effectively dispels our hero's fox head. Daewee gets furious seeing Ilpio get handled like that, so he immediately jumps in and uses his gravity times 1000 technique on Ryong. Ryong dances around it and nearly hits Daewee with his Thunder Dragon technique, but the Jade Emperor puts his finger on top of Ryong's head in the nick of time before slamming his face into the ground. Daewee then attempts to cave Ryong's face in by applying his gravity times 5000 ability on him. Meanwhile, Deer does color commentary on the whole scene, which all boils down to him telling everyone that Ryong's real strength isn't offense, it's his unbeatable defense, which shows in spades when he's able to resist another gravity times 10,000 attack from Daewee. And with that, Daewee picks up where Ilpio left off as he and Ryong face off for the next matchup in God of High School's final saga. Our story's next chapter opens with Daewee barraging Ryong with every trick he has in his bag, throwing around Ryong like a ragdoll with every technique he busts out. The executives can only watch as Daewee attempts to pulverize his enemy. Now it might look like Daewee has the upper hand at first glance, but he knows all too well that his attacks aren't doing much damage to Ryong, given that he just keeps getting back on his feet and attacking whenever our hero drives him off. A few monsters get cheeky and try to hold Daewee in place so that Ryong could get a clean strike, but Daewee easily sends them to hell with his weak force ability. He and Ryong get into another clash, which prompts everyone's favorite rat-tooth executive from Portugal, Samuel Rosinante, to get in on the action and jump right beside Ryong. He immediately regrets this decision when he senses that Ryong has the same aura as Zeus, the same guy who kicked his ass back in Ragnarok. Samuel is frozen in place out of the fear he feels upon sensing Ryong's vibe. To make matters worse, scores upon scores of world government agents have lost the will to fight after seeing Ilpio fall in battle. The narrator then states the obvious and tells us that everyone is feeling fear at this moment after realizing that they're faced with a vastly superior enemy. Ryong notices Samuel next to him and quickly decides for him to die. In the blink of an eye, Samuel is able to transform into his Herculean form to defend against Ryong's attack. We then learn that Samuel has decided to do this because, as always, he wants to get over the humiliation of getting absolutely teabagged by Zeus 17 years ago. As he puts it, he won't ever get humiliated like that again. To Samuel's credit, he is able to hold his own against Ryong during their clash. He even manages to use his national treasure, Power Lenderization ability to summon the Bow of Hercules and hit Ryong with a few well-placed arrows to the gut. Even better, our boy from Japan, Ryoichi, joins the fray and summons Yamada no Orochi to swallow Ryong whole before he can recover from Samuel's barrage. Meanwhile, a few other executives watch on while Ryoichi and Samuel pick up the slack. Ryoichi tells his comrades to stay calm, because they're ready for this. He then reminds his allies about Ilpio's final message before they went off to war. And as if on cue, another world government agent plays Ilpio's message, which tells them that their plan is still quote-unquote valid and they should finish their operation. This gives the executives and all the other world government operatives a much-needed morale boost, which reignites their will to fight. A short, rather unnecessary flashback shows that Ilpio beat Team Latin's Executive 7's butt to make him bend the knee to him in the past. In turn, Executive 7 swore fealty to the nine-tailed fox. In the present, Executive 7 accepts the fact that they're on a suicide mission, so he declares that he'll give his life for Ilpio, which allows him to perform his job well, as he uses his zigzag slash technique to carve a bloody path through the monster's defensive line. All the other executives rally and go on the offensive, while Ryoichi and Samuel square up to Ryong. Meanwhile, Ryong is left slack-jawed upon realizing that their enemies have regained their desire to fight. He wonders if it's because they really have faith in Nilpyo or if it's because they're convinced Daewoo is going to win their duel. Daewoo answers his question, telling Ryong that unlike Mujin, everyone executive and world government agent here right now actually has faith in Nilpyo. Daewoo then tells Samuel and Ryoichi to continue their mission while he deals with Ryong. Samuel shows that he's matured from the snot-nosed, rat-toothed delinquent he was in the past into a true soldier when he obeys Daewoo's command. He and Ryoichi only have one request for the Jade Emperor: make it quick. Well, Daewoo isn't one to let his pals down, so our hero wastes no time pounding Ryong by hitting him with a right overhand square in the face and getting right on top of him. The two warriors clash once again, and Ryong notices that none of his strikes are landing. Meanwhile, Daewoo finds an opening and gives Ryong a body shot that's so strong that it almost blows a hole through the back of his shirt. Daewoo showing an absolute clinic here too, as he mixes up his martial arts moves instead of just mindlessly smashing his opponent. Ryong soon realizes that our hero's attacks have become supercharged thanks to his ability to concentrate a burst of natural forces in his limbs whenever he's about to land a strike. And at that moment, Daewoo almost takes Ryong's head off with a move that's only described as a vertical slash kick that lands right on the side of his ugly mug. On the other hand, Daewoo makes the questionable decision of taking off the robe of the sage because, according to him, his and the rest of humanity's survival is at stake here. Daewoo then goes on to berate Ryong and all the other gods for basically being a bunch of pricks who have no respect for other people's lives before declaring that he'll never lose to people like them. Ryong then questions himself if this is the new companion that the Monkey King chose. Daewoo goes for his classic basic Kyokushin karate stance, which makes Ryong have a flashback of his days in training in martial arts under Wan Zhang's wing. In turn, Ryong realizes that people like Daewoo aren't pushovers, so he finally does the right thing and puts some respect on the man's name, telling Daewoo that he's not kidding when he says he'll give it his best shot to defeat him. At the same time, Ryong goes for his Wan Zhang-style basic skill stance, as they get ready for another clash. Daewoo then opens the proceedings by using one of his trademark abilities, Dance of the White Tiger. It doesn't work because Ryong literally beats him to the punch as he hits Daewoo in the chest. As for that whole shtick where our hero removed the robe of the sage, well, that amounts to nothing, because its automatic defense mechanism activates anyway to protect Daewoo, and our hero is forced to fight while wearing this powerful artifact. Daewoo then recovers and channels a combination of his natural force ability and the Dance of the White Tiger, while Ryong goes for a technique called Wanzang Neihan Dance. The two combatants get into another clash. They trade blows and find themselves evenly matched. Meanwhile, a couple of random world government agents tell us that the intensity of Daewoo and Ryong's clash is so strong that they might get sucked into it if they're not careful. In the middle of the battlefield, Daewoo and Ryong's duel continues to be satisfying, with neither side blabbering about stuff that would ruin the momentum of this epic tussle. They just swing at each other and bust out super hot techniques like Daewoo's Four Guardians Blue Dragon. But all good things must come to an end, and Ryong starts flapping his gums again. This time, he comments that Daewoo and his own skills have the same roots, as he channels an ability called Wanzang Paogi Nahan Yang. Thankfully, these two units get back to fisticuffs right after that. Oh, and just in case you were wondering, we learn here that the Temple of Tathagata is about to reach Mujin's bonkers new world. While this is all happening, the world government agents get more good news when one of them reports that the Holy Grail is gathering even more energy, which gives them even more hope that their mission is going to ultimately succeed. Daewoo and Ryong continue to throw hands, but this time Daewoo senses that the tide of battle is turning against his favor, as Ryong prepares to bust out another powerful move. He's right, because Ryong's next attack nearly rips the robe of the sage off of his body. Ryong then barrages Daewoo with a technique called Nahan Yang Sacho, which completely removes the robe of the sage from him. Ryong gears up for another Sacho, and Daewoo notices that there's no way he can defend against it. So our hero instinctively lunges at Ryong before he could finish channeling his technique. Ryong is surprised that Daewoo's able to come up with this counter move, but he's accounted for this. So Ryong comes up with a counterattack of his own, a technique simply called Ryong Breath, which blasts Daewoo with pressurized air at point-blank range. Daewoo is able to react in the split second that he had before Ryong's breath could hit him. The way he dodges it is genius too, as Daewoo applies his natural force ability on himself to quicken his head movement and allow him to get out of harm's way. Ryong realizes this, but he's too late to make a move when Daewoo counters with an overhead right that lands right on his knee. Ryong tries to hit Daewoo back, but our hero gracefully turns and uses the kick of the Red Phoenix to once again try to bust his kneecaps. The two warriors then trade blows for a bit. And just when he thought Ryong has finally wised up and put some respect on Daewoo's name, he starts running his mouth again about how our hero is still a weak little human in spite of his superb martial arts skills. Well, Ryong should have just focused on the fight, because his super weak trash talk ends up leaving him open for Daewoo to go for some classic wrist control before driving his fist in the same leg that he's been targeting this whole time. And from there, our hero goes to town trying to put this dragon in a wheelchair, as he smashes Ryong's leg with several right overhand strikes. Ryong realizes that Daewoo is not one to be messed with and praises Mori for making a good friend. Ryong digs deep and tries to mount a counterattack, but Daewoo just weaves past his strike. Daewoo feints for another leg punch, and by the time Ryong realizes it, our hero has already caved his face in with a beautiful left straight. This leaves Ryong's leg open again, so Daewoo goes to town on it once more, and we even hear it crack this time. He then tries to finish off his enemy with the Fist of the Black Turtle technique, but it's here that Ryong reveals his gambit, a technique that he learned from the Monkey King himself. It all starts with Daewoo almost hitting Ryong with the Fist of the Black Turtle. However, our hero is shocked when he notices Ryong's hand suddenly touches him on the shoulder from behind. From there, Ryong tells Daewoo the all-too-cliched shonen manga line that goes along the lines of, "I didn't think I'd have to use this technique." It's then revealed that Mori taught Ryong his duplication ability thousands of years ago, and now Daewoo is forced to fight against Ryong and a copy of himself. Things just evolve from there, as Ryong goes on a monologue about how Daewoo forcing him to use this technique is the highest compliment he can give our hero. Being part of the Dragon Clan, he finally summons his own Yoi to the battlefield. God of High School then holds out on us in the next chapter and instead shifts its focus on the action going on inside the Temple of Tathagata, as we find out that Mira, the executives, and all the other world government operatives have successfully breached Mujin's defenses to lay siege on his stronghold. Our heroes are nicely organized too, as they whip out their mass-produced national treasures to combat Mujin's monsters, all the while picking up their wounded comrades to be treated in their nanomachines. Samuel and Ryoichi lead the charge, as they tell their comrades to stay sharp. Samuel doesn't get the memo and is instantly distracted by his insecurities about not being as strong as members of the Six, like Q and Sujin. Samuel then goes on this internal monologue about how almost everyone on the field right now is a veteran of the Great War, although there's a huge difference in power between people who were actually on Ground Zero and those who weren't. At the same time, Samuel senses Dean, who he recognizes as someone who's never experienced the Great War, let alone Ground Zero, aka an amateur. Well, this amateur is currently working as an integral part of their search for Mujin, because Dean is currently using his precognitive abilities to guide everyone towards their target's location. Meanwhile, Executive F goes on his own internal monologue when he realizes Dean is part of Generation X. In his own words, F wonders if this is the power of the new humanity that former world president Mujin Park was talking about. F finally shakes off his unnecessary musings and gets back to hacking away at Mujin's monsters. On the other hand, Sujin senses that Ilpio's energy has disappeared and senses something weird the closer they get to Mujin's location. Somewhere else, world government agents activate their Wi-Fi router to give everyone on the field a power boost before charging into Mujin's inner chamber. Monkey suddenly appears, surrounded by what looks like several Yois. One unnamed agent wonders if they fell in one of Mujin's traps, but Dean reassures him that they're just showing everyone the way to the target. He's right too, because Mujin finally appears before the world government army. Mujin then drops down to the ground and bows in front of them to apologize for the fact that he's going to massacre them all for the sake of the next generation. Samuel proves that he's not the brightest bulb in the box and asks what Mujin meant by what he just said. This prompts Mujin to go on a long-winded speech about how he can easily eradicate each and every one of them. But since they made it this far, he's willing to talk things out. Samuel has a tantrum after listening to this, so Mujin shuts him up by giving him a demonstration of his godly abilities by popping the heads off a couple random world government agents. Mujin continues his monologue, and it all boils down to this. He's willing to give Samuel and the rest of his comrades the privilege of choosing how they want to die as reward for making it this far. Q gets froggy after hearing this, but Ryoichi tells him and all their other allies to stay in position and not to forget their operation. Ryoichi and Samuel then turn towards Mujin and give him a firm no as answer to his offer. Mujin respects their decision, so he promises he'll try to make their deaths as painless as possible. And the Supreme Being starts popping off the heads of more random world government operatives. Ryoichi, Samuel, and their surviving allies immediately get down to business and fight off Mujin, while Dean has another cryptic vision, which prompts him to yell out that quote-unquote "they're coming." Meanwhile, Samuel activates his Herculean form to attack Mujin. Mujin almost pops his head like a cherry, but Ryoichi is able to block him with Yamada no Orochi right in the nick of time. The momentum is once again broken with another flashback, this time showing us how Samuel got a new leg after Zeus turned him into a cripple after Ragnarok. His new leg was funded by Mujin, and it's made from a prosthetic bone that's apparently stronger than regular bone. Long story short, Samuel eventually got into therapy, learned how to use his new leg, and the dude pledged his allegiance to Mujin after he baited him with the prospect of showing the world humanity's advances if Samuel were to face an opponent like Zeus again. The flashback then shifts to Ryoichi's perspective, and it's something we already saw before. It's that time he and Samuel had to talk about how they had doubts about Mori, Daewoo, and Mira's involvement in sparking Ragnarok. Our story finally gets back on track, as we return to the present, with Ryoichi pretty much expressing how much he regrets betting on the wrong horse and siding with Mujin in the 17 years that has passed since the end of the Great War. Ryoichi tells himself that there's no way he's going to give up now, because this is basically his penance for turning away from the truth and being lazy almost a couple of decades ago. The fight continues as Ryoichi prepares for another technique, while Samuel attempts to bash Mujin's brains in with his power lenderization ability. The problem is, Mujin is able to spot him before he can land his strike, prompting Roichi to pull him away and save his life yet again. This time, Roichi tells Samuel to get his act together and get in a good shot the next time he attacks Mujin. What Samuel doesn't know is that this would be Roichi's last words, as Mujin immediately blows his head off right after that. Samuel gets blinded by rage, so he attacks Mujin again. Mujin is super confident that Samuel's not going to land a hit on him, but this Portuguese warrior makes his opponent eat humble pie when he kicks Mujin in the chest in spite of his leg getting melted down to its prosthetic bone in the process. Samuel's just happy that he managed to land one on Mujin, as the Supreme Being uses his powers to murder him the same way he just murdered Roichi. What Mujin doesn't know is that Samuel's recent attack was all part of a distraction to allow Q and Sujin to find an opening and use their respective techniques, namely the Swindler's Song and Pandora's Box, the Hope, to trap Mujin inside Q's pantomime ability. Q then squares up to Mujin and prepares for another showdown. God of High School finally returns to Daewoo and Ryong's battle, as these two absolute units clash once again after Ryong uses his duplication ability and summons his own Yoi. His clone holds down Daewoo, leaving the original Ryong to crack our hero with a body shot before punishing him with several strikes from his own Dragon Bone staff. Daewoo tries to find an opening, but Ryong just piles on him, grabbing him by the neck before dashing him through the side of a couple of ruined buildings in the middle of New Korea. He then sends Daewoo down on the ground before he and his clone pummel him with a flurry of punches. Meanwhile, Daewoo just powers through until he finds an opening and prepares to go for a counterattack. But don't hold your breath, because this story goes on another flashback, this time giving us details about how Q became the assigned executive to duke it out with Mujin in the present. A few executives like Team Latins 1 has issues with Ilpio's decision to let Q handle Mujin, knowing that Q is far from their strongest warrior. But Ilpio explains that sending in Daewoo or Mirror to handle their main target is exactly what their enemies expect. Sujin then goes on a mercifully short exposition about how Ilpio is planning on distracting the enemy's other fighters while the rest attack Mubong. And she knows Ilpio picked Q because he has the power to create a special space with its own rules, namely his pantomime technique. Sujin agrees with this plan, but she does have one problem with it. The story then moves back to the present where Q is currently face-to-face with Mujin. They don't tussle yet, because the exposition dump continues, with Q first explaining his pantomime ability specs for the umpteenth time before Mujin goes on a long-winded explanation about how Q's ability requires a condition that he has to finish before activating it. Mujin says that he knows Q activated his technique before these conditions were met, concluding that he used a trick. Q confirms this, as he would in a fight, and Mujin continues flapping his gums about how Q might get penalized if something goes wrong with his trick. Q confirms this again. The exposition dump continues, as Mujin tells Q that wildcards only work when your opponent doesn't know what cards you have. In the end, Mujin concludes that it's either Q has a death wish, or in his exact words, Q is up to something quote-unquote else. Returning to the flashback, Ilpio is confident that his gambit would work because Mujin thinks they're a total joke. Long story short, they have a slim chance of winning, and Ilpio asks if Q is up for the task. Obviously he is, because he's currently about to duke it out with Mujin in the present. And right now, Q has just summoned his cards and summons a few jokers to open his duel with Mujin. Mujin easily destroys the clowns and tells Q to show him how much he's grown. Q then launches his large fat joker to pin down Mujin, but the Supreme Being just destroys it again. This time though, the fat joker clown is able to distract Mujin enough for Q to slice open Mujin's shoulder. The two warriors get into it at close range. Unknown to Mujin, Dean is using his precognition to help Q make the right moves. Q eventually lands another strike on Mujin with his scythe, and he finally figures out what's going on. Mujin then pretty much goes on an exposition about how Q, Sujin, and Dean are currently doing a combo using their respective trademark abilities, namely Q's pantomime, Sujin's the hope, and Dean's vision and resonance. We then get more of that flashback, as Ilpio tells his agents to just get the hell out of his office if they're going to rely on Mori to help them out in this war. As he puts it, Mori's just a wild card. It's more important that they beat Mujin by themselves. In the present, Mujin pretty much says he has the trio's combo in check, as he chops off Q's head with his bare hand. Nothing comes of it yet though, because the story's erratic pacing shifts to Daewoo and Ryong, and now we see Daewoo catching Ryong's fist mid-punch, then using his powers to literally make this wayward dragon bend the knee in front of him. Back inside the pantomime, Mujin thinks he's won after decapitating Q only to witness that the real Q is hiding amongst his jokers. Q then does his own exposition to explain what just happened. We already know how the pantomime ability works, so we won't go through that for the umpteenth time here. The long and short of it is that it reflects any damage Q takes to its attacker 100 times over. More relevant is when Q reveals that Sujin is using her Pandora the Hope ability to boost pantomime's effect and reflect 1000 times the damage Mujin gave Q just now instead of just 100. At this point, the story just goes on a full-blown exposition dump, as the narrator once again tells us all about the pantomime technique specs, with the only relatively new piece of information here being that Q's gambit to reflect the damage he's taken back to his opponent is almost always a risk because he's not physically strong. That is to say, our boy can get the wind knocked out of him within the first hit if an opponent is strong enough. The narrator then continues pouring more exposition, and it's more stuff we already know. Namely how Q's new Swindler Song technique is able to compensate for his physical weakness by giving him a 12 out of 13 chance of transferring the same he takes to one of his jokers. However, the risk, as we already know by now, is that there's a 1 in 13 chance that this doesn't work and Q ends up getting dunked on 100 times over if an opponent is strong enough to take him out with their first hit. Finally, we get new information when the narrator starts talking about Dean and his precognition. It turns out that Dean's role in this combo is to help Q make sure that Q avoids the 1 in 13 chance that the Swindler Song technique doesn't work. Add that to Sujin's Pandora the Hope technique, which allows Q to control all the physical forces within a certain area, in this case the space within his pantomime, and our hero is able to significantly boost his basic attack power. The exposition dump finally ends when the narrator concludes that this combo is practically invincible. Then we get another flashback where Ilpio has just given his meeting room the same long-winded rundown and formally assigns Q the task of taking out Mujin. In the present, we learn that Sujin, Q, and Dean's combo is far from being quote-unquote practically invincible, because Mujin has just conveniently gotten out of the pantomime's reflective ability. Dean then sees a vision of Q getting slaughtered, and you know what? Mujin has become such a beast that he's able to sense Dean from the future while he uses his precog ability in the past. The point is, as Mujin says, every option they have would only lead to Q's death. Dean, of course, starts feeling hopeless. In the meantime, Q gives him a call to ask for their next move. Dean's too shocked to speak, but he soon shakes it off and tells Q the truth, that he's going to die here. Well, Q's an absolute unit, so he pretty much says okie dokie because he's ready to die today. He then tells Dean to leave while he deals with Mujin by himself. Dean tries to convince him to retreat, but Q has already made up his mind to fight Mujin to the death, especially with so many people counting on him. And with that, Q shows us he's one of the most badass characters in this insane series as he prepares for one final showdown with his perceived rival, Mujin. God of High School's 514th chapter starts where we last left off with Daewoo and Ryong. Ryong senses that Daewoo only has the pure body of a god in his right eye and right arm before the two get into another close-quarters scuffle. Daewoo tells himself that he needs more power. Somewhere else, Q deactivates his pantomime ability and busts out a technique he calls Forbidden Skill. In a thankfully short exposition, Q explains that this new technique has a 1 in 43 chance of totally erasing his opponent from existence, even if your opponent is a god. So Q rolls the dice, and you know something bad is about to happen to this dude when his life starts flashing before his eyes. Dean uses his precognition ability to see where the die will land. He initially sees Q's forbidden technique failing when it lands on 9, but Dean is surprised when it suddenly rolls to 43, and our boy concludes that Q just changed the future, which is apparently something no human could do, implying that his forbidden technique would work and Mujin will be erased from existence. At that same moment, a giant Joker card appears above the skies of New Korea, followed by even more giant Joker cards that then crash right into the Temple of Tathagata. Q's life continues to flash before his eyes, and we see him wanting to catch up to Mujin this time. More to the point, we get the immediate aftermath of Q's forbidden technique, as he tells Mujin that he used to be much brighter than he is now. As for Dean's vision of Q's forbidden technique working, well, that's all hogwash because we see that it has just literally torn him apart. Meanwhile, Mujin is alive and well. So yeah, Q's gambit failed and our hero bites the dust. Sujin and Dean waste no time to ambush Mujin right after Q's death, along with some help from a bunch of other random executives and world government agents. But Mujin literally wipes these unnamed scrubs' upper bodies from existence in one fell swoop. Sujin and Dean soon get mangled after Mujin lets out another invisible strike. Sujin fares a bit better thanks to her Pandora's armor, the Curse, but Mujin just whips out the mandala and stabs Sujin right through the heart with it. With every threat out of the way, Mujin says that Q finally reached him, which makes no sense because the guy's dead while he's still alive. Another flashback gives Q a send-off, where he tells Art that he's willing to risk it all because you only live once. Meanwhile, Q's kids watch the skies get filled with shattered Joker cards, and their mom tells them that it's their dad hard at work. Shortly after, Mujin heads out of the Temple of Tathagata and spots remaining human survivors praying to him. Seeing this sickens him, as it reminds him of the people praying to Mandak all the way back when he deemed himself the prophet. Using his gravitational ability, he destroys the surrounding area of the civilians praying to him. Oh, and apparently Mira is already duking it out with Deer at the same moment. But don't ask us when this started, because it just did. As always, Deer talks some super weak trash at Mira, taunting her that she won't be able to save her precious community now. And he's right, because nearly everyone dies from Mujin's recent attack. There's also this super unnecessary sequence where a random kid reunites with his old man in the afterlife after a boulder crushes his entire body. Youngji Park then gets back on track and finally returns the story's focus on Daewoo and Ryong's duel. Daewoo senses the genocide going on, but what really grinds his gears is when he senses that Q, Dean, and Sujin have already met their demise. So Daewoo focuses up and pretty much tells himself he has to finish off Ryong if he even wishes to face up to Mujin. Another chapter, another flashback. But at least this one is short, as we see what's left of Q telling Daewoo that everything's up to him now before he dies. As Q puts it, Daewoo is their ace card. Back to the present, Daewi's fury at his friend's death allows him to dig deep and barrage Ryong with a flurry of strikes. Ryong realizes that Daewi's getting faster, as our hero manages to land a solid body shot on his enemy, but Ryong just eats it up before going on a combo of his own. Still, Daewi just keeps on fighting, which frustrates Ryong, as the two warriors find themselves on even footing once again. Ryong desperately tries to taunt Daewi into giving up, telling him that Mori is not coming to save them. But deep down, Ryong knows that Daewi's getting more used to the Jade Emperor's right arm with every passing second. The long and short of it is that Daewi's evolving right before Ryong's very eyes, so Ryong decides that he has to evolve faster than Daewi, as the two get into another clash at close range. Somewhere else, we finally get a good look at the newly returned Uma, who has traded her fan service-friendly original skimpy bikini outfit with a more dignified white and powder blue yifu. We first see her holding the cane of the sage in her hand, while her sentient baseball bat containing the spirit of the fallen Nox Bishop Byron floats in front of her. Uma asks Byron if he's ready for whatever bonkers thing they're about to do next. Byron cries and tells her to stop, so Uma tells him to stop being a baby, as she prepares to bust out an as-yet unidentified ability. Suddenly, literal wings grow out of one side of the earth. In the meantime, Daewi and Ryong continue to duke it out just outside the arc. Back to Uma. Rabbit suddenly appears and challenges her to a scrap. The two ladies talk trash at each other, and we find out that Uma didn't really change her costume to a more dignified one when she rips off her yifu to reveal her original skimpy outfit that highlights her udders. On the other hand, Youngji Park has decided to basically turn this duel into one dedicated for God of High School's target demographic, as Rapid rips off her own robe to reveal that she's wearing an equally skimpy and super impractical skin-tight cabaret-style bikini paired with short shorts underneath. All you thirsty fanboys have to wait for these girls to give you some service though, because our story returns to Daewi and Ryong, who are currently trying to see which one gets to bash the other's brains out. Somewhere else, Mujin sees that his mass extinction has come to a halt with the appearance of the pair of wings on one side of the Earth. While this is happening, Daewi has started to fuse his martial arts moves with the Sage's powers, as he hits Ryong with a punch loaded up with his inertia ability before busting out his electromagnetic force technique upon contact. Our hero follows up by busting out a gravity-augmented kick of the Red Phoenix, which also connects. The problem is, Daewi knows that his strikes aren't strong enough to pierce through Ryong's thick dragon scales. Meanwhile, Ryong repeats himself and says that Daewi is getting more and more used to the Jade Emperor's body. The two continue to pummel each other, while Ryong has a flashback to the time he found out the Monkey King just chowed down on Wanzang. Ryong got sad, of course, and Tathagata recruited him to be his personal protector right after that. At the time, Ryong told Tathagata that he wanted to change, so this scumbag of a god told him to remove himself from this world. This all led to Ryong betraying his own kind, and we soon find out that the whole point of this flashback is to show us that Ryong is just a sad dragon boy having a tantrum because Mori didn't invite him to be his bodyguard thousands of years ago. In the present, Ryong wallops Daewi, all the while telling him that Mori's not going to show up. Apparently, Daewi knows Ryong's whole beef with Mori, as he tells him that the Monkey King probably had his reasons to eat Wanzang. Oh, and he stresses the fact that he knows his best friend will arrive sooner or later because that's the kind of guy he is. Ryong notices Daewi's not bluffing. Plus, he even gets more insecure when Daewi tells him that he really doesn't know Mori all too well. The two get into another clash and Ryong eventually notices something curious about Daewi, that the ground right beneath him is still intact even though they've been duking it out in one spot this whole time. Ryong realizes that Daewi has learned how to conserve his power in the middle of their duel, as our hero unleashes an absolute word salad of a technique called Strong Force and Inertia Fist of the Black Turtle Ultimate Nothingness Recoilless and Natural Force technique. It might sound dumb, but it's super effective because Daewi soon catches Ryong with a body shot that cracks his dragon ribs. And at this moment, Daewi has finally learned to use the Jade Emperor's body. Okwang's ghost even makes a cameo to tell Daewi that he now knows what he's doing before telling our hero to not show Ryong any mercy. But in an anticlimactic twist, Ryong is about to blow a huge chunk off of Daewi's left shoulder right after all that grandstanding. We then find out that Ryong has just copied Daewi's Ultimate Nothingness Recoilless technique. All the while, Ryong thanks Daewi for allowing him to take his game a step further. Ryong then uses his old Dragon Bones ability, while Daewi pools all his remaining energy to keep on fighting, especially now that his whole body is crying out for rest. Daewi knows he can't simply rely on his right arm. But things are getting dicier for our hero, as Ryong undergoes something called Dragon Bone Transformation, which wraps his own bones around in his arms to act as armor. On the other hand, Daewi channels all his remaining power to charge his hand with 5 specific elements: gravity, electromagnetic force, strong force, weak force, and one final ingredient that he doesn't reveal just yet. His supercharged fist literally bends the space around him as Daewi prepares for one final clash against Ryong. They lunge at each other one last time. Ryong thinks he's gotten the better of the Jade Emperor, but Daewi reveals the final ingredient in his right hand: human skill. And with it, he jams his fist right through Ryong, who ends up losing half of his upper body after Daewi's supercharged punch connects. As Daewi puts it, one shot, one kill. So this hopefully ends this long drawn-out scuffle. Meanwhile, the impact from Daewi's punch is so ridiculously strong that it sends an energy wave from their spot. to the Earth's atmosphere and right towards Mujin's new Earth, whose surface gets dashed by the energy wave. Ryong dies after realizing he should have believed in Mori more and admits that the Monkey King found a good companion in Daewee. On the other hand, Daewee realizes that the robe of the sage doesn't just protect him from physical attacks. It also helps him withstand the Jade Emperor's own abilities and prevent his human body from getting torn apart whenever he busts out a powerful technique. Daewee hasn't even taken a sigh of relief after his previous duel with Ryong when Mujin suddenly appears in front of him, ranting about how our hero messed with his sanctuary with the energy wave he sent its way just now. Our hero doesn't back down and squares up to the big baddie of this entire saga. Mujin takes a moment to turn to Ryong, and instead of thanking him for his loyal service, Mujin acts like a total dick and pretty much tells Ryong how good it is now he's dead. Because remember, Mujin is an absolute racist when it comes to gods. He then squares up to Daewee again and gets cheeky by hitting our hero with another one of his trademark cross-shaped abilities. Daewee notices that this is the same technique that nearly killed them during their first duel a few months ago, while Mujin, as you'd expect, starts running his mouth, thinking he's already won. Daewee then replies by asking Mujin what he aims to gain from destroying the entire world. It's a bad idea, because this just opens up an opportunity for Mujin to go on another exposition dump about things we've already heard numerous times in the previous chapters. The long and short of it is, humans are lame. Generation X is cool. Mujin and his underlings are migrating to his new Earth. Even Daewee gets exasperated after Mujin's non-stop blabbering about his whole plan, so our hero returns the favor and blows a hole right through Mujin's left shoulder. Mujin turns to see that Daewee's already healing his wounds with the same ability that Mandoc once used, a technique called the creation of all things, which also happens to be one of the perks of being the Jade Emperor. Mujin then realizes that Daewee has fully adapted to the Jade Emperor's power. Meanwhile, Daewee knows that he's only got about 5 or 6 good punches left in him before his body finally gives out. So he tells Mujin that he's going to beat his butt quickly. Mujin goes nuts and does a faux quote from the Bible before telling Daewee to join his side. Daewee tells Mujin to screw himself, as he charges up the same technique he used to kill Ryong, which is now given the name Infinite Punch. Daewee launches his Infinite Punch straight at Mujin's face, but the man is able to dodge. Mujin gets typically overconfident and starts talking smack, which makes him fail to notice that Daewee has already launched his second Infinite Punch. This time he's unable to dodge it, so Mujin is forced to block the attack with his arms. Daewee's technique is so powerful that it easily breaks his guard, which then allows our hero to bust out a third Infinite Punch, which he specifically calls Midline Infinite Punch, a devastating strike aimed right at Mujin's solar plexus. Mujin is able to defend himself at the last second though, as he uses a technique called Thousand Hands to block Daewee's third Infinite Punch. But Mujin immediately realizes that his Thousand Hands ability has just given Daewee a clear target leading straight to his face. Our hero busts out his fourth Infinite Punch, which destroys Mujin's Thousand Hands and lands right on his gut right after. Mujin gets rocked, but he recovers and eventually blocks Daewee's fist with his hand. Once again, Mujin starts flapping his lips, telling Daewee how he would have considered sparing humanity if everyone was as clever as him. More to the point, Mujin comes up with his own defensive technique against Daewee's Infinite Punch, an ability called Infinite Barrier, which successfully fends off our hero's latest attack and mangles his right arm. Mujin notices that Daewee's all out of juice, given that he can't use the Jade Emperor's right arm anymore and his human body is completely exhausted. But Daewee doesn't know how to quit. As he puts it, if you don't have teeth, fight with your gums. So our hero uses his left fist to try and punch Mujin with his Blue Dragon Reflex technique, but it fails. Even worse, Mujin pokes holes in our boy's left arm using the mandala. Mujin then notices that Daewee has passed out mid-punch, so he gets ready to end our hero's life. Mira then appears all of a sudden to rescue her husband. However, we do know she was battling with Deer just before, so we don't know the outcome of that battle just yet. Daewee then wakes up as Mira places the robe of the sage on him. It's a super dumb move on Mira's part because she literally turns her back away from Mujin, which allows the villain to hit her with an attack that bloodies her up. But it's not enough to knock out Mira, so she turns toward Mujin again and gets ready to settle the score with him. The four pillars then reassemble behind Mujin. Here we also see Rabbit, whom we know was against King Uma just before, so we also don't know the outcome of that battle. For some reason, Ryong's lifeless body suddenly stands and lines up alongside Mujin's other disciples too, so Mujin asks him what they're going to do now since it's a 5 against the two humans. Daewee and Mira prepare for another bonkers duel with their enemies. God of High School's next chapter opens with some unsatisfying damage control where we learn that Rabbit just up and left her fight duel with Uma while the Oxen King was beating her speech impediment afflicted butt. Thankfully, the story gets right back on track as Uma spots a giant hole in the ground. She approaches it and notices that it's worse than before. Byron advises they just pack up and head for the demon realm since the human world is already done for. But Uma refuses, telling her sentient baseball bat that she has to finish what Beck asked her to do. So Uma performs a ritual to summon Wan Zhang to prevent Mujin from completely destroying the world. Somewhere else, Bongram and Ahan team up to save Mujin's bastard baby from the mass extinction. We then get the big reveal that this infant actually possesses its dad's favorite Generation X gene when it starts resonating. Bongram follows suit. And soon enough, all other Generation X babies out there start resonating with their fellow Generation X members, and it's even revealed that Dean is alive. In another place, the remaining human survivors rally to New Korea's Nanomachine Center to serve as their final refuge. Everyone there starts defending their refuge as Mugen's storm rages towards it. The world government's Wi-Fi routers and energy crystals then all activate at the same time, and Mugen realizes that the shift to the Promised Land, which is basically New Earth's destruction of the original Earth, has suddenly come to a halt. So Mugen decides to head back to his fortress and leave the Four Pillars to deal with Daewoo and Mira. He even gives him his permission to use his weapons. Mugen tells their heroes that they can watch him destroy the Earth because they deserve it after all their hard work. Daewoo attempts to go after Mugen, but Monkey blocks his path. He smashes Monkey into the ground with his gravity ability, and crap hits the fan when Rabbit and Deer get in on the action by activating the respective loop of bindings. And to make sure our heroes don't get to pursue Mugen, Deer summons the Bell of All Evils to help them against Daewoo and Mira. Later, Mugen goes back to his chamber and starts ranting to Gaia about the shift to the Promised Land's sudden stop. While this is happening, Uma continues reaching out to Wanzang, and this goddess finally makes an appearance. Mugen learns from Gaia that her descendants are getting in his way. Mugen then recites the insane prophecy that he's been blabbering about since he got his godly powers, and it all culminates with a technique that resumes the shift to the Promised Land. Uma's ritual and the combined might of the remaining borrowed power users on Earth attempt to meet Mugen's New Earth's laser beam with one of their own. The laser show suddenly stops, which makes everyone on Earth think they've won, but it's soon revealed that they ultimately failed their attempt at stopping the shift to the Promised Land, as Mugen uses his powers to shatter Uma's arms, preventing her from completing the ritual to summon Wanzang. A giant snake then covers the entire world and more people die, while Mugen completes construction of his new world, which is now called Final Mode Nirvana. Mugen resumes his genocidal campaign, while Daewoo and Mira remain stuck on Earth as Deer, Monkey, and Rabbit block their path. We then catch up with former the sixth member and everyone's favorite loan shark, Dusik Kim, who we first see walking along a tunnel peppered with dead bodies. Meanwhile, Daewoo has the displeasure of facing off against Deer, who uses his fabulous flower powers and the Bell of All Evils to stop our heroes from reaching their boss. The main plot development that happens here, however, is when we learn from Mugen that the shift to the Promised Land is finally complete. But then, his celebrations are interrupted when Dusik appears out of nowhere and right behind Mugen, while he's inside his chamber. Mugen is surprised to find out that Dusik is still alive after all the crazy things that have happened, but he wants nothing to do with his former loan shark, so he shoos Dusik away. Dusik begs Mugen to take him in, and the villain initially refuses. But then Dusik tells him all about the money he has stashed away on Earth, which he's more than happy to hand over to Mugen in exchange for letting him join his new world order. And it's here where we get one of God of High School's most egregiously asinine plot developments, which happens when Mugen accepts to bring Dusik into his new world in exchange for the man's dough. Because apparently Korean won is still legal tender in Mugen's so-called Promised Land, even though a national economy, much less a global one, doesn't exist there after Mugen himself destroyed the world. In any case, we immediately learn that Dusik is just feigning things to get close enough to Mugen to punch him in the face. Of course, this doesn't end well for the loan shark, as he instantly obliterates Dusik with a single cough. Mugen then uses his powers to resurrect Dusik, who then attacks him again. This whole process goes on for an extended period of time, with Mugen just repeatedly popping his head off like a grape whenever he brings the dude back to life. The whole point of this sequence is that Dusik might be a ruthless money-grubbing jerk most of the time, but he sure as hell is against the idea of Mugen pretending to be a god and destroying the world. Their encounter climaxes with Dusik pretty much telling Mugen that he used to believe in the guy until he decided to become just another scrub who borrows his money to play God. Mugen then decides that Dusik talks too much as he burns his entire body. While getting cooked alive, he still musters enough energy to use his trademark technique called First Punch, Tooth Smash, as he tries to uppercut Mugen in the back. The Supreme God increases the heat as we see Dusik's flesh disintegrate. However, he's surprised to see that this absolute unit is still alive. Dusik then places his hand on Mugen's shoulder, telling the Supreme God that he was rooting for him all this time. Ever since Mugen borrowed money from him all the way back 17 years ago, he could tell that they were just both the same person who couldn't care less what happened around them as long as they got what they wanted. Dusik utters his final words, saying that all that Mugen is worth now is a mere 501. Mugen reminisces about all the people he has lost. However, he is still disappointed that Mori hasn't appeared yet to save the humans. The chapter ends with Mugen declaring the end of the old world, as he places a hand on it, which then causes the earth to fracture and crack. Somewhere else, Dean wakes up again inside the same cave where we saw him earlier to find out that each and every one of his allies are dead, but he holds out hope that he can save Sujin, so he performs CPR on her. Meanwhile, Mugen has just summoned Grand Fortress Nirvana above Earth's atmosphere to finish the old world for good. Daewoo and Mira still can't do anything about it though, because the four pillars keep blocking their path. Daewoo easily fends off Monkey, and her hero curiously points out that he can sense Mori's energy in the sky for some reason. Rabbit saves him, then we learn that Monkey is currently wielding Mugen's mandala, as he uses Rabbit as a human shield to launch a surprise attack on Daewoo. Monkey sends out Manhwa towards Dewi again, which prompts Mira to jump in and save her husband before telling him not to use the robe of the sage too much, because Deer has quote-unquote marked it. Deer goes on another exasperating exposition dump where he pretty much explains that he gradually gains possession of any item he's marked. At the same time, we find out that Rabbit has come into possession of Mujin's magic mirror, aka the kaleidoscope, which this insane god with a speech impediment uses to create clones of herself after transforming into her original form called Black Rabbit's real name. Meanwhile, Deer uses his Howl of an Old Deer ability. More to the point, the four pillars continue to be a thorn in our hero's side. Mira eventually has a duel with Rabbit, who gets sliced and diced after our heroine uses a technique called Wolfgang swordsmanship, Moon Slam, on her. And for some reason, this also removes Deer's mark on Dewi's robe of the sage. We see that Rabbit is unscathed as she appears out of the magic mirror, and more clones of her gang up on Mira. Ryong soon joins in on this mess of a skirmish when Rabbit forces him to transform. In turn, Dewi summons his best boy, Heite, to join the battle. The four pillars continue their attack on our heroes, as Dewi struggles with time fighting all four at once. However, this entire duel ultimately amounts to nothing because Mujin soon launches an attack on Earth from Grand Fortress Nirvana, which aims to finish the job in one final strike. We then get to see a montage of God of High School's various side characters like Poon Wei and Bongram, as everybody braces for the inevitable end of the world. On the ground, Dewi and Mira notice that the Earth is disappearing, as they desperately try to stave off this extinction event. But even the Jade Emperor and the Witch of the West ultimately fail to stop Earth's destruction, as they get engulfed in darkness. In the aftermath, Grand Fortress Nirvana emerges in its final form, while Mujin goes nuts and celebrates his imminent victory. But then we find out that Dewi and Mira are alive down on Earth. They're even still down to continue tussling with the four pillars. Our heroes then finally catch a break when one of Ilpio's world government operatives arrives on the scene to let Dewi and Mira know that he's brought reinforcements. Particularly, this dude has rallied the Monkey King's allied forces, which is made up of Oraguk's ape warriors and Uma's oxen troops to join the fray and put a stop to Mujin and these scumbag gods. Another skirmish erupts, but Monkey soon appears, floating right in front of Ryong's crotch with his literal bone levitating vertically right in front of him. Dewi spots them as Monkey touches Ryong's bone and tells it to get bigger. But the most curious part of this whole sequence is when Monkey uses Ryong's Yoi similarly to Mori by making it bigger. On top of that, we learn that this guy also knows how to use our hero's Thunderbolt technique. Dewi, Mira, and their allies get blown up by the Thunderbolt. Meanwhile, Mujin has an internal monologue, which is basically just an acceptance speech where he thanks every person who's helped him get to where he is, further proving that gods and God of High School really have an inability to shut the hell up. Thankfully, Mujin's gets interrupted when Grand Fortress Nirvana's central building is suddenly sliced into pieces. Mujin is taken by surprise. He suddenly hears an all-too-familiar voice uttering a bunch of seemingly nonsense words like 13th Ice Pick, 41st Merman, 63rd Saber-Toothed Tiger, 48th Ice, and 201st Junior. Little does he know that these are the names of Mori's new Dragonbone weapons. A second later, Mujin turns his head to spot none other than the Monkey King sitting on top of one of his Yois. Our main man taunts Mujin after destroying his precious little fortress. And just to F up Mujin's grand plan further, Mori tells his entire arsenal of mythical Yois to destroy everything in Grand Fortress Nirvana with a single command called 17th Staff. Just like that, his Dragonbone poles suddenly get bigger and start laying waste to Mujin's fortress. Back on Earth, the three remaining pillars sense Mori's arrival, while our main man continues talking some major trash at Mujin, asking him if he only wanted to be a god so he could play with blocks like a Lego crazy kid. In the meantime, Mujin just stares at our hero blankly, as if there's nothing he can do to stop the imminent destruction that God of High School's primary antagonist is going to bring. And while Mori does bring it right away, he starts by grabbing one of his new Dragonbone poles, the 177th Centaur. Our hero tells his foes to brace themselves, as an entire army of monsters try to swarm him. Mori spins 177th Centaur around until it creates a couple of whirlwinds that sweep away these disgusting creatures. Meanwhile, Rabbit, Monkey, and Deer rush towards Mori's position to start some smoke with our boy. But these scrubs immediately stop in their tracks when they spot Mori and the whirlwinds from his 177th Centaur technique. The Monkey King then pulls out several poles from his bag, with a few of them possessing an elemental affinity of their own, such as 98th Ice, 91st Flame, 32nd Thunder Dragon, along with 41st Merman, Gon, and Ice Pick. Our hero just has one command for his fearsome weapons: destroy all their enemies. The cadre of Dragonbone staff then crash right into the three remaining pillars and are engulfed in a huge explosion. Deer tries to grandstand with his trademark brand of stale trash talk, so our hero gives him a super satisfying reply, as he tells another one of his weapons, 27th Rhino, to just smash these fools. 27th Rhino grows colossal in size and crushes Deer, Monkey, and Rabbit down to earth. The three pillars almost die if not for Monkey's efforts, as he uses his borrowed mandala to stop 27th Rhino from squashing them like the insignificant bugs that they are. Once again, Monkey does something super peculiar, as he gives out an order: get bigger. We then get the mirror reveal that Ryong died once again after getting resurrected during the four pillars fight against Dewi and Mira. As for Monkey's command, it turns out that he's referring to Dragon's ribs, which grow in size and act as a brace to hold up 27th Rhino. In lieu of doing something useful, Rabbit and Deer just spew more nonsense that doesn't contribute anything to the battle. Thankfully, Mori arrives to shut them up, as he drops down right behind these two idiots. Our hero doesn't even bust out any of his fancy techniques, he just goes ahead and starts beating these scrubs senseless. Mori starts putting the work on Deer, as he drives his knee into the mouthy god's gut. Our main man then does one of the most satisfying moves in the arc, as Mori grabs this nerd by his horns and uses them to slingshot himself for a flying knee that hits Deer square in his lame jaw. Even better, the force of Mori's grip snaps Deer's horns like a couple of twigs. Rabbit tries to step up and backstab our hero, but Mori once again proves that he's on a different level when he smacks around repeatedly that you'd feel super uncomfortable watching it if Rabbit wasn't such an annoying piece of hot trash. Deer somehow recovers from the massive humiliation that Mori just gave him. Plus, it seems that this dumb forest god finally learned his lesson, as something other than weak smack talk comes out of his mouth when he sees Mori bashing Rabbit's head in. That is to say, Deer has learned how to beg, as he pleads with Mori to stop wailing on his stupid pal. But some habits are hard to break. Deer can't help himself and calls Mori a jackass along the way, which prompts our hero to give him a death stare. And in another satisfying turn of events, Deer starts nearly wetting his pants when our hero pretty much asks him what the hell he just called him. On the other hand, at least Rabbit fares marginally better against the Monkey King, as she stabs her hero with a dagger while he has his head turned. To her credit, Rabbit is loyal to a fault, as she tells Mori that she just can't let him get to Mugen. But the Monkey King doesn't have the time or the patience to hear out these overly flamboyant minor characters, so he straight up ends Rabbit by crushing her like a gnat with 55th Goliath. Oh, and as for the stab wound that Rabbit hoped she gave Mori, yeah, that's not happening, because our hero's dragon armor suits does its job and easily protects our boy from it. Once again, Mori proves that he deserves to become a fan favorite when he smashes Deer with 55th Rhino. Our hero even makes sure this crappy disciple of Mugen shuts up forever by smashing him with his own hands instead of remotely commanding 55th Rhino to do the job. With the two scrubs dead, Mori turns around to see the last remaining pillar, Monkey, who's gearing up for an epic duel with our hero. Another curious thing happens when Mori recognizes Monkey and asks him what he's doing in this place. But we don't get an answer, because we instead get the annoying development that Deer and Rabbit are still alive. In fact, these two scrubs start transforming into their true form after Rabbit utters the all-too-cliched line about how she guesses she's going to have to show her true self. A second later, Deer uses a technique called Old Deer's Liberation to reveal his so-called true form, which is different from the true form he was mouthing off about during his fight against Mira not too long ago. In any case, Deer now looks more like a centaur than an actual deer. On the other hand, Rabbit uses a technique called Black Rabbit's True Form, which allows her to create multiple copies of herself to fight by her side. Mori then clarifies that these copies aren't clones. It's more the case that Rabbit really has multiple bodies made up of sultry anthropomorphic bunny rabbits. Rabbit and Deer's grandstanding and chest puffing only amount to a massive waste of time on Mori's part though, because our hero once again easily smashes these weaklings without breaking a sweat. Along the way, he wallops Deer with his 30-second Thunder Dragon staff. But you got to hand these scrubs some credit, they really don't know when to quit. Rabbit tries to mount a counterattack by using the Mirror of All Evil's damage reflection ability. For a moment, they think they've gotten the better of Mori, as Deer follows up with the Bell of All Evil's Old Deer's Bell ability, while Rabbit piles on with a technique called Black Rabbit's Curse. But you don't become the infamous Monkey King just for nothing. Mori easily has their techniques checked right after they use them, so he responds by summoning another one of his yois named 180th Moonshadow to duplicate itself and literally rain down Dragon Bone spears all over these nuisances. Mori even takes this opportunity to go on a quick exposition about how Rabbit's damage reflection ability requires that she first mark her target in the mirror for at least half a second to allow the technique to work. Plus, it can't be used consecutively, since 180th Moonshadow's Dragonbone rain is too fast for the Mirror of All Evils to capture. All Rabbit can do is watch as each and every one of her copies get torn apart. And once Mori's done dealing with most of her copies, Mori casually orders 180th Moonshadow to rain down on Rabbit's remaining bodies for some satisfying overkill. And just to add insult to injury, our hero crafts a makeshift piston with a few of his yois and proceeds to give Rabbit's last remaining body a hard face pounding with Mori's trademark move of repeatedly shrinking and stretching his pole. Our hero then basically tells Rabbit to just take the loss because he'll kill any and all clones she creates. Meanwhile, we learn out of nowhere that Deer has stolen one of Mori's yoi bongs with his mark ability. Normally it would take longer, but Deer uses his own life to shorten the wait time. He's even super proud of what he just did. As we learn, this idiot doesn't really care about shortening his own lifespan, because he really wants to own a powerful weapon like yoi. Too bad, because he's not worthy to even wield it, as this fabulous god struggles to even lift his stolen yoi. Mori even warns him that these things are heavier than they look, but Deer won't listen. He just acts like the dummy that he is and continues straining himself until blood comes out of his mouth and nose. Mori pretty much tells Deer to just give back the weapon, since he can't even lift it. Of course, idiots like this would never listen to reason, so Deer continues making a fool of himself until he's able to lift his stolen staff just above his head. At this point, you wouldn't be wrong to think that our hero's just playing with his prey, as Mori messes with Deer by commanding the stolen yoi to grow in size and get heavier. And just to add insult to injury, the Monkey King summons 55th Rhino right beneath Deer in an attempt to crush him between these two dragon bone staff. However, we don't get that satisfying payoff, because Ryong suddenly emerges and starts beating up his fellow pillars. Ryong doesn't hide the fact that he absolutely hates his coworkers, which only became more apparent after he saw Mori put Rabbit to sleep just now. Make no mistake though, Ryong isn't here to reconcile with Mori, he just wants to get our hero all to himself. They get into it at close quarter, and Ryong even manages to land a good hit on her hero when he uses a version of Daewoo's infinite punch technique. But Mori's just too much of a problem, and it doesn't take long before he gets the upper hand. All the while, Ryong has an internal monologue where we learn that this dragon still hasn't gotten over the fact that Mori didn't invite him to become a part of his squad. Oh, and of course he's still mad that our hero ate Wanzang. The battle's momentum is broken when Ryong's Dragon Breath attack is interspersed with flashbacks of Mira and Daewoo doing some exposition about how Mori has become quote-unquote the ultimate character with the fastest leveling up imaginable. They even go on this whole analogy about how Mori now has the complete skill tree of a top-level character. It's all too video gamey for its own good. Thankfully, this commentary doesn't get drawn out and we get to go back to Mori's battle with Ryong right away, as our hero busts out his signature Weichuk technique to deliver his enemy the killing blow. No payoff just yet, because we get another flashback, but at least this one adds something to Ryong and Mori's backstory, as we learn that Mori sent Ryong away all those thousands of years ago because he didn't want him to get sucked into his own drama with Wanzang and the gods. In the present, Mori has seemingly just hit Ryong with his Weichuk technique, while the dragon realizes how much his sworn brother has changed. God of High School's next chapter opens with Monkey screwing over his fellow pillars in an attempt to absorb them. Mori turns towards Monkey and tells him to stop, and they get right down to business. Monkey becomes even more interesting than his comrades when we find out that he basically has the same moveset as our hero, especially when they try to hit each other with thunderbolts. After that, Monkey summons a squad of his own duplicates. Mori takes them out, and with all distractions dealt with, our hero finally reveals the identity behind Monkey's mask. Thankfully, Monkey isn't another one of Mori's tired old clones, as we learn that this guy's name is Sabuti. More interestingly, he was Mori's first master. Mori then asked when Sabuti decided to become Tathagata's lackey, whether it was after the Divine War or after he killed Tathagata thousands of years ago. And you can't help but love Sabuti too, because unlike most of the other God of High School characters who love nothing more than to dump exposition and make long-winded speeches about sundry topics, Sabuti straight up tells Mori that he'll keep things short. As a matter of fact, Mori even tries to insist that Sabuti start from the very beginning, but this dude is having none of that. Simply put, Sabuti answers Mori's question by telling him that he sided with Tathagata to correct a mistake. He then uses a technique called monkey corpses to summon an entire army of fallen monkey warriors. Sabuti further explains that the monkey clan that he was part of all died because of Mori. Only our Monkey King survived because he was the only special one there. The long and short of it is, everyone around him ends up being miserable and dies, including the events leading to his human grandfather, Jin Tai-jin, and Wanzang's deaths. Because of Mori's selfishness and thirst for power, he caused the previous war and ruined everything for them. True to his words, Sabuti doesn't dump unnecessary exposition and just ends his tirade by saying that Mori thinks that the only person that matters to him is himself. That pretty much answers everything about Sabuti's motivations. Meanwhile, Deer covers the entirety of Grand Fortress Nirvana and Vine, presumably to prevent any of Mori's allies from helping him. On the other hand, Rabbit goes on a rampage and yells that she's always going to keep coming back no matter how many times Mori kills her. So she uses her signature ability and summons more clones of herself. Back to Mori, Sabuti continues stressing the fact that Mori's a selfish jerk to further mess with his head. But Mori's over that already. He insists that it's different this time. He even goes so far as to tell Sabuti that he's not the infamous Chikonda song anymore. He's Mori Jin. Back on Earth, Daewoo spots Deer's vine barrier, so he jumps hundreds of feet toward Grand Fortress Nirvana to destroy the vines with his infinite punch ability. But Daewoo realizes this technique is not enough, so he takes inspiration from Mujin and adjusts his ability, tweaking it into an open palm strike called Infinite Barrier. It's super effective, as Daewoo easily breaks through the vine barrier. As always, Deer runs his mouth when he spots Daewoo, but the Jade Emperor is not one to trade weak sauce jabs with this lame forest god. So our hero just bisects this moron with Infinite Punch and steals his book. Meanwhile, Rabbit does something even more useful and decides to drop down on Earth and use her copies as kamikaze bombers that would blow up what's left of the world. A quick flashback reveals that Ilpio and Beck came up with this plan to make Uma use Byron on the gaping hole in the middle of New Korea's ruins, since Byron is made up of Tam. According to them, there's one person who could manipulate Tam once Uma unleashes it on the world, Mira, because she possesses R's cells in her body. This plan also involves using Mandok's energy crystals to activate the Tam on a global scale. In the present, New Korea's ruins are suddenly covered in Tam, and with Mira controlling the deadly substance, the Witch of the West uses the Tam to devour any and all of Rabbit's copies threatening to drop down on Earth. It doesn't even take long before Mira catches Rabbit's main body and pins her down by the neck while her Tam continues to chow down on her copies. Mira tells Rabbit that she'll just eat up all the clones she makes. Rabbit calls her bluff, but Mira proves she's telling the truth when it only takes a matter of moments before her Tam eats up each and every Rabbit copy out there. Rabbit pushes herself to the brink of death as she's left with her last clone. Well, Mira finally finishes the job and shuts this villain down when she satisfyingly stabs her last copy in the throat and twists the blade of Tathagata to pop it off her neck. The Tam eats it, and hopefully we don't get to hear this annoying creature from here on out. Back at Grand Fortress Nirvana, the spirit of the book appears before Dewi after he steals the fabulous Forest God's book. The spirit tries to intimidate Dewi, but this wuss folds in an instant when Dewi gives him a death stare. And with that, Dewi gains the title New Master of Book, and even though Deer is one of the most annoying characters in the series 99% of the time, he has a point when he tells how stupid that title sounds before he dies, hopefully for real this time. Somewhere else, Beck tells Ilpio that pieces of their plan are now gradually falling into place, inching them ever closer to victory. And now, Beck is only waiting for their last bet to happen. God of High School's 524th chapter opens up with yet another flashback. This time, we get to learn about Subuti's origin story. It turns out that he used to be an earthly deity similar to Gaia millennia ago. However, unlike Gaia, the gods from the heavenly realm didn't murder Subudi, because he chose to side with them when they arrived on Earth. The flashback then recons Mori's own origin story too, because now it's apparently the case that the Monkey King didn't grow out of the ancient dragon ogre's corpse. He was born from Gaia's, right on the spot where the other gods murdered her. The story goes that Subudi returned to the same spot a year after Gaia's death, and that's when he first met the Monkey King. And since the Monkey King is magic, he was already able to speak the moment he was born. One of the first things Mori did all those thousands of years ago was approach Subudi and ask the man to take him under his wing. Subudi refused at first and roughed up the kid a bit, but his conscience got the best of him when the Monkey King reminded him of Gaia. So he threw him in a monster pit and told the boy that he'd accept him as an apprentice if he could survive in it for one night. Mori did him one better and not only survived, but ended up dominating all the monsters in the pit. So Subudi was forced to take the boy under his care, initially telling Mori that he'd only train him for a month. Well, a month turned into a year, and a year turned into 17 years. By the time he knew it, Subudi had already started treating the Monkey King like his own kid. Mori learned all that Subudi had to teach him so quickly, showing our Monkey King's genius prowess. Resting together somewhere, Mori tells his master that he doesn't like anyone being above him. Subudi replies that he's getting a bit cocky after learning a few tricks from him. Furthermore, he tells Mori that his techniques are child's play compared to the gods in the heavenly realm. However, this doesn't make Mori back down, as this makes him want to fight them even more. And later on, the Monkey King would eventually end up going to war against the gods of the first heavenly realm. In the present, Mori and Subudi continue to duke it out. They find themselves evenly matched until Subudi uses a technique that sends Mori to the so-called world of the abyss to mess with his mind some more by reminding him of how he literally ate Wanzang in the past. Weirdly enough, Subudi tries to pitch Mori into joining his side. But Mori's resolve triumphs in the end when he focuses on the good things that happened in his life instead of the horrible ones. This allows Mori to break free from the world of the abyss and continue his duel with Subudi. On a side note, the story reveals that this all happens around the same time Dewi was wrecking Deer and Mira was gobbling up Rabbit with her Tam. The citizens of Earth see this from afar, and a ray of light starts to shine. Back to Mori, he tells his old master that this time things are different because he's not alone. Subudi, with his mask half broken, says, "How cute." We then get another flashback, this time to the aftermath of the First Heavenly War, where Mori has already been captured by Tathagata and the other gods. Tathagata is just about ready to execute the Monkey King for his crimes against heaven. But it's here we find out that his life was spared when Subudi cut a deal with Tathagata, that he'd serve the Supreme God for all eternity in exchange for sparing the Monkey King's life. Tathagata agrees, and the flashback moves forward a bit, as Subudi continues wandering the earth. He eventually meets Wanzang when she's still a kid, and it's here we learn that he made himself a vow to protect humanity from then on, considering that they're Gaia's descendants. Sometime later, Subudi would fulfill his end of the bargain with Tathagata, as he relinquishes his status as a god to become one of the Supreme Being's guardians. It's also here we find out that Subudi doesn't really hate the Monkey King, he actually loves the guy, which is why he did all this. The long and short of it is that Subudi had wished for the Monkey King to find good companions, which he did when he met Wanzang. More than that, Subudi believes that his pupil was the prophesied champion that Gaia once spoke of. In the present, Mori and Subudi clash once again, with Subudi telling our hero to prove that he's really Gaia's so-called chosen one. Meanwhile, Mori tries to explain himself to Subudi, telling his old master how Tathagata screwed him over and killed his brothers in the past. The long and short of it is that Mori did what he did because he had no choice. Their clash culminates in Mori smacking away Subudi's mask to reveal that he now looks like a living skull crying tears of blood. Mori asks his old master what the heck happened to his face, but it seems even Subudi himself doesn't have any idea how he ended up like this. Subudi then melts into a goopy black liquid, which starts to cover everything in its path. Not too far away, Dewi notices that this same black ooze is poison, And right now, Subudi has covered all of Grand Fortress Nirvana with this black liquid in an attempt to crash Mujin's newfangled city down to Earth. Dewi then realizes that it's not just Subudi doing this, Mujin's actually the one at the helm. The story then shifts to another flashback, which more or less gives us a montage of a bunch of stuff that happened to Mori in the past. It begins with him having a conversation with Subudi after the gods captured him at the end of the First Heavenly War. Subudi chastises Mori for biting off more than he could chew when he decided to beef with these scumbag citizens of the Heavenly Realm, but the Monkey King insists he'd rather die a free man than live as a slave to the gods. Subudi then made his way to Tathagata to cut his fateful deal with the Supreme God, and we all know how that went. The flashback then moves forward to the time Tathagata acted like the scumbag that he is and decided to kill Mori's loyal subjects just for the heck of it. We then see the moment when Wanzang told the Monkey King to literally eat her. And after that, we move forward to the time the Monkey King blew a hole through Tathagata's scummy temple after challenging him to a duel. You guys probably already know this by now, but this is also the same era when Okwang made a bet with the Monkey King after he almost died getting his revenge against Tathagata. The old Jade Emperor then went on a monologue explaining that Mori will never surpass Tathagata. Even more, Okwang pretty much says the Monkey King is damned to his fate, that everything he's experienced has been part of the great karmic cycle that the Supreme God placed in the universe. The Monkey King is just a little rat in a cage, all things considered. The flashback finally ends, and we return to the present for some much-needed plot movement. This time, we learn that Ryong has started chowing down on Subudi. Even better, this wayward dragon prince has finally gotten over his beef with Mori and decided to become allies with his sworn brother once again. Back on Earth, Uma uses Byron to unleash some Tam in order to devour the encroaching Subudi who is coming ever closer to the planet. This becomes a whole community effort where Dewi chips in with reverse gravity to protect the world from getting engulfed in the black ooze. And while this is happening, Ryong makes the absolutely clutch move of fully recommitting himself to Mori by becoming part of his already powerful Dragon Bone arsenal. Ryong transforms into another Yoi the size of a wand, as Mori prepares to use his old friend against Subudi. Subudi declares that this is Mori's last trial, all the while referring to him by his old name, the Stone Monkey. But Mori reiterates that he's not the Stone Monkey anymore, he's Mori Jin. And right now, Mori is gearing up his Ryong Yoi to bust out his classic railgun technique. Mori unleashes the railgun, alongside the help of inertia technique from Dewi and Wi-Fi from Mira. This combined attack is called Wi-Fi Railgun and it hits Subudi square in the chest. Subudi dies, but the old master's happy that our hero passed his final test. He even acknowledges the Monkey King is Mori Jin before he bites the dust. We then get another flashback that reveals Subudi also cut a deal with Okwang to steer clear of the demon realm and all its inhabitants after the Monkey King had just murked Tathagata. That's about the same time when our hero was reborn as Mori Jin, and it turns out that Subudi was the one who ordered the 8-Beast clone found deep within the mountains of modern-day North Korea to protect Mori. From there, Subudi went to sleep and vowed that he'll reawaken once Tathagata returns. He even warns Mori that he'd do everything to stop him if he decides to attack the Supreme God again, not because he likes the scumbag, but because he made an oath to be Tathagata's bodyguard. In the present, Mori, Dewi, and Mira finally reunite. Meanwhile, Subudi makes one final wish before fully passing on, for Mori to defeat Tathagata and break the chain of samsara. Subudi finally dies in peace, knowing that he fulfilled his promise to Gaia. God of High School's next chapter picks up right in the aftermath of Subudi's defeat, as Ryong and Mori come face to face. Our hero finally formally squashes his beef with his old sworn brother, telling him the reason why he left him during his and Wanzang's journey to India. We've heard this story several times before, so we're not going to recap it for the umpteenth time. All you should know is that Mori finally realizes that he should have told Ryong the truth from the beginning, since that would have saved us all from this drama. In any case, this is exactly what Ryong waited for so long to hear. The old pals finally become buds again, and Mori asks Ryong to lend him his power in their upcoming fight against Mujin. Ryong agrees, and he transforms back into his Yoi form. Mori even peacocks inside Grand Fortress Nirvana when he summons each and every one of his dragon ancestors to fly around and do a ferocious roar for a bit. We unsurprisingly get another flashback showing us the time when the Monkey King made all the other Monkey Kings in the Demon Realm bend the knee to him so that he could start the war against the gods along with Uma and Garuda. In the present, we find out that Subudi keeps on lingering even after he already vanished into nothing at the end of the previous chapter. He's happy that Mori is able to learn to cop to his mistakes and say sorry. Even weirder is that he turns into a Yoi and lends his power to Mori afterwards, despite the fact that Subudi isn't even a dragon. But it is what it is, and Mori's not one to kick a gift horse in the mouth. So our hero adds a couple more Yoi to his already devastating arsenal of magical pulls. Meanwhile, Dewi and Mira sense that Mori has gotten stronger compared to when he fought Ryong earlier. Mira then states the obvious and says her best friend has leveled up so quickly, but she wonders how the heck that happened. Oh, and we find out that Uma's already in Grand Fortress Nirvana too, when she tells Mira to get serious or she'll never catch up to the Monkey King. Meanwhile, Mori takes this opportunity to mess with Mujin some more, as he addresses the Supreme Being and tells him that he's happy he'll get to beat the living daylights out of a couple of people he can't stand, namely Mujin and Tathagata. Mori then turns to Mira and Dewi to catch up for a bit. He finds out they're married. Everything's copacetic, and we get a couple of ostensibly funny scenes where Mori teases his best friends about becoming newlyweds. The story gets back on track when Mori notices all their banged-up world government allies and the absolute crapshoot the world has become. Dewi tells our hero that Mujin's gotten out of control, and our hero can't help but think that Mujin's acting the same way he did back when he was still the Monkey King. Dewi then asks his best friend if they have a chance of winning against Mujin. As usual, our hero looks on the bright side and tells his two best friends in the world that things will work out somehow if they work together. The original God of High School trio then make their way to Mujin's chambers. And we get a quick lighthearted moment when Dewi and Mira nearly beat up Mori for almost jinxing their mission by inviting them to some tabaki when this whole mess is over and done with. Mori, Dewi, and Mira soon reach Mujin's inner sanctum. Mujin tries to talk some smack at our heroes, but Mori has no patience for this scumbag, so he simply tells Mujin to shut up. And with that, we get treated to a triple alliance between Dewi, who represents the gods, Mira, who represents humanity, and Mori, who represents the monsters of the demon realm. Mujin keeps on running his mouth, telling our heroes they'll never beat him, while Mori tells his archenemy that it's time to end this beef once and for all. No payoff for this just yet, guys, because we get to see yet another flashback, which happens just before our heroes reach Mujin's inner chamber. Mori asks Dewi how large the gap between his and Mujin's power levels are right now, and the Jade Emperor doesn't mince his words. As Dewi puts it, Mori is surely going to lose in his current state, especially considering that Mujin had already beaten someone like Satan, who's more powerful compared to our hero right now. Dewi goes on to tell Mori that he's not even sure they can beat Mujin even if the three of them teamed up. Dewi then asks Mori to make a choice, whether he wants to fight Mujin or get revenge against the man. Fast forward to the present, and Mujin reminisces about his past with Mori, telling him that it's now time to end their long ill-fated history. And he's not wrong when he says that this whole bonkers saga has continued damn long enough, so it's best they end it right here and now. Meanwhile, we learn that Grand Fortress Nirvana is arriving on Mujin's new Earth soon. On the other hand, we also find out that this new world's terraforming process is only 30% complete, even though Mujin already celebrated its completion a few chapters ago in the same arc. As always the case with God of High School, it is what it is, so the story just shifts back to Mujin, who tells our heroes to come at him all at once. But we don't get to see this duel just yet, as Mori and Mujin continue flapping their gums. This time, Mori figures out that he and his best friend still have a shot at taking out Mujin, given that he has failed to become a complete version of the Supreme Being. Mori can tell this based on the fact that Mujin is wearing the Loop of Binding, which is a trinket that serves more as handcuffs instead of a pretty little magic tiara. Things get even more insufferable when one of the Generation X toddlers who are questionably in the same room interrupts the grown-ups' conversation. The same kid was the same nosy one who helped Mujin with Gaia earlier, which probably explains why she thinks she has the privilege to tug on Mujin's pant leg and not so much ask him to not fight instead of boss the Supreme Being around. This annoying toddler then has a tantrum, as she orders Mujin to not fight Mori and the gang. In turn, Mujin calms this nuisance down by going on a whole spiel about how he has to throw hands with Mori, Dewi, and Mira as payment for all the proverbial debts he's incurred during his rise to power. Shortly after that, Mujin does something that any self-respecting adult would do and sends these annoying Generation X mutants on time out in another dimension before they could ruin the good time we're all about to have. Mujin apologizes to his opponents for the kid's intrusion, while Mori berates his archenemy for being a bald-faced hypocrite. And our hero has a point. Mujin's out here acting like the ideal father figure, but the man literally abandoned P and their bastard baby on Earth. Mujin then retorts by telling Mori that going full deadbeat on his girlfriend and biological baby was only fair. As he puts it, Mujin applied the same standards and made the fair choice in line with his mission to create a world full of new humans, aka Generation X. The villain then pretty much paints himself as martyr who's willing to make the hard choices to enact what he calls quote-unquote iron justice, reassuring Mori that he's going to punish himself in the most brutal way possible as penance for all his misdeeds after this whole beef between them gets settled. Mori doesn't buy it and even throws some shade at Mujin, telling him he sounds like a narcissistic moron posting on Facebook. As our hero tells it, punishment only counts when you get beaten up by the people you screwed over. Mujin tries to continue this long-winded discussion, but Mori thankfully, finally, gets things started by smacking him right in the face before he could finish his next sentence. And from there, Mori declares that Mujin just needs a good beating, as he, Dewi, and Mira square up to the supposed final boss of the saga. Dewi even gets in on the trash talk and tells Mujin that if he wants to punish himself, he could leave that to him and his gang, while Mira insists that they have the right to wreck his face for every single scummy thing Mujin has done. Mori then tells Mujin that they're now going to beat the hell out of him, and the party finally gets to full gear, as our hero rushes Mujin to try and cave in his skull with an overhead Yoi strike. But Mujin defends himself with a barrier and calls forth an artifact called the Scroll of Reincarnation. He then sacrifices a pinky finger to summon a huge monster that proceeds to attack our heroes. Mori, Dewi, and Mira wail on the monster, but it is one durable son of a gun. In fact, it's strong enough to withstand several Yoi strikes that literally poke holes into its head and body. Weirdly enough, tears start falling down the monster's face before it goes for another clash. Our heroes defend themselves, and we soon get the big reveal that this is no ordinary monster. As it turns out, Mujin has just resurrected Q to become one of his minions, and our heroes are able to certify this when the creature summons Q's trademark Joker Scythe. Daewee is frozen in shock when he sees this, which leaves him open for the monster to hit him with its scythe. But no worries, because the robe of the sage protects the Jade Emperor, and Daewee finally puts the creature out of its misery by cleaving it in half. All the while, Mujin has been analyzing the battlefield and concludes that it takes our heroes about 3 minutes to defeat one of his monsters. He does some math and says that his new world's terraforming process will take about half an hour, so he summons 10 more monsters made out of more of our heroes' fallen comrades, such as Executives O, S, and C using a technique called Scroll of Reincarnation, the 108 Torments summoning. Mujin then tries to worm his way out of the battlefield, but Mori easily catches up to the villain and nearly hits him with Yoi again. We then return to the flashback from the chapter's opening sequence, where we learn Mori's answer to Daewee's question about whether he wants to fight Mujin or get revenge. Mori says he's going to do both. In the present, our hero tells Mujin that he just has to smack him in the face as the two warriors clash. The story continues with a flashback from just a few seconds before Mori and Mujin got into it, as we learn that our hero summoned a bunch of the Yois in his arsenal, such as Ice, Flame, Goliath, and Serpent among others, to drop down on the Mujin, summon monsters, and subdue them while he deals with the main threat. Back in the present, Mori and Mujin clash at close range. The Supreme God is not at all impressed with the Monkey King's new Yois, knowing that it's all pointless to him. Attacking Mujin with the 19th staff is supposed to be a critical blow, however he easily blocks it with his 2 fingers. In a different room, the new Generation X babies watch how beautiful the new world is as it nears its completion, while the humans on Earth are struggling just to breathe. Each and every one of them knows that the old world is ending soon. Daewee and Mira are shocked by how much the gap between Mujin against the 3 of them, even stating that he's not even using 100% of his power. For the sake of saving the world, they need to defeat him before he gets all his powers back. Meanwhile, a few unnamed world government agents who survived Mujin's massacre earlier emerge and decide to steer clear of the battle, knowing that they'll just get in the way. Mori and Mujin then get into it at close range, and the villain is eventually taken by surprise when Daewee sneaks up behind him to bust out a punch that's been loaded with his inertia force. Daewee cracks Mujin right in the ribs, and Mira follows up with a gut shot that rocks the Supreme Being. Mori then launches a giant Yoi right at Mujin and pounds him a couple of times with it. But Mujin easily recovers from this and even talks some trash, as he rushes our heroes again. Mori and Daewee double-team Mujin, but the man just blocks all their strikes. Once again, Mujin runs his mouth and asks Daewee if he really thinks he can beat him in close combat. Mira answers the question for Daewee, as she jumps in and tries to take his head off with the blade of Tathagata. But she misses when Mujin ducks at the right moment. Mori piles on, and it's enough to distract Mujin long enough for Mira to stab him in the back with her sword. But the next thing we know, Mujin's already holding the tip of the blade of Tathagata in between his fingers and proceeds to twist it so hard that Mira's right arm cracks in the process. The fight heats up as Mori puts pressure on Mujin, while Mira recovers to get back in action. Too bad though, because this clash ends up like before, with Mujin blocking their attacks. As a matter of fact, he's gotten so good at martial arts that he's able to redirect Daewee's incoming punch towards Mira's face. Thankfully, Daewee is able to pull back just before it connects, but this just leaves our 3 heroes open for Mujin to give each one of them a cracking strike that sends the gang flying. Daewee realizes that there's more depth to Mujin's experience and skills than they first expected, and concludes that the man has become more powerful than when he had his first awakening. Daewee takes stock of the threat they're facing, which basically all boils down to a creature who's already a master martial artist, but has become even more unimaginably powerful thanks to gaining Tathagata's power, regardless if it's still incomplete. Mujin then talks more smack, telling our heroes that they must be dreaming if they thought they stood a chance against him even while not using 100% of his powers. Mori says yes and finally gets close enough to Mujin to pull off a right Huichuk technique, which hits the villain right in his arrogant face. Mujin instantly notices that Mori's preparing for a left foot Huichuk, but this is just a masterful feint, because our hero switches to a beautiful front kick that hits his opponent square on the chin. Mujin tries to counter, but Daewee jumps in and drives his knee into his gut. Mira then tries to go for Mujin's head, but the man jumps away to safety again. On the bright side, we do find out that Mira was able to slice him in the midsection before he could dodge. Mujin then reassesses the battlefield and decides to target the one who has already taken the most damage, Daewee. He summons the 8 weapons of Tathagata and lunges at Daewee, but the Jade Emperor proves that he's still got a lot of gas in the tank when he successfully fends off Mujin's salvo. Mori gets sneaky and launches a few Yois behind Mujin. He's able to parry them, but this leaves him open for Daewee to hit him with a solid oblique kick. However, Mujin counters by trying to jam his right hand into Daewee's skull, but our hero uses his natural inertia force ability to drive back Mujin before he could connect. Still, Daewee can't believe that Mujin isn't even using the full limit of his powers yet. Our hero even starts to wonder if Mujin has any limits. In any case, the Jade Emperor knows that they have to beat him before his new world's terraforming process wraps up. Mujin then summons the Bell of All Evils and threatens to bash Daewee in the head with it. The Jade Emperor is too slow to counter with his natural force technique, so he uses his hands to block the bell instead. But this is exactly what Mujin wants. As he puts it, Deer was completely mistaken about the essence of the Bell of All Evils because the scary thing about this weapon is that it's an extremely hard instrument. Mujin then rings the bell a few times in front of Dewi at point-blank range, which rocks our hero. The villain finds an opening and kicks him a few times, where he tries to give his best friend some much-needed backup, but Mujin just drives him away with his powers before proceeding to ring the Bell of All Evils some more. Meanwhile, Mira decides to target Mujin's wrist to stop his assault. It almost works, but Mujin is able to catch on and block her blade at the right moment before pinning it between the bell and his left knee. Mujin threatens to blast Mira with the bell at point-blank range, but Dewi arrives in the nick of time to pull her back. However, this move comes at a price, as Mujin successfully traps the Jade Emperor inside the bell and begins slapping it around to kill Dewi inside and use its permeative attack ability to hit Mira and Mori outside. In the meantime, Mira and Mori lunge at Mujin to rescue their best friend. It takes a whole lot of effort, but Mira eventually knocks Mujin's hands away from the Bell of All Evils. Mira's ears start to leak blood from the bell's attacks, while Mujin tells her that Dewi's probably dead after taking so many hits from inside it. Mujin then prepares to strike down Mira, but Dewi emerges from the bell, distracting Mujin enough for Mira to land another sword strike on their enemy. But Mujin's not wrong. Dewi has taken a ton of hits while inside the bell, so much so that he's forced to recoil after emerging, which allows Mujin to stab his knee with the mandala. Mujin knows that Dewi's too weak to use his natural force abilities right now and proceeds to blast our hero with his power. Mira fears for the worst, which then leaves her open for Mujin to teleport behind her and threaten to blind her left eye. A moment later, Mori emerges from the rubble to see that Mujin has already taken out his best friends. On top of that, we learn that the new Earth's terraforming process is now 64% complete. World government agents who are still inside the Ark notice that their ship in Grand Fortress Nirvana is being sucked into the new world's gravitational field, as Ilpio's unconscious body, along with a few other dead world government agents, float in the atmosphere. The good news is that we find out that the Holy Grail's energy is now 100% embodied, and with it, they can bring back Mori to his old prime. One unnamed world government agent gets too excited and tries to grab the Holy Grail, but Beck stops him, telling the man that its power will definitely kill him if he touches it. Instead, Beck reveals his and Ilpio's grand plan, to let Generation X kids like Dean and Bongram wield the Holy Grail and release Mori's power sealed within it. Oh, and we also find out that Ahan is now inside the Ark along with Mujin's baby. A flashback then reveals that Mori actually took a detour before wrecking Grand Fortress Nirvana. It turns out that he first rescued Ahan, Bongram, and Sunga, and all the other babies under their care when Mujin unleashed an extinction wave on Earth. Ahan and Mori would finally reunite, and it's the same moment when he first met Mujin and P's kid. Bongram sees Mori and thinks about what he would do to the kid since Mujin has killed his only human family, referring to none other than our hero's own grandpa, Tai-Jin. However, he just smiles and holds the baby up in the air, which causes the baby to cry. Mori was also able to recognize Bongram during this whole sequence too. Afterwards, our hero used Gyeondaewon to create whirlwinds that managed to dispel Mujin's extinction wave, and from there he took Bongram, Ahan, and the baby to the Ark aboard Gyeondaewon. As for Sunga, she decided to stay behind to continue taking of all the other infants. In the present, Dean is super excited to finally meet Ahan. The Holy Grail then starts to glow, which makes Dean realize they don't have any time to mess around. So he, Bongram, and Ahan prepare to use the artifact, while Mori continues to have a heated battle against Mujin. Dean and Bongram head for the Ark's engine room to proceed with the process of unleashing the power trapped inside the Holy Grail to bring back Mori to his old prime. The resonance begins, and we even see the ghosts of Team Generation X's fallen members like Lee, Heo, and Han join in to help them. The monster's bones within the Ark's engine room start to glow, and the Holy Grail starts to activate, while Beck does some color commentary and explains that the artifact is restarted. But it's unclear whether the Holy Grail can endure this enormous power. As Beck puts it, it's a gamble from this point on. Inside Mujin's inner sanctum, he and Mori continue to duke it out. Mori realizes that Mujin's not just strong, the man's got a good sense of combat from surviving many wars. Meanwhile, we learn that the new world's terraforming process is now at 78%. And Mori further notes that Mujin's not even fully focused in their duel, given that the man is also keeping an eye on his bonkers terraforming initiative. Mori then realizes that Mujin's power seems to have no limit. After all, the man's name literally means infinity. Finally, he concludes that Mujin's power doesn't just come from Tathagata. It's more the case that Mujin has gained impeccable combat perception from all the battles and wars he survived in the past. Our hero then continues repeating the sentiment that Mujin's power has become limitless for an extended period of time, all the while taking a beating from the man. On the other hand, Mori has fully committed to this fight, so he tells himself to just stop thinking and keep moving, as he mounts a counterattack with his flaming pole on 98th ice. Meanwhile, Mujin has his own review of Mori's performance. According to him, the Monkey King is different from other warriors in that he never backs down. See, even a master fighter takes a step back in a moment of life or death out of their instinct to live. But not Mori. As Mujin puts it, our hero just keeps on moving towards harm's way dozens and dozens of times. Mujin then admits that he made a mistake thinking that Mori's strong because of his default specs, but now he finally realizes our hero's true strength, wits. And if things aren't too on the nose for you guys, the narrator straight up declares that this duel is a battle between wits and perception. Mujin then goes for another technique called Left Miryang Park Hyaku style Killer Right Buddha Nanjang. This word salad of an ability all boils down to Mujin trying to choke out Mori. Our hero is able to smack away Mujin's hand before he could strangle him to death, and they're pretty much evenly matched at this point. However, the narrator says that the balance between these two combatants is about to be tipped, as Mori continues using his uncanny battle instinct to just keep on moving. Mujin knocks him away with a palm strike, but as always, Mori instantly recovers and lunges at his enemy again. Mujin notices that Mori has continued rushing him 10 times now and wonders if our hero has lost his mind. Meanwhile, Mori digs deep and tells himself he'll hold out even if he dies in the process, as he clashes with Mujin again. Mori blocks the pointy end of Mujin's staff and comes up with the genius move to deflect it a split second later, allowing our hero to hook his enemy's weapon with Yoi and disarm him. This presents Mori with an opening for a fatal strike, so he takes advantage and tries to drive Yoi right in Mujin's face. But Mujin counters with his borrowed power, Longinus, to fend off an attempt to remotely crush our hero. Mori struggles to keep it together, all the while remembering how the pickle he's in is similar to the time he had that fateful fight against Tathagata thousands of years ago. Mori thinks he's about to lose, but then Dewi and Mira jump in and tell their best friend that they're all in this together. Dewi and Mira get ready for another round of fisticuffs with their archenemy, with the Jade Emperor telling them that he'll handle defense, while Mira creates an opening for Mori to strike. Seeing our heroic trio together reminds Mujin of his relationship with Mandok and Mansuk, which is enough to frustrate him and berate our heroes for never quitting. Mori then rushes Mujin again, and they get into another close quarters clash. As before, they're on even footing. That is until our hero gets cheeky and sneakily rams Yoi right into Mujin before he can notice what's happening. Mujin takes a moment to recover, so Mira follows up by using her tam to devour their enemy and tap him within the substance. Dewi then follows up by using his inertia force to stab Mujin with several sharp rocks. And just to make sure Mujin doesn't get back up, Mira commands the tam to eat up Mujin inside them. But even this combo isn't enough to bring down the demigod, as Mujin soon breaks free from the trap. Mori wastes no time to shoot him with another remote Yoi strike, but Mujin telekinetically stops it in its tracks. Mori enlarges Yoi, but it gets blocked again. So our hero decides to get his hands dirty and whip out Second Gun and 177 Centaur for another close quarters clash. Mujin uses his borrowed power to fend off Mori again, but the Monkey King thinks on his feet and launches a bunch of dragon spirits towards their enemy. It works and Mujin is knocked back, but the man recovers once more. Nearby, Dewi and Mira reset to jump into the fray again. While this is happening, the gravitational field of Mujin's new Earth continues to draw in Grand Fortress Nirvana. The good news is that Bongram and Dean have just completed unleashing the Holy Grail's power, which causes a wave of bright light to shoot out of the Ark. Ahan opens her eyes a moment later and realizes that Mori's real power has now been unleashed. Mujin notices this too, while Mori starts to feel his old strength coming back to him. On the other hand, Mujin finally catches on and realizes that Ilpio was the one who set all of this up. A flashback then gives us another classic God of High School exposition dump that explains how our heroes managed to unlock the Holy Grail. In not so many words, Ilpio came up with the idea to use Mandok's energy crystals to gather energy from everyone and transfer it to the Holy Grail to help them bust it open. And by everyone, we mean everyone. As Ilpio puts it, the plan is to charge up the Holy Grail with the life force of anyone they can find. These include world government agents, both dead or alive, their enemies' corpses, even regular people from the original planet Earth. And no, Ilpio's not some realistic politician who's just going to let everyone do the work for him. He includes himself in the list of people the energy stones can suck energy off of. Back to the present, Beck pulls out his trademark Club of Justice and prepares to join the party now that his primary mission to free Mori's power from the Holy Grail is finished. Back inside Mujin's chamber, Dewi pretty much tells their arch-nemesis that it might be too early to call it, but he's about to face off against a max-level character. And right now, Mori has transformed into his original Jin Mori form to bring the beatdown on this insane demigod. Our hero gets right down to business as he lunges at Mujin. Meanwhile, we learn that the terraforming process is now 82% complete. Back to the duel. Mori hits Mujin with Yoi so hard that although the villain is able to block, his arms are broken in the process. Mujin then counters by using his Longinus ability to freeze Mori in place, but our hero summons his dragon armor suits and creates 19 clones of himself, each wielding one of his Yois, to barrage Mujin. In turn, Mujin is forced to temporarily put the terraforming process on hold so that he could defend himself against Mori's salvo. Mujin holds up his broken T-Rex arms and unleashes 100% of Maitreya's power before summoning a technique called 1000 Hands and 1008 Holy Spears, which is exactly as it sounds. Mori and Mujin clash again, and Yongji Park somehow found it relevant to show us the planet Mercury getting destroyed when it gets too close to the sun. Back on the battlefield, Mori and Mujin's clash ends up in a stalemate, as the clones in the 1000 Hands and 1008 Holy Spears tear each other apart. The two warriors get into it at close range again, and Mujin summons what he calls the one and only Holy Spear, while Mori launches several dragon spirits at his enemy. Another clash, another stalemate that sends them both flying on opposite sides. Mori easily recovers and uses his 9 Dragons ability to try and hit Mujin again. Back inside the Ark, we find out that Dean and Bongram are still in the process of squeezing out Mori's power from the Grail. But the 2 Generation X kids are now having a hard time after this whole deal takes a huge toll on their body and the Grail starts to crack. Meanwhile, we learn that Mujin has targeted the Ark to prevent the Holy Grail from fully unleashing Mori's trapped strength using his Longinus skill. Just outside the Ark, Beck digs deep and holds off Longinus to give Dean and Bongram more time to finish their resonance. While back on Earth, Uma strains to hold off the destruction of the world. In the meantime, Mori and Mujin continue to throw hands as our hero summons Ice Pick, while his enemy whips out the Mandala dagger. Mori almost falls for Mujin's trap with the Mirror of All Evils and the trio of Holy Spears, but Dewi and Mira drop in to help their best friend. We also learn that Dewi's left leg is being devoured by Tam from his previous clash with Mujin. The Jade Emperor and Mira then reiterate their game plan. Dewi will provide them with some defense, while Mira creates an opening for Mori. As a matter of fact, these 2 lovebirds are now fully committed to destroying Mujin more than ever. Dewi even says he's willing to give up his left leg if it means beating their archenemy. Meanwhile, Mira's gone completely blind after taking that big hit from Mujin earlier. Regardless, our heroes gather all their remaining energy, as Dewi tells his best friends to just focus on attacking Mujin. Mira then says she'll serve as Mori's hands, while Dewi acts as his feet. All our hero has to do is take point and give them his orders. Our heroes know that this is their last chance to attack Mujin, so they go all out on the villain. The warriors get into an extended close quarters clash that sees Mujin having no choice but to go on the back foot and defend himself. Mujin does manage to get in a few good licks on our heroes along the way, but Mori soon finds an opening to lunge at their archenemy once more and they get into another intense struggle. The battle gets so heated that the entire building they're in explodes in typical God of High School fashion. Meanwhile, back in the Ark, Dean and Bongram continue to pull out all the stops to finish their resonance, while Mujin tries to drop his Mount Ohang technique on Mori in the battlefield. Mori seemingly gets crushed under the weight of Mujin's multi-elemental move, so Dewi picks up the slack and rushes their enemy. This grabs Mujin's attention, allowing Mira to jump in and use a technique called Wolgang Swordsmanship Ultimateness to destroy Mujin's Holy Spears and Spectral Hands. Mori then recovers and decides that it's finally time to bust out the ultimate Dragon Bone weapon in his arsenal, the Yoi that's been infused with Ogre's Yoiji. He then uses it to blow a hole right through Grand Fortress Nirvana's floor before summoning all his dragons to attack Mujin with a technique called Yoi 19th Staff. Mori then follows it up by using another move called 19 Dragons, which is exactly as the name suggests. Back inside the Ark, Dean notices that the Holy Grail can't hold out. Mujin and P's baby mysteriously reaches out its hand and what looks like energy resonance being sent towards the Grail suddenly occurs. The Holy Grail then breaks after that. Back at the Grand Fortress Nirvana, Mori destroys the whole place with his Morijin original Jishuk technique, cleaving the entire floating castle in half. Back at the Ark, a blinding flash of bright light erupts from the spot where the Grail had just been destroyed and disappears in the blink of an eye. While this is happening, we learn that Grand Fortress Nirvana has been totaled and is now crashing towards Mujin's new world. On the bright side, we learn that his most recent clash with Mori has left him with Yoi stuck right inside his chest, as Mujin freefalls towards his new planet. Mori doesn't let this villain off so easily, so our hero rushes toward Mujin and stomps down on one end of the pole stuck in his chest to bury it deeper into his body. However, Mori gets a bit overconfident and starts talking some trash after that, telling Mujin what he promised him earlier, that he was going to smack him in the face. This gives Mujin an opening to use his Longinus ability on Mori, which blows a cross-shaped hole in our hero's torso. In fact, we immediately learn that Mujin supercharged his Longinus strike so much that the hit went right through Mori and towards Earth, which now has a colossal gaping hole shaped like a cross on its surface. Mujin is pleased with himself as he taunts Mori for letting his guard down like he always does. Finally, Part 6 of God of High School's final season ends with Mori and Mujin free-falling toward the new planet that this insane demigod has created. And now it even has a new name, Renewal Earth. And that is the end of this Part 6 video for God of High School final season. It's a very long video, and I hope you guys enjoyed every single moment of it. The next video will be the very last as the God of High School series comes to a close. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more videos like this. As always, we'll see you in the final video.